The young man had lived with his grandfather since childhood, but when he returned home a few days ago, he found his grandfather brutally murdered, yet he showed no sadness. Instead, he seemed unusually excited, not because he was cold-blooded, but because his grandfather had always warned him to hide his true nature from everyone. This time, however, he decided to unleash the evil within him completely. He took up a sickle and single-handedly slaughtered the entire village, simply because all of them might have had something to do with his grandfather's death. But just as he was about to continue searching for the real culprit, his body was kicked away by someone. His instincts told him this man was the murderer who killed his grandfather, but the pressure emanating from the man's body alone left him unable to move. Before he could react, in a flash, the man appeared before him, raised his hand to grip the young man's neck, while his sword pierced through the young man's body. As his consciousness faded, the young man thought he was about to die, but when he awoke again, he found himself imprisoned, though miraculously alive, yet still unable to avenge his grandfather. From the man's words, he learned about the existence of martial arts. If I learn martial arts, perhaps I could defeat him, but do I still have a chance? As he was desperately thinking of a strategy, a thick fog rose in the prison cell. Having been familiar with medicinal herbs since childhood, he immediately recognized the ingredients: white snake root, angelica, valerian root, and strict root. This was a sleeping incense. A moment later, he slowly closed his eyes. Meanwhile, a figure came directly to his cell and unlocked the shackles on his feet, just as the visitor was about to take him away. The young man suddenly opened his eyes, taking advantage of the visitor's shock. He delivered a powerful kick to the person's body, then ran toward the cell exit with all his might. But the next second, a strong numbness swept through his entire body. The man raised his hand and pressed several points on the young man's body, and the young man could no longer move, thrown back into the cell. Upon seeing the visitor's appearance clearly, the young man was suspicious, though the attire was similar to the previous man. This person's left eye lacked several scars. Could they be accomplices trying to eliminate all threats? Suddenly, a gentleman wearing a bamboo hat slowly approached. When he lifted his hat, the young man's expression turned to shock. This person looked identical to him. Who would have thought such a coincidence existed in the world? We have the same face, but our fates are completely different. I am the third young master of Burning Sword Manor, but you are a death row prisoner awaiting execution. However, I will give you a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to become my stand-in, Mujingyun. All you need to do is enjoy the delicacies and beautiful women serving you at the manor, and after everything is done, you'll receive endless wealth. The only condition is that you swallow this poison pill. Looking at the pill placed before his mouth, the young man knew his opportunity had arrived. So he swallowed it without hesitation. Having witnessed the young man swallow the poison, Mujingyun's face revealed a sinister expression. He then ordered the guards to release the young man's pressure points and shackles. Little did he know that he would soon pay for this decision with his life. As they were walking out of the prison cell, the young man took advantage of their inattention and twisted Mujingyun's neck 180 degrees. Now the imposter was dead. Hearing the sound, Guardian Gan turned around. Seeing the body on the ground, his mind went blank, but it was too late, though he quickly realized what happened. He grabbed the young man by the neck. "You madman, you killed the young master. Do you want to die?" The young man showed a demonic smile, knowing that a stand-in was meant to take all the risks for the original. If he had gone with them, he would certainly die. "Actually, you don't want to kill me, otherwise you would have done it already." Hearing the young man's response, Guardian Gan was furious. He raised his hand and slammed the young man to the ground. His dagger was about to pierce the young man. "You think I really won't dare kill you?" Yet the young man remained calm and unconcerned, saying instead, "This is your once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A third young master who has swallowed poison would make the perfect puppet, wouldn't he?" The loyal Guardian Gan was shaken by the young man's words. He snorted coldly and stabbed his sword into the ground. "From now on, you are the real Mu Jinyun." And the young man's revenge would officially begin. Later at Burning Sword Manor, Guardian Gan warned the young man to stay in his room and not leave without permission. "If you dare to play any tricks, I will definitely kill you." With that, he tossed the young man an antidote. "Take one every 12 hours, or you'll die from the poison." In the evening, taking the antidote given by Guardian Gan, the young man felt extremely lucky to have survived despite being stabbed through the chest. As for the one who tried to kill him, he probably thought the young man was already dead. So now he could openly impersonate Mu Jingyun at Burning Sword Manor and learn martial arts to avenge his grandfather. However, to prevent the young man from causing trouble, Guardian Gan specifically assigned his junior disciple, Gu Kan, to monitor him. When Gu Kan learned that the young man had killed Mu Jingyun, he was so shocked his jaw nearly hit the floor. But he had no choice but to follow his senior's instructions and let the plan continue. Meanwhile, Guardian Gan was feeling a headache. As a death row prisoner, the young man had not only killed Mu Jingyun in that situation but also declared he would replace him. Keeping such a person around for even one more day was dangerous, making him consider finding a new master. Gu Kan, however, disagreed, thinking Guardian Gan had become too cautious. A child who couldn't use martial arts wasn't scary. At the same time, the young man began to analyze the events of the past few days. Guardian Gan hadn't told him the reason for needing a stand-in, only leaving someone to monitor him before leaving. And Burning Sword Manor wasn't a place dangerous enough to require a stand-in, so he deduced it would only be used in specific situations. As for Guardian Gan's long silence, perhaps he was already considering changing masters. In moments, the young man had guessed most of Guardian Gan's thoughts. Thinking of this, the young man directly pushed open the door. At this time, Gu Kan was guarding the door, nearly falling asleep. Hearing that the young man wanted to go out on an errand and invited him along, Gu Kan immediately warned him to stay in the room if he didn't want to die. The young man merely laughed coldly, saying no one would know they went out if Gu Kan didn't tell. Seeing him dare to challenge him face to face, Gu Kan pressed the young man against the wall. But the next second, the young man placed one hand on his shoulder, then, imitating Guardian Gan's moves, performed a shoulder throw that slammed Gu Kan to the ground, and raised his hand to press several points on Gu Kan's acupoints. Gu Kan looked at the figure before him in disbelief, asking if he had been hiding his martial arts skills. The young man didn't answer. Instead, showing an even more surprised expression, he had pressed the acupoints exactly as Guardian Gan had done, yet Gu Kan could still move. He immediately pressed his fingers against Gu Kan's back again. Only at this moment did Gu Kan truly realize, learning Guardian Gan's martial arts after seeing it just once, how dangerous this person was. Seeing he was no match for the young man, Gu Kan again threatened him with the poison. "Don't you fear bleeding from 7 orifices and dying in agony?" But the young man was entirely unaffected, merely biting his finger lightly, then feeding his blood into Gu Kan's mouth. Gu Kan completely panicked, rolling around on the ground, trying to spit out the poisoned blood. But it was too late. Meanwhile, the young man spoke again, revealing that he had grown up collecting herbs with his grandfather. Tasting all kinds of poisons, ordinary poisons had no effect on him, and even his blood contained deadly toxins. Therefore, only he could provide the antidote to the poisoned blood he had fed Gukan. Now, tell me about the specific situation at Burning Sword Manor. It turned out that Manor Lord Mu Rendan had been seriously ill for a long time. Even the best doctors were helpless. They couldn't even find the cause. Since the Manor Lord hadn't decided on a successor before this, the 4 young masters of Burning Sword Manor were about to engage in a bloody struggle for the position of Manor Lord. The first young master, Mu Yinghao, was not only dissolute but also cruel and violent, the most incompetent of the 4 brothers. The second young master, Mu Enping, was cunning and treacherous, someone who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. The first madam only favored her eldest son. To ensure he could take the position of Manor Lord, she would use any means necessary. So she invited a sorcerer, ostensibly to exorcise demons for the Manor Lord, but in reality, she'd already conspired with the sorcerer, offering 300 taels as payment for the sorcerer to discover where the Manor Lord's seal and secret manuals were hidden. The doctors strongly opposed such unorthodox methods, but to no avail. Later, the first madam even ordered the Manor Lord's room to be sealed off, allowing no one to approach. Learning of these circumstances, the young man called for Gukan. He wanted to meet this pitiful father. At the same time, the whole plan of the third young master, Mu Jingyun, was completely revealed to him. The real Mu Jingyun wanted his stand-in to appear, allowing the 3 brothers to engage in self-destruction. As the fisherman who benefits from the quarrel between the snipe and the clam, Mu Jingyun would only need to quietly emerge after his brothers died to gain the upper hand and control everything. Unfortunately, the young man had become the biggest change in this plan. On the way to the Manor Lord's room, they passed the training ground, and happened to see the 4th young master, Mu Tian, practicing martial arts. Although he was born to the Manor Lord and a woman from a brothel, he was hardworking, skilled in martial arts, and his character was deeply favored by the Manor Lord. This also became something the first madam absolutely could not tolerate. Seeing Mu Yutian's training method, the young man developed a strong interest in him. He casually asked Gukan if he could kill Guardian Gan after learning martial arts. Hearing this question, Gukan's heart trembled. Could he have already noticed that we planned to abandon him? This guy isn't just smart, he's practically a genius. He swallowed and explained to the young man. The most basic aspect of martial arts is cultivating internal energy, meaning that through breathing techniques, the energy of nature circulates in the body, eventually condensing into internal force. The more internal force accumulated, the stronger one becomes. But internal energy cannot be developed overnight. For a first-class expert like Guardian Gan, at least 30 years of internal force accumulation is needed, so it's very difficult to surpass him in the short term. At this point, Gukan hadn't fully explained, because there's also an optimal period for cultivating internal energy. After the ages of 5 to 9, the body's impurities increase, making it impossible to condense internal force even if one practices. Which means the young man could never surpass Guardian Gan in his lifetime. Seeing Gukan's smug expression, the young man had already guessed what Gukan was thinking. So he turned and touched his cheek, saying, "Your eyeballs look so cute when they move, I'm tempted to gouge them out." But the young man didn't pursue the matter further, instead smiling and asking, "Why don't you become my man from now on?" Currently, he couldn't kill Guardian Gan, nor could he win him over to his side, so he had no good strategy for the moment. Thinking of this, he turned and asked if there was any grudge between Mu Jingyun and the 4th young master. Learning that 2 years ago, Mu Jingyun had insulted the 4th young master's mother as a whore, and had been beaten badly for it. The young man couldn't help but laugh loudly, saying the 4th young master was quite decent. At least he didn't crush Mu Jingyun's limbs. With that, he turned and walked toward the Manor Lord's room. Meanwhile, the sorcerer had wrapped the entire room with red thread and copper coins, while the Manor Lord lay unresponsive on the bed. From his heart spread black lines of evil spirits. Though it looked like poisoning, it was actually the result of being consumed by evil energy. Fortunately, his years of martial arts practice had sustained him until now, but having been under the evil influence for too long, even if the sorcerer had great powers, there was only a 50% chance of success. However, his goal wasn't to save the Manor Lord's life. As long as he could complete the first madam's commission, what did the Manor Lord's life matter to him? So he held a brush in one hand and drew a ghost talisman. Then, with a loud command, the talisman was placed directly on the Manor Lord's chest. Energy surged wildly from the talisman. As the sorcerer chanted incantations and formed hand seals, the evil energy around the Manor Lord scattered. Gradually, his eyes turned red, as if something was about to possess him. Even the sorcerer's body was thrown back. The situation was momentarily out of control. At this moment, the young man pushed open the door. "Father, I've come to pay my respects." The sorcerer was interrupted by the sudden intrusion. Without time to confirm who had entered, he let out a cry of surprise. "Get out immediately or the Manor Lord's life will be in danger." But the young man acted as if he hadn't heard, checking the Manor Lord's condition himself. At this moment, the evil energy around the Manor Lord surged. The possessing evil spirit grew stronger, and the situation completely spiraled out of control. The Manor Lord's body twisted as he floated in mid-air. In desperation, the sorcerer quickly asked the 2 to help hold him down. He placed a talisman directly on the Manor Lord's forehead, still muttering continuously. However, the evil energy around the Manor Lord grew increasingly powerful, and the small talisman was unable to suppress it. As the evil spirit began to travel up the Manor Lord's arm toward Gukan. At this critical moment, the young man made a decisive move. With one sword strike, he cut off the Manor Lord's arm. This scene completely stunned everyone present. The sorcerer raised his hand and placed another talisman on the severed arm, barely stabilizing the situation. But by now, the sorcerer was planning his escape. Just as he was about to gather his things and flee, a long sword was placed against his neck. The young man had seen through his intentions. Gukan wanted to say something but was stopped by the young man. "Is this why the Manor Lord has been bedridden?" The sorcerer was already trembling with fear from the young man's actions, able only to defend himself repeatedly, saying the Manor Lord was possessed by an evil spirit. And the situation was far from over. If they wasted more time, the Manor Lord could die at any moment. But the young man's face still showed an unconcerned expression. The sorcerer couldn't help but shudder, asking if the young master also wanted the Manor Lord to die. When he heard this also, the young man understood everything, asking if the first madam had instructed him to do this. The sorcerer knew he could no longer conceal anything and revealed everything. After hearing the truth, Gukan couldn't help but wipe his cold sweat, imagining his fate if the first young master obtained the position of Manor Lord. For his own future, he repeatedly explained to the young man, "We must save the Manor Lord. If he dies, the first madam will definitely place the blame on you." The sorcerer also chimed in, saying he had a way to save the Manor Lord. At this point, the young man fell into deep thought. but soon he showed a strange smile. He didn't let the sorcerer save the Manor Lord. Instead, he told him to continue asking about the whereabouts of the seal and secret manuals. Everyone was terrified by his decision, but the young man offered no explanation, leaving the sorcerer no choice but to take out a puppet. If the evil spirit continued to interact with the Manor Lord, he would truly die. So this puppet could serve as a substitute for the Manor Lord. With that, the sorcerer tied the puppet to the severed arm, again forming hand seals and chanting incantations. The evil spirit clinging to the severed arm transformed into a ghostly hand, gripping the puppet tightly. Meanwhile, the Manor Lord let out agonized howls. Since the evil energy was too powerful, continuing to seal it would break the existing seal. At that point, the third young master would certainly not spare him. Realizing this, the sorcerer steeled himself and quickly made a decision that would kill two birds with one stone. He asked Gukan to leave first, citing that outsiders shouldn't be present. Then he muttered a few more words. Under his control, the Manor Lord slowly revealed where the secret manuals and seal were hidden, inside the ding-shaped stone door beneath the pharmacy. As soon as he finished speaking, the puppet shattered under the corrosion of the evil energy. The sorcerer hurriedly called for the young man to cut the red thread. However, at the moment, the red thread was cut. The evil spirit began crawling toward the young man along the ground. Only at this moment did the sorcerer reveal his sinister expression, as the ghost hand surrounded the young man's body. The sorcerer placed a talisman on the young man's forehead. Thus, he had both completed his commission and could blame everything on the young man. What he didn't know was that this action completely released the purest evil hidden deep in the young man's heart. Now aware of being tricked, the evil spirit unleashed all its fury on the young man. It wanted to completely possess this body. Meanwhile, the young man entered a hallucination. The scene of his grandfather's tragic death appeared before him. This time, he cried heartbreakingly. He finally understood how important his grandfather was to him. After sensing the longing in the young man's heart, the evil spirit created a world without regrets for him. Seeing his dead grandfather standing before him again, the young man could no longer contain his excitement. He rushed forward and embraced his grandfather. Just when the evil spirit thought the young man would forever be immersed in this happiness, the young man's expression suddenly changed. He turned around and grabbed the evil spirit's skull with one hand. "You've made me angry, daring to use my grandfather's death to toy with me." The evil spirit showed an expression of disbelief, not understanding how the young man had discovered it. But before it could think further, a bone-chilling coldness swept through its entire being. This was the purest evil that even evil spirits were unwilling to approach. "You think my happiness is bringing my grandfather back to life? No, what I want is to kill the murderer who took my grandfather's life." At this moment, feeling the young man's overwhelming murderous intent, the evil spirit broke free from the grip and fled, wondering if these were truly emotions a living person could possess. Meanwhile, his grandfather's voice echoed in the young man's mind. "Do you know why I named you Zheng? It was because I hoped you would be like your name, a kind and upright person." By now, the evil spirit had run for who knows how long, finally arriving at the deepest part of the young man's heart. On the vast grassland stood only one sealed gate. Though it didn't know what this was, the evil spirit decided to open the gate and devour the young man's heart completely. However, the moment the sealing talismans were torn from the gate, everything around gradually became shrouded in black mist. The evil spirit's body was consumed bit by bit under the black mist. It struggled to escape, but it was too late. With a despairing cry, the evil spirit was completely dragged into the endless abyss. At the same time, the young man suddenly opened his eyes. The evil energy on his body instantly filled the entire room. The sorcerer looked back and immediately showed an expression of terror. The young man casually tore off the talisman from his forehead. Streams of black mist continuously poured from his palms. He uttered one phrase, "Demon Monk." The black mist slowly condensed, finally taking the form of a figure. The sorcerer looked at everything before him in horror. This wasn't an ordinary vengeful spirit, but a higher-level evil spirit. Before he could react, at the young man's command, the demon monk attacked him furiously. Although the sorcerer barely blocked this attack, he was completely stunned by the young man's actions. He could actually command an evil spirit like a servant. Evil spirits were absolute disasters for humans. But before he could understand, the evil spirit's hand reached for him again. In panic, the sorcerer quickly grabbed the nearby sword. But against a demon returned from hell, his figure seemed so insignificant. How could mere mortal objects withstand it? Countless tentacles grabbed at his body. The sorcerer continuously begged for mercy. But the young man showed no compassion, saying, "Since you heard about the seal and secret manuals, I cannot let you live." And so, the sorcerer was dragged into the depths of hell amid endless terror. Only at the last moment did he understand that from the beginning, he had been merely the young man's prey. Moments later, Gukan returned to the room. Seeing the sorcerer's horrific death, he couldn't help but shudder. Under the young man's arrangement, he set up the room to make it appear as if the sorcerer had cut off the Manor Lord's arm and then tried to kill him. But Gukan worried that such a simple trick wouldn't fool the first madam. The young man didn't hesitate at all. He directly raised the sword and stabbed it into his own thigh. This scene made Gukan feel a chill down his spine. He hadn't expected the young man to be so ruthless even toward himself. The fear in his heart grew stronger. This was not someone he could provoke. At that moment, a figure suddenly burst in. It was Zhang Minggren, the inner hall master of Burning Sword Manor. Originally, he and Manor Lord Mu Rendan were brothers who had gone through life and death together, and 19 years ago, he had sworn loyalty to the Manor Lord. But now, for the future of Burning Sword Manor, he had inexplicably agreed to the first madam's request, thinking that leaving for a while wouldn't cause any problems. He never expected to return to such a scene. He angrily questioned what the two had done to the Manor Lord. Gukan hurriedly explained that it was a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the young man pretended to be weak. When he tried to say something, he collapsed to the ground with a thud. The confused Zhang Minggren grabbed Gukan and began questioning him. Gukan was about to say something but saw the sinister smile on the young man's face, immediately abandoning any other thoughts. He understood the young man was surely acting now and could only explain everything according to the young man's arrangement. Later, the young man lay in the pharmacy of Burning Sword Manor. The herbal scent around him felt incredibly familiar. Thinking about how he would soon obtain the secret manuals and the seal, he felt considerably relieved. Though these items were beneath the pharmacy, there were too many people around now, so he decided to look for them at night. At this time, Gukan entered the room with bandaged hands. Following the young man's instructions, he had obtained 2 books from the sorcerer's body. One was The Various Schools of Yin-Yang, and the other was Strange Occurrences and Introduction. To destroy evidence, the first madam had ordered all the sorcerer's possessions burned. These were secretly taken by Gukan before they were destroyed. Gukan didn't understand why the young man wanted these books, but the young man didn't answer. he simply raised his hand and pointed out the window, asking if Gu-kan could see anything there. Gu-kan looked out the window for a long time but couldn't see anything. Little did he know that a ghost was floating outside the window, and only the young man could see its figure, just when Zheng thought everything was going according to plan. The first madam suddenly visited the pharmacy. Seeing her arrival, Gu-kan and Zheng were both surprised. Gu-kan hurriedly bowed, but Zheng remained seated on the bed, claiming he couldn't stand due to his thigh injury. Gu-kan was sweating nervously at this behavior. As someone from a martial arts family, the first madam was not only skilled in martial arts but also cunning, more dangerous than the eldest son Mu Yinghao. Even Guardian Gan had warned to be extra cautious around her. After scanning the room, the first madam suddenly punched Zheng's leg. The intense pain made Zheng involuntarily groan. Gu-kan wanted to step forward to stop her, but was met with a sword at his neck. The first madam looked at Zheng with a smile, immediately seeing that his injury was self-inflicted. She hadn't expected Zheng would even harm himself to conceal the truth. You may have fooled the inner hall master, but you can't fool me. You should know that a powerful sorcerer would never be affected by his own spells during rituals, yet you try to deceive me with such tricks. With that, the first madam slapped Zheng across the face again. His small body was instantly sent flying. The first madam shook her hand and continued to pressure him, asking what exactly he had heard in the room. Hearing this, Zheng was silent for a moment. Then he burst into wild laughter. The first madam thought he had lost his mind, but the next second, Zheng's expression turned cold. He uttered the phrase, "Demon monk." A ghostly figure suddenly appeared behind him and rushed toward the first madam. The first madam felt something pass over her body, while the maid beside her was grabbed by the throat by the demon monk. Her entire body floated in midair, struggling desperately. Seeing this, the first madam recalled the sorcerer's horrific death. Before she could think further, Zheng's voice came from behind her. "If you want to obtain the secret manuals and seal, you should negotiate terms with me properly, rather than threatening me." At this moment, the first madam was clearly panicked, about to say something, but Zheng didn't give her any chance. "Actually, I don't want the position of Manor Lord, but since you're forcing me, I'll have to tell the second brother about the secret manuals and seal. Or tell the fourth brother. After all, his martial arts foundation is good. It would be a nice gift for reconciliation." The first madam was so angered by these words that her face turned green, but she could do nothing against Zheng. Finally, she could only leave in a rage. Back in her quarters, the first madam grew angrier the more she thought about it. The usually timid little demon today dared to openly snatch her things. She suspected that Zheng had been hiding his true nature all along. At this point, the maid beside her suggested, "Why not kill him before the third young master uses his evil magic?" The first madam didn't agree, fearing the secret manuals and seal might fall into someone else's hands. But she didn't want to be led by the nose either, so she told the maid to notify Ghost Sound Pavilion, saying the sorcerer was dead. By then, the little boy wouldn't have it easy either. That night in the pharmacy, Zheng sat on the ground reading the books left by the sorcerer. According to the records, after death, people could become vengeful spirits or even evil spirits, and depending on various conditions, they would form different levels of evil spirits. The first type is called red spirit, which can only cause living beings to feel a slight chill. The second type is orange spirit, which can already possess human bodies and cause physical discomfort. As for the third type, yellow spirit, it is already powerful enough to kill using evil energy. Zheng's demon monk belonged to the yellow spirit category. But from the previous situation, it seemed the demon monk couldn't harm the first madam, suggesting that the ability to cause harm was closely related to the target's strength. He had just tested the demon monk's power on Gu-kan with good results, but it was still not enough to deal with the first madam and Guardian Gan. So he needed to find a more powerful evil spirit as soon as possible. The fourth type, green spirit. A type of evil spirit that had existed for decades, capable of causing confusion, an extremely dangerous entity. At this moment, the demon monk found the entrance to the underground chamber. It was time to retrieve the secret manuals and seal. After walking for who knows how long, Zheng finally reached the end of the ladder. Before his eyes were 4 stone doors labeled Jia, Yi, Bing, and Ding. The Ding-shaped stone door was his target. However, as soon as he entered the room, he triggered a mechanism. A huge rock fell from above. Then arrows shot wildly at him from all directions. With his agile movements, Zheng easily avoided the attacks, but the traps weren't over. A massive pillar crashed down again. Zheng leaped up, narrowly escaping. The continuous traps made Zheng realize something. Besides the secret manuals and seal, there must be something even more important stored here. After experiencing countless traps, Zheng finally reached the innermost part of the stone chamber. This is an extremely symmetrical room. From the traces of life above, it seems someone often practices here, but Zheng didn't care about that at all. He successfully found a wooden box on the table. Inside were the sword techniques and mental cultivation methods of burning sword manner. Zheng unhesitatingly stuffed them into his pocket. But then he thought that there should be some other things here. At this moment, a strange box caught his attention. Judging from the dragging marks on the floor, it must have been deliberately dragged here. When he opened the box, a floorboard sealed with a yellow talisman appeared. Without thinking, he opened the floorboard. There was another small box inside, still with a yellow talisman attached. Zheng thought for a moment and tore off the talisman. Suddenly, an ominous aura approached, and even the lantern nearby went out without any wind, and in the box was a book made of human skin. Although it was wrapped with prayer beads, one could still clearly feel the eerie aura emanating from the book. It seems like he found a treasure. Meanwhile, in another part of Burning Sword Manor, drums and gongs were being played in celebration. And standing in the center was the second young master Muan Ping. He was celebrating, because today he was one step closer to the position of Manor Lord. And this was thanks to the help of one person. That person was Guard Gan, who had disappeared for many days. Though Guard Gan had a flattering expression, he had already guessed the second young master's thoughts, and accepted his invitation after dealing with Mu and Ping courteously, but without sincerity. But after the banquet, the second young master confirmed again with Guard Gan whether Mu Jingyun had truly lost his martial arts. To this, Guard Gan gave an affirmative answer. In his view, the real Mu Jingyun was already dead, and that imposter indeed couldn't practice martial arts, so this wasn't exactly a lie. Besides, if people knew he had failed to protect his master, leading to his master's death, he would certainly suffer from others. So he decided to pledge allegiance to the second young master with the imposter Mu Jingyun's life. But the second young master didn't let down his guard easily. Although that kid was originally a wimp, Now he lost his martial arts. That means one less opponent. But I'm still curious about how exactly he lost his martial arts. Faced with the second young master's skepticism, Granddad was startled, thinking about how to respond. The second young master spoke again. To alleviate Granddad's concerns, he told him not to worry. Even if it was your dereliction of duty, I won't hold you responsible for it. But since both the two men were cunning, so how could they easily give others their secrets? Granddad bowed again and stated he couldn't disclose it, and guaranteed it would not implicate the second young master. The second young master verbally expressed his trust, yet subtly mentioned that Granddad should be an assassin from that place. When he heard that place, Granddad's body trembled. Originally, he thought the second young master was just an inexperienced kid, but he didn't expect the other party had already investigated him thoroughly, instantly making the situation more delicate. However, the second young master didn't stop there. He began pressing harder. Aren't these also unspeakable secrets? Granddad was frightened and hurriedly denied. Seeing that Granddad was completely under his control, the second young master finally relented. He didn't say anything more, just let Granddad leave first. But things weren't over. The second young master still had great doubts about the information provided by Granddad. Then he ordered his subordinate to find out Granddad's intentions and Mu Jingyun's real situation. The subordinate felt very confused about this, just to confirm whether Mu Jingyun had lost his martial arts. The second young master laughed coldly, then crippled those useless legs of his. Meanwhile, in the medicine hall's basement, the young man has scrutinized the ancient human skin book for a long time. He could clearly feel the pulsation transmitted from his fingertips, as if some powerful energy was churning inside. Although it wasn't a living thing, the young man knew this ancient book was extraordinary. Now he couldn't wait to untie the prayer beads sealed on it. But suddenly, a black mist rose behind him. The demon monk's figure gradually appeared, just as the young man was about to ask what happened. The demon monk's expression changed drastically. He was just glancing at the human skin book in the young man's hand. He was scared into a cold sweat, trembling all over. Seeing this, the young man revealed an excited expression. Even the demon monk feared the existence of this book, which seems he had indeed obtained something extraordinary. But soon he put away this excitement, because he had sent the demon monk and Gukan to keep a lookout. Yet now the demon monk came back to find him. That means someone must have come, and he wanted to see exactly who these troublemakers were. At this moment outside the medicine hall, the assassins sent by the second young master were already hiding in the trees. They discovered that Gukan, who should be closely protecting his master, was keeping watch outside. The assassin knew the third young master must be concealing something, so he sneaked into the room while the young man was sleeping. Just as he wanted to check whether the third young master had truly lost his martial arts, he was surprised to see the secret manuals of Burning Sword Manor placed on the table. He was instantly attracted. After flipping through a few pages, he found they were genuine. The assassin's hands began to tremble. If he gave these to the second young master, the position of Manor Lord would undoubtedly belong to him. But at this moment, the young man's figure had already silently appeared behind him. A hand fiercely grabbed his skull, violently smashing it onto the table. 1, 2, 3. The young man showed a cold expression. What are you doing in my bedroom? Are you also here to sleep? The assassin was immediately shocked. He was actually outmaneuvered by a young boy. But before he could say anything, the young man's hand movements became more violent, and soon the assassin lost consciousness. And when the assassin opened his eyes again, he was already hanging upside down from the beam. The young man smiled viciously. The cold dagger stabbed fiercely into the floor. I think we should have a good talk. After the young man subdued the assassin, Gukan, hearing the commotion, quickly pushed open the door. Finding the man lying on the ground, he immediately recognized him as the second young master's confidant, Zhao Yichang. The second young master always cherished talents, so he advised the young man not to act rashly. But the young man was indifferent, carrying Zhao Yichang on his back as he left. And when Zhao Yichang woke up, he was already hanging upside down above the beam. But when he faced the young man's piercing gaze, he still arrogantly threatened, claiming he was the second young master's man. If he knew you treated me like this, the second young master would definitely make you pay for this. After speaking, he even ordered the young man to hand over the secret manuals quickly. And at that time, I will put in a good word with the second young master. Perhaps I can even save your life. To this, the young man only smiled slightly, then took out a dagger from his pocket. It seems my second brother really values his subordinates, and even in such a predicament, you can still be so arrogant relying on his influence? Zhang untied the rope when he was speaking. Zhao Yichang thought the other side had given in. But unexpectedly in the next second, there was an extra finger in the young man's hand. The young man showed a cold expression and asked Zhao Yichang whose finger this was. Zhao Yichang was terrified yet confused. This was clearly his finger, but why didn't he feel any pain? This was because the young man had already used anesthetic powder on him. Those who are affected won't feel anything in their body for 2 hours. Hearing this, Zhao Yichang immediately panicked. Alright, from now on, for every question I ask, if you don't answer, I'll cut off one of your fingers every second. First, what was my second brother's purpose in sending you here? At this moment, Zhao Yichang was too frightened to react, and in this moment of hesitation his fingers were cut off one by one like vegetables, instantly leaving Zhao Yichang with one finger left. Just as the young man was about to cut off the last thumb, Zhao Yichang finally reacted from his fear. He hurriedly explained that he was sent to check if he had truly lost his martial arts. Hearing this, the young man fell into deep thought. He speculated that Granddad must have pledged allegiance to his second brother. Then he asked again, was it Granddad who said so? Zhao Yichang gave an affirmative answer. Looking at this meticulous young man before him, Zhao Yichang hadn't expected that with just a few words he had seen through Granddad's betrayal. He couldn't help but wonder if this was all their scheme from the beginning, but now he couldn't think about so much. Because he sensed a strong killing intent from the young man. He cried out desperately begging to be spared, and declared his undying loyalty to the third young master. He was even willing to do anything for the third young master with his life. At this moment, the young man changed his previous vicious expression. Zhang revealed a kind smile. I happen to have something I want to ask you, can you help me now? Zhao Yichang heard these words as if he had grabbed a straw to save his life, hurriedly thanking the young man for sparing his life. As long as it's the third young master's order, I will definitely do it. As soon as the words fell, a dagger went straight through his neck. At the same time, the young man looked coldly at the man before him. He said coldly, then let me borrow your blood. The reason why the young man did this was to remove the prayer bead sealed on the magic book. Before this, he had learned from the ancient yin-yang text that righteousness can seal evil spirits. In other words, the blood of a wrongfully killed person might be able to break the seal. So he dripped all of Zhao Yichang's blood onto the magic book. In a moment, the prayer beads began to shatter piece by piece. Just as the young man was pondering what kind of existence was sealed in this book, the blood in the box began to churn violently. Then it began to spread around. At the same time, a cocoon formed from countless blood energies appeared above the magic book, and as the thing inside broke out of the cocoon, the entire space was enveloped by a sea of blood. A slender jade leg stepped out. A graceful woman in red clothes walked straight towards the young man. The aura emanating from her was not something a green spirit could achieve. According to the ancient yin-yang text, ghost spirits had a 5th level, cyan spirit. At this moment, the young man didn't know whether he was lucky or unlucky. Just then the woman spoke the word, kneel. A mysterious pressure swept over. The young man's body was forcibly pressed to the ground, unable to move. Fool human, surrender your soul to me. As a vengeful spirit dead for over 100 years, a cyan spirit level ghost would need dozens of people to subdue. At this moment, the young man slowly got up. He finally personally experienced why the book described it as such, indeed a very dangerous existence. Seeing the young man before her still had the strength to rise, the woman raised her eyebrows, becoming interested in him. The young man showed no intention of giving up resistance, even teasing that she was just a ghost spirit without a body, unable to do anything. Since you want my body so badly, then come and take it by force. However, as soon as the words fell, the red-clothed woman merely raised her hand lightly. A blood surge suddenly erupted from the ground, forming a sharp blade. It directly pierced the young man's abdomen, leaving a deep hole. The young man collapsed, but the red-clothed woman didn't stop her actions. The second blood spike rushed out. She mercilessly destroyed half of the young man's face. The young man spat blood, and the intense pain made his body tremble involuntarily, but he never submitted. Seeing this, the woman was extremely shocked. He is such a fragile human. Wouldn't it be better to just offer up his soul? Yet the young man before her still stood. This kid was not an ordinary person. So she waved her hands again. She thrown the young man violently onto the ceiling beam. Little boy, I have a proposal. As long as you're willing to surrender your soul, I will fulfill one wish for you. Faced with the red-clothed woman's proposal, the young man was confused. She clearly had absolute advantage. Why she made such a request? The red-clothed woman explained that if they continued fighting, it might harm the young man's soul, which would benefit neither of them. If you choose to refuse, I will kill you without mercy, and then replace you by another soul. Hearing this, the young man said he indeed had a wish. This made the red-clothed woman immediately excited, eagerly asking if someone had betrayed him or killed his beloved family. No matter who it is, I can make them vanish. However, the young man sneered, my wish is for you to shut up and obediently become my shikigami. These words completely enraged the red-clothed woman. She immediately decided to let this foolish fellow taste the feeling of having his bones cut and flesh sliced. The red-clothed woman waved her hands again. Countless blood spikes which were like bronze arrows shot towards the young man. They instantly tore his body into pieces. At the same time, the young man's soul seemed to sink into an endless sea of blood. His body kept sinking, deeper and deeper. But the surrounding sea of blood was different from the blood he had encountered before. Previously, those fresh blood were full of vitality, heat, and temperature, which were the aura of life. But now what he touched was only the coldness of death. At this moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. The illusion was thus easily broken. Numerous cracks suddenly appeared. The barrier instantly shattered. A terrifying shockwave sent the red-clothed woman flying. The young man walked out of the illusion without any injury. The red-clothed woman's face was full of disbelief. She couldn't accept that the young man before her could easily break her illusion, but she was still unwilling to give up. She waved her hand again, and then a blood-colored butterfly materialized. It floated slowly towards the young man, and when the blood-colored butterfly approached him, a blood mark was cut on his face. However, the young man didn't even blink, still standing there calmly. Now the red-clothed woman was shocked again. Her illusion, even first-class sorcerers might not be able to break it. Yet the young man did it so easily. Could this be an innate talent? At this moment, the young man suddenly burst into laughter. The laughter made the red-clothed woman gnash her teeth. Even if you successfully broke the illusion, do you think you can change the current situation? The young man coldly responded that he had just remembered something quite interesting. Hearing this, the red-clothed woman was obviously anxious, and when she saw the human skin magic book that had sealed her, she knew the young boy had already known her weakness. Indeed, the more ancient a spirit is, the more it needs a medium to inhabit, and this book was precisely her medium. And at this moment, the young man opened his mouth and began to frantically tear at the book skin. At the same time, bloody marks appeared on the woman's body. She was astonished. Power began to scatter. She never thought this guy would tear the book skin, because this book was full of demonic energy. Even first-class sorcerers couldn't destroy it. They could only barely seal it. Yet now, it was torn by this kid. The red-clothed woman lunged at the young man like a madwoman, tightly gripping his neck. In her heart was only one thought, to end this young man's life quickly. But the young man was still chewing the book skin, and he was puzzled about why the woman didn't directly take away the human skin book, but actually he had already seen through the truth. The red-clothed woman couldn't touch this eerie book. The red-clothed woman gritted her teeth in anger, threatening the young man to spit out the book immediately. However, the young man unhesitatingly swallowed it. At the same time, the blood energy in his body began to surge wildly. His body seemed about to split apart like the first time he ate the poisonous herbs. But now the young man was feeling the deep anger in this ghost spirit's heart, an anger that surpassed the pain of the flesh. Just like him, yearning to take revenge on someone, that was a fire of hatred. Now the red-clothed woman kept grumbling that the young man was crazy. Her hands tightened around the young man's throat, so the young man immediately spat blood. At this moment when their eyes met, the red-clothed woman's memories rushed into the young man's mind like a flood. The next second, the young man found himself in a completely unfamiliar environment. Around him were corpses everywhere and rivers of blood. The heavily wounded red-clothed woman was struggling to hold on. She tore off her clothes, tightly binding her hands and sword together. She used the sword tip to point directly at the man on the throne. Although the young man couldn't hear what they were saying, he could clearly feel the raging anger in the red-clothed woman's heart. The man on the throne looked down at the red-clothed woman. This made the red-clothed woman even more angry, and then she rushed towards this man with all her might. In the moment of their fierce battle, just one round, the man's palm penetrated the red-clothed woman's chest. He even dug out her heart. The red-clothed woman fell helplessly at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes filled with endless despair. In the end, she could only watch as countless shadows wielded weapons, stabbing into her body one by one. The young man witnessed all of this. In the end, the woman in red didn't even leave a complete body. Thus, she was made into this eerie human skin magic book. At the same time, the young man suddenly awoke from the memory. He was surprised to find that a red line had somehow appeared on his chest, and it was tightly connected to the red-clothed woman. With a cry, tears gushed from the woman's eyes like a broken dam. She had actually become the young man's shikigami. Anger instantly consumed her rationality. In her rage, she grabbed the young man's neck, ordering him to immediately break the contract with her. But the next second, a deep mark appeared on her neck. A sudden suffocation instantly swept through her entire body. She was both angry and annoyed but helpless. Finally, she could only turn away angrily, hiding aside to sulk. And this scene in the young man's eyes immediately made him understand. So a Shikigami shares pain with its master. This reminded him of the demon monk. After enduring so much pain before, what was happening to him now? Outside the room, the demon monk was pitifully standing there. Everything that had happened before had been mapped onto him, but without the young man's order, he could only silently endure the pain. Meanwhile, the red-clothed woman gradually calmed down, and they became awkward. Seeing that she didn't want to pay attention to him, the young man took the initiative to ask, "Since we'll be together from now on, shouldn't we exchange names? I'm Mu Jingyun. What about you?" However, the red-clothed woman still said nothing. The young man had to use his last trick. "Alright then, since that's the case, I'll call you Red Golden Beetle from now on." The red-clothed woman was both panicked and angry, screaming, "If the young man was crazy, kid, you dare to trifle with me." Hearing this, the young man laughed heartily, thinking his trick had worked, so he teased her. "It seems you don't like it." The red-clothed woman was rendered speechless by the young man, but her proud nature still made her unwilling to reveal her identity. "You worms don't deserve to know my name." The young man couldn't help but laugh, and finally had to casually give the red-clothed woman a name. According to the level of ghost spirits, she was now a cyan spirit. "So I'll call you Chinger from now on." The red-clothed woman snorted coldly, turning her head away again. The young man sighed helplessly. He didn't expect this woman's self-esteem to be so strong, but he couldn't defeat her by force. It was really troublesome. It seemed he could only slowly coax her. A moment later, the young man turned his attention to the human skin magic book. "Chinger, do you know what's in it?" The red-clothed woman still had an indifferent attitude, waving her hands to indicate she was busy and not to talk to her. The teenager had no choice but to look through the contents himself. Inside were all symbols written in blood. Although they were chaotic, they made the young man feel interested. His serious manner also caught the red-clothed woman's attention. She thought he was just casually looking, but in the next second, the young man accurately read out the incantation on it. And the moment the incantation was read out, a strange power continuously flowed into the young man's body. The hand holding the magic book actually stuck to the human skin. The red-clothed woman was shocked. She couldn't believe how the young man did it. "How do you know the ritual of attachment?" The young man was puzzled. Just as he was feeling confused, a black energy suddenly appeared, beginning to corrode his body. The red-clothed woman sensed trouble and hurriedly exclaimed, "Kid, quickly hold your breath, empty your mind, don't think about anything." The young man followed the instructions to concentrate. Gradually, the strange black energy stabilized. At the same time, with a thud, the magic book stuck to his hand also fell to the ground. The red-clothed woman was greatly shocked. So easily breaking the distorted ritual of attachment, a guy who couldn't practice martial arts actually had this ability. At this moment, she showed a rare smile. In her life, she had not seen this scene, but unexpectedly after death, she had the fortune to witness it. This young man was indeed a prodigy. Having escaped danger, the young man slumped to the ground, not understanding what had just happened. "It was your technique that lost control. There was a problem with your breathing during the process." Hearing the woman's explanation, the young man still teased, "Now you're finally willing to talk to me seriously." The woman hurriedly explained that she was just afraid he would mess up and implicate her. "So what exactly is the ritual of attachment?" "It's a method that can generate attraction through the energy within the body." The young man was even more confused. "Why did I feel stomach pain and blood vessels tightening?" "That's because you didn't use the ritual of attachment correctly. It caused the internal retrograde flow, making your breath extremely chaotic." After saying this, the red-clothed woman directed the young man to arrange Zhao Yichang's corpse properly. "You can do what you did before on this person." The young man chanted the incantation. A powerful attraction appeared on his palm again, but it was different from before. This time, he felt a warm energy, and it was flowing along his blood vessels towards his dantian. "It seems you've grasped the mystery. This is the ritual of attachment, which can absorb all things. Even internal energy is no exception." The young man was quite shocked by this. Is this the internal energy Guken talked about? Internal energy takes a very long time to cultivate. If by this method, wouldn't he be able to quickly become stronger by absorbing others' internal energy? Just when he thought he was about to become invincible, the internal energy he had just absorbed suddenly dispersed. It turns out that the cultivation of internal energy needs to be matched with special breathing methods, so that the dantian can firmly grasp it. Because the internal energy condensed this way has a special property, not easily mixing with others' internal energy. In other words, wanting to condense internal energy through the word art clearly wouldn't work. The young man felt disappointed, but the woman advised him not to be discouraged. The word art is useful enough, after all. This is just the foundation of the thought-shattering 8 techniques. Even learning just one of them can let you feel its endless wonder. Although the internal energy you absorb will immediately dissipate, you can still condense it to your palm through the energy channeling formula. These words left the young man confused. It turns out the energy channeling formula was just to guide the mind to produce imaginary heart images. As long as this can be done, the internal energy can be condensed to the palm. The red-clothed woman believed the young man couldn't do it because for beginners, without the energy channeling formula, even with extraordinary talent it would be useless. However, things are always unexpected. Without any warning, the internal energy that had just dissipated now slowly condensed towards the young man's palm. With one punch, that thick beam was easily broken into 2 sections. This scene completely shocked the red-clothed woman. In her life, she had seen countless prodigies, but this was the first time she saw such an outstanding child. A complete martial arts novice did actually perform the first technique of breaking thought without a formula. Now the young man was immersed in the power of that punch. No wonder everyone wants to learn martial arts. Once you learn this, killing people becomes much easier. These words again surprised the woman greatly. This kid was not just talented, he had even seen through the essence of martial arts, which is how to effectively kill opponents. And at this moment, the young man eagerly asked again, "What is the second of the 8 techniques of breaking thought?" The woman was about to answer, but suddenly thought of something, then turned her head away with a cinder looking, "I almost got tricked by you again. I will never help you." She just couldn't help but let it slip earlier. Now she finally understood why those old guys always talked about wanting to take disciples. Seeing the woman again showing an indifferent attitude, the young man felt somewhat disappointed. He had originally planned to ask about the black energy on his hand. But given the current situation, even if he asked now, she probably wouldn't answer. It would be better to explore slowly by himself. Meanwhile, on the other side, Stone Lady's guard Hu Yin arrived at the Ghost Shadow Pavilion. But as soon as she entered the room, a pile of sage statues appeared before her eyes. It sent a little chill down her spine. Just as she was about to speak, the candlestick beside her inexplicably lit up on its own. Everything around exuded an eerie aura at all times. She quickly reported that the sorcerer had been killed by the third young master, and she stated that if they were willing to accept the commission to kill the third young master, the lady would additionally increase the reward by 400 taels. But when she finished speaking, there was still silence all around, only the candlestick extinguished without wind. It seems it was accepted. Hu Yin immediately turned and left. The room was clearly empty, but she always felt a pair of eyes staring at her from behind. This feeling made her feel terrified. After Hu Yin left the previously empty room, suddenly several figures appeared. They held magical staffs and wore veils. They all gathered around the sorcerer's corpse. Based on Hu Yin's description, they quickly confirmed that the third young master should have used ghost spirits, and it was a yellow spirit level vengeful ghost. But they were puzzled. Vengeful ghosts couldn't become Shikigami, meaning this person would be quite dangerous. Then the pavilion master softly said, "One of you set out immediately to kill this third young master." At this moment in Burning Sword Manor, the young man woke up and instructed Gu Kan to bring a fire basin. Just as Gu Kan was curious about what he wanted to do, the young man took out 2 martial arts secret manuals from his bosom. They were the world-renowned heart methods everyone dreamed of. Gu Kan was instantly shocked. However, in the next second, the young man unhesitatingly tore them into pieces. He thrown them into the fire basin. Before Guken had time to wake up, he let out a cry of surprise again. Such a waste, he is such a madman. Third young master. Although I know you can't practice martial arts, everyone wants to get these secret manuals. You could have used this well. The young man disdainfully threw a new secret manual in his face. That's exactly why I burned them. The real techniques have all been preserved here, so now only I can use them. Hearing this, Guken suddenly understood. But the young man's next words shocked him even more. Before sunrise, he must deliver this secret manual to the madam and the second young master. Gukan was both surprised and confused, not knowing what the young man wanted to do. Didn't you say everyone wants it? As it happens, I'm a peace-loving person, so don't you think sharing it with family members would be a wonderful thing? Gukan looked at the young man's sinister expression. He was completely unable to imagine how scheming the man in front of him was. Meanwhile, on the other side, Guardian Gan began tidying his room as soon as he woke up. Then he carefully reviewed all the tasks he needed to complete today. This was a habit he had formed during his time as an assassin. He needs to live strictly according to plan, but soon he wouldn't need to do this anymore, because as long as he could successfully help the second young master take the position of Manor Lord, he would become an elder of the Burning Sword Manor. Thinking about the good life awaiting him, his mood became incredibly pleasant. But reality often goes against one's wishes. At this moment, a servant came to notify him that the second young master needed to see him. Moments later, in Mu Wenping's room, Guardian Gan stood there, with blood flowing from his head. It turned out that Zhao Yicheng's disappearance had infuriated Mu Wenping. He blamed everything on Guardian Gan. Guardian Gan was also confused, but he still solemnly swore that he had never deceived the second young master. However, the second young master had already lost trust in him. He picked up the inkstone from the table and hurled it at Guardian Gan's head. With Guardian Gan's skills, he could have dodged, but he didn't. Because if he defied the second young master now, his plan to change allegiance would fail. He had put in so much effort and finally reached this point. He absolutely wouldn't allow that to happen. So, enduring the pain on his head, he swore by his right arm. "Please give me some time. I will definitely find out the truth and give you an explanation." Seeing that Guardian Gan didn't appear to be lying, Mu Wenping pondered for a moment. "Very well, prove it to me. If you can find Zhao Yicheng within 2 hours, I'll believe you. But if you fail, you will lose not just your arm, but your life." Moments later, Guardian Gan left the room furiously. His thoughts were racing. Ever since that imposter appeared, everything had deviated from his plan. Although it was unlikely to be that guy, if he was playing some trick, Gan would not let him off easily. With this in mind, he headed straight for the young man's room without looking back. But before he got far, he ran into Gukan. He saw that Gukan was completely dispirited. Guardian Gan became furious and grabbed him by the neck. "Didn't I tell you not to take your eyes off that boy for even a moment? Did you think I was joking?" Gukan already felt guilty, and after being scolded, he immediately showed signs of weakness, though he still tried to make excuses. At that moment, Guardian Gan suddenly noticed the secret manual in Gukan's possession. Gukan sensed trouble and tried to stop him, but it was too late. When he saw the name written on the cover, even Guardian Gan showed an expression of disbelief. "What have you been doing all this time?" At this moment, anger completely took over his body. What followed was a bloody scene too gruesome to watch. Soon after, Guardian Gan dragged Gukan toward the young man's room. He kicked, and then opened the door, and threw Gukan's entire body inside. However, when the young man saw the dying man on the ground, he revealed a meaningful smile. "I've been waiting for you, Guardian Gan." His composed demeanor made Guardian Gan roar loudly. He grabbed the young man by the neck, and he asked what he had done to the second young master's guard. But the young man pretended to know nothing. What do you think a person without martial arts skills could do to him? Guardian Gan knew the young man was right, but he still had an uneasy feeling. After all, the young man had killed the real third young master without hesitation. With such deep scheming, how could he obediently follow orders? At this moment, he suddenly realized that it must have been this guy who killed Zhao Yicheng. Thinking of this, Guardian Gan directly pulled out his dagger. Such a person absolutely could not be allowed to live. Seeing Guardian Gan draw his weapon, the young man showed an excited expression. As a sword flash passed by, blood splattered everywhere. However, the young man did not die. Guardian Gan was not satisfied to end it like this. "For 3 whole years, do you know how I've lived these 3 years? To enter Burning Sword Manor, I spent all my savings and had to do all kinds of menial tasks every day. I finally persevered until now. But now you've ruined everything. So I must kill you, otherwise I will die here too." Saying this, Guardian Gan pulled out the manual from his pocket. "But now you have one more chance. Tell me where the rest of the manual is, and perhaps I'll spare your life." Seeing the fox's tail finally revealed, the young man gave a cold smile. But on the surface, he still pretended to be innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about." Seeing that the soft approach wasn't working, Guardian Gan again placed his dagger against the young man's neck. threatening that if he didn't hand over the manual, he would cut off the young man's flesh bit by bit. I believe by then you will obediently hand over the manual. The young man could only sigh lightly. Alright, I'll give it to you now. Hearing this, Guardian Gan immediately became excited. He reached out his hand to demand the manual from the young man. But the next second, the young man placed his hand on Guardian Gan's hand. I've given it to you now. The manual is stored in my mind. Guardian Gan became furious. Just as he was about to teach the young man a lesson, the young man firmly grasped Guardian Gan's palm. A strange power emerged. Guardian Gan's internal energy began flowing from his palm into the young man's body. I was still considering who to use this move on, but I didn't expect you to deliver yourself to my doorstep. Guardian Gan was shocked upon hearing this. He tried to pull back his hand, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. In panic, he raised his dagger and stabbed at the young man. Fortunately, the young man dodged in time, escaping a fatal blow. However, their hands separated at this moment. Then Guardian Gan kicked the young man, sending him flying. But by now his hands had lost all feeling. Although he didn't know how the boy had done it, he knew that if he delayed even slightly, his life would be in danger. At this moment, Guardian Gan's killing intent surged. Without any hesitation, he raised his dagger and prepared to completely eliminate the young man. Feeling the overwhelming killing intent, the young man knew that his previous technique was far from enough to confront a first-rate killer. So, he decisively summoned the demon monk. With a command, Guardian Gan's hand stopped in midair in a strange posture. Just as he was wondering what had happened, the young man grabbed the fallen dagger and stabbed it forcefully into Guardian Gan's body. This sudden turn of events made Guardian Gan step back repeatedly. Fortunately, the stab did not cause fatal damage. Now, he was beginning to regret bringing such a troublemaker back. But luckily, he had kept one trick in reserve. You haven't forgotten about the poison pill, have you? If we continue fighting, we'll both be injured. Why don't I give you the antidote and you let me leave? At this moment, Guardian Gan thought that if he just lowered his head now, he could find another opportunity to kill the young man later. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Guardian Gan spat blood and fell to his knees. He was confused. Such a minor wound shouldn't have been life-threatening, so why was he so badly injured now? Suddenly, he realized, it's the poison. When did you poison me? Your dagger was stained with my blood, and I've eaten many poisonous herbs since childhood. So my blood itself is a deadly poison. As for the poison pill you gave me, it has no effect on me at all. These words struck Guardian Gan like a thunderbolt. At this moment, he finally experienced the fear of death. The previously arrogant man immediately began to tremble involuntarily. But he didn't want to die. Please, spare my life. I'm willing to be your dog, to serve you forever. However, the young man remained cold. Although your attitude pleases me, if you had been like this from the beginning, perhaps we could have become good companions. With that, the young man pushed hard. The dagger in Guardian Gan's chest penetrated completely into his body. A dog like him who would change masters at any time could never be loyal. Therefore, the young man absolutely would not keep him by his side. Gradually, Guardian Gan lost consciousness in endless regret and unwillingness. After finishing all this, the young man stood up and stretched. Although it took some effort, he felt lucky to have resolved this major threat so quickly. Then he turned his gaze to Gukan. Guardian Gan didn't know about the manual. It seems this guy kept his mouth quite shut. The young man was becoming more and more satisfied with him. With this in mind, he awakened Gukan, who was still pretending to be dead. Get up quickly. I already saw you secretly moving your body during the fight. Gukan looked slightly embarrassed, realizing that everything here had been under the young man's control. Moments later, the young man asked Gukan to clear the people from around them, while he stayed behind alone to deal with Guardian Gan's body. He placed his hand on Guardian Gan's body again. As before, a warm energy continuously flowed into his body. But this time he wasn't trying to absorb Guardian Gan's internal energy. He actually wanted to confirm something else. As Guardian Gan's internal energy was completely absorbed, a thick black energy suddenly exploded. This was the death energy released when a person died. Unlike internal energy, this cold energy didn't dissipate after entering the young man's dantian. This feeling reminded the young man of his time as the Scythe Ghost. And this scene was all witnessed by Chinger. Now she finally understood why the bald monk beside them obeyed the young man's commands. He was even more terrifying than a vengeful ghost. At this moment, in the second young master's room, as Mu In-ping's chief guard, Chen Yang believed that Guardian Gan wouldn't dare to lie. But the second young master didn't think so. In his view, even if Guardian Gan told a lie, it should be one that wouldn't be immediately exposed. Because he knew well that people like Guardian Gan not only bullied the weak and feared the strong, but if you were good to them from the start, they would eventually climb all over you. So to deal with such people, you needed to make them understand who the real master was. Therefore, before the truth was clarified, the second young master needed to appear magnanimous. Only then would Guardian Gan kneel down before him in subservience. Hearing this, Chen Yang deeply admired the second young master's skill in managing people. Indeed, people with low loyalty like Guardian Gan needed to be tested. However, at this moment, Guard Han Sheng suddenly came to report. Guardian Gan had attempted to kill the third young master, and during the investigation, the third young master claimed that the person who instructed him was Master Mu In-ping. Upon hearing this, everyone in the room was shocked, regardless of why Guardian Gan suddenly took such action just based on the third young master's false accusation. Mu In-ping was so angry that fire seemed to burst from his head. He loudly demanded to know where Guardian Gan was. But no one knew his whereabouts. Guardian Gan seemed to have vanished into thin air. Mu In-ping sensed something was in trouble. He grabbed his weapon, ready to confront the third young master. Seeing this, everyone quickly stepped forward to stop him. If he attacked the third young master now, it would undoubtedly confirm what he had said. Mu In-ping was furious. Am I supposed to just sit here waiting for death, letting that bastard mock me? Suddenly, Chen Yang thought of a solution. Perhaps we can contact people from that place. If what the third young master says is true, asking them to take action should be simpler than expecting. After all, the organization that Guardian Gan belongs to is said to be very confident in assassination. According to their strict rule, they absolutely would not tolerate a failed assassination. Even assassins who have left the organization are no exception, so they will spare no effort to complete the mission. I will contact them soon. After hearing Chen Yang's suggestion, Mu In-ping's anger subsided. The scene changes. At this moment, the young man was practicing internal energy, according to the manual's method. However, no matter how he tried, when the true energy circulated near his dantian, it would inexplicably dissipate. So he called for Gukan. He wanted to ask if he knew the reason, but after hearing the young man's confusion, Gukan looked embarrassed. A guy who couldn't even use martial arts yesterday now wants to feel true energy after just one night. Is this guy crazy? At this moment, he really wanted to scold the young man severely. But Guken thought that after all, he was just a child, pretending to know when he didn't was normal. Moreover, if he really did so, he would definitely get beaten up later. With no choice, he offered to test it out. I'll send true energy into your body to help check what the problem is. Then the two sat cross-legged. As the technique began to operate, several streams of true energy condensed around the young man's body. This shocked Guken. He didn't expect that he could really use true energy. And from the flow of true energy, the young man's meridian points weren't blocked at all. This condition was difficult to achieve even for internal energy masters who massage their meridians daily. Could this guy really be a once-in-a-millennium talent? As Guken's true energy further flowed toward the young man's dantian, a bone-chillingly cold energy suddenly appeared. The next second, this energy forcefully repelled Guken's hands, and the young man's condensed true energy, unsurprisingly, all dissipated. Seeing Guken looking like he wanted to say something but hesitated, the young man told him not to conceal anything and speak honestly. Actually, Guken didn't know what that strange energy was either, but from the current situation, the young man indeed couldn't condense internal energy in his dantian. The young man felt a bit dejected. Was he really going to be stopped here? At this time, Guken continued, thinking carefully, that energy in your dantian doesn't seem like normal energy circulation, but rather feels completely opposite. After saying this, Guken immediately regretted it. He quickly explained that this was just his speculation and urged the young man not to take it seriously. But after hearing this, the young man fell into deep thought. Perhaps you're right. I should reverse the direction of energy circulation. Hearing this, Guken was shocked. Reverse circulation was known to easily lead to deviation. He wanted to strongly dissuade him, but at this moment, a blood mist trapped him firmly. Chinger's figure appeared like a ghost. She hushed and told Guken to be quiet. For Shikigami, harming their contractors would result in backlash, but if the contractor died on their own, they would be released. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After you become a soul, I will tear you to pieces with my own hands. Meanwhile, somewhere in the manor, the first madam met with the wizard sent by Ghost Shadow Pavilion, but she felt uneasy about this person. Someone as powerful as Meow had been killed, yet Ghost Shadow Pavilion only sent one person, and from the voice, it seemed to be a young woman. Besides, why was Meow's corpse brought back? The visitor didn't seem concerned. It turned out she was Second's senior sister, named Shuo, and the corpse was to be used to find his killer. Shuo slowly spoke. Before finding the killer of my junior brother, I need to confirm one thing. Do you want me to eliminate the third young master? Hearing this, the first madam was surprised. Then she smiled appreciatively. Your working style pleases me. After getting confirmation from the first madam, Shuo formed hand seals while chanting. The next second, Meow's corpse eerily opened its mouth wide. At the same time, Shuo made several more hand seals, then raised a peach wood dagger, then she stabbed it forcefully into Meow's corpse. A strange energy emerged. Disgusting flesh balls bulged on Second's body, then transformed into tentacles that crawled out from the 7 apertures, finally forming a giant hand that surged toward the young man's direction. At this moment, the young man in his room did not sense the approaching danger. However, Chinger was the first to detect something unusual, but just as she realized it, the many giant hands were already grabbing for the young man's head, as countless ghost hands reached for his head. Fortunately, the demon monk reacted first, flashing in front of the ghost hands. But his small yellow spirit alone couldn't contend with them. A casual strike sent him flying. Chinger sensed trouble upon seeing this. Meanwhile, Shuo continued her spell. The peach wood dagger in her hand rose and fell, stabbing frantically into Meow's body. Each stab would transmit his pain unreservedly through the ghost hands to whoever they touched. This scene excited the first madam greatly. Yes, just like that. Let that brat taste what suffering feels like. However, this wish ultimately didn't come true, because at this moment, Chinger also took action. She unhurriedly exhaled a wisp of clear smoke. With just a slight raise of her hand, the blood on the ground transformed into countless blades, cutting off all the ghost hands. She wanted to see who was so bold as to disrupt her plan. With a focused gaze, she instantly discerned the group behind this. Then she waved her hand, and a voice of annihilation sounded. A terrifying energy traveled along the ghost hands to Shuo, instantly blasting her away along with Meow's corpse. Shuo spat blood and broke into a cold sweat. To be able to use reverse spellcasting through ghost hands, the opponent's level was likely far beyond the yellow spirit level. She sighed lightly. First madam, it seems our deal needs adjustment. Hearing that Shuo wanted to change the terms midway, everyone present was confused. You've all seen what just happened. If you want me to bet with my life, then the payment for this mission must be increased to 1,000 taels. Hearing this, the first madam frowned. Has that guy already become so dangerous? Generally speaking, when a level reaches the yellow spirit stage, it can pose a life threat to humans. And the person you're talking about, his ghost spirit level is far beyond that. The slightest mistake would lead to irreversible disaster. But rest assured, although most methods cannot deal with this level of ghost spirit, I'm different. Just as ghosts have different levels, so do wizards. And my level is 2 ranks higher than Meow's. With that, Shuo looked solemn. She removed her cloak, revealing a delicate face. The first madam was astonished, upon learning that she was one of the 3 great spellmasters of Ghost Shadow Pavilion. Her previous doubts immediately vanished without a trace. At the same time, Shuo strode toward the door. Through the lamplight, a strange shadow formed on her body. I promise you, the third young master will not remain unharmed. The scene changes. What just happened made Chinger very angry. If the young man died during reverse circulation, it wouldn't be considered suicide. Then the opportunity she had been waiting for would be lost, so she had to protect the young man from any disturbance. However, events developed unexpectedly. At this moment, black energy rose from the young man's body. Chinger was shocked. She couldn't believe a living person could absorb death energy. This little devil kept refreshing her understanding every day. Although she didn't want to admit it, this amazing talent did make her increasingly interested. At this moment, the young man looked at the black energy in his hand. He smiled lightly indeed, as I guessed. Using this method, the true energy won't dissipate. Unfortunately, this black energy is still too little to condense internal energy in the dantian. However, these words made Chinger speechless. Just as the young man was wondering why Chinger was looking at him this way, he found the entire room in chaos, with the demon monk sitting injured on one side, and Guken lying asleep on the ground. Is it because youth is wonderful? Chinger looked embarrassed, just about to find an excuse, when the demon monk suddenly became serious. The next second, he sidled up to the young man and secretly tattled, "You ungrateful bald monk, you clearly had your share too." Chinger turned her head away proudly. "Little boy, I saved you and you don't even say thank you." The young man was about to speak. Next second, something strange happened. A mass of black shadows flowed through the door into the room. "You really attract a lot of disgusting things. I wonder what kind of madman would choose something so repulsive to manipulate." Hearing Chinger's words, the young man crouched down to check, but the scene before him also made him feel nauseated. As the black shadows poured into the room, the young man was stunned by what he saw. The black shadows were actually an army of insects made up of countless venomous creatures. According to ancient legends, there were ghosts that plagued the human world, collectively known as Chi Mei Wang Liang. Among them was a fierce beast called Qiu, which had a bird shape and a snake's tail. It could summon insects to attack humans. Wherever it passed, nothing grew, and corpses littered the ground, a fearsome creature that made people pale at its mention. However, now this fierce creature had become Shuo's Shikigami. For Shuo, she didn't really care about Miao's life or death. She just felt uncomfortable that a familiar face had been killed, making her feel annoyed. So the third young master Mu Jingyun had to die. With a command from Shuo, Qiu spread its wings and flew toward the young man's room. At the same time, the insect army bared its fangs and claws to launch an attack. However, Gukan was still sleeping on the bed, until the young man slapped him in the face. Only then did he wake from his sweet dream. But as soon as he got up, he felt intense pain in his hands. In just a moment, his palms were bitten full of holes by the poisonous insects. The young man told him to quickly circulate his true energy to protect himself. But even so, the young man knew this would only delay things briefly. With so many poisonous insects, if they didn't find a way to deal with them, they would eventually be devoured. At this moment, Chinger beside him started to gloat. Her indifferent attitude made the young man furious. "Aren't we in a symbiotic relationship? Shouldn't you help me?" But Chinger still pretended not to care. "If you offer your soul to me, perhaps I will agree to help you." "Fine, then we'll just wait here to die together," said the young man as he picked up a pillow and continued battling the insects. As the situation became increasingly dire, Chinger finally spoke slowly. "How about we make a bet? If you reach the brink of death, you lose, and you must voluntarily offer your soul. Conversely, if you can resolve this crisis with your own strength, then I will wholeheartedly assist you from now on." Hearing this, the young man immediately revealed a successful scheming expression. "Deal made. I hope you'll keep your word." With that, the young man's expression suddenly became serious. "Gu, help me find something that can burn. I want to start a fire here." Gu Khan was shocked. Starting a fire here was like digging their own grave. What did the young man want to do? But thinking there was no other option, he looked toward a nearby lantern, but the insect swarm had already surrounded them heavily, making it nearly impossible to reach the lantern. But at this moment, the young man slightly raised his hand. A suction force entered his palm. With a snap, the lantern flew into his hand. This sight frightened Gukan, but there was no time for explanations now. The young man quickly lit a strip of cloth, intending to use this method to find the person behind this. Actually, from the beginning, the young man had seen through everything. So many poisonous insects must mean someone was casting a spell behind them. Generally, ordinary people couldn't access wizards, but the first madam was an exception, which meant there must be a spellmaster by the first madam's side, and the reason he wanted to create a fire was to draw out this person. However, just as the cloth was lit, a black mist suddenly appeared, immediately extinguishing the flame. At the same time, a figure slowly approached from outside the door. "How foolish. Thinking such a small trick could deceive me." Shuo walked through the insect swarm freely. Her right eye emitted a white light, which was her innate ability. In her eyes, the young man was wrapped in red true energy, and 2 red lines connected to his body. "Finally I found you." With a bang sound, the entire wall was blasted away by Shuo's palm. The young man saw the mastermind finally appear. He smiled coldly. The next second, the demon monk's figure silently appeared above Shuo's head. However, Shuo remained unperturbed, just lightly uttering, "Freeze." A giant hand appeared out of nowhere, and the demon monk was easily pinned to the ground. "Whatever you do is useless." Seeing the situation worsening, Gukan took out a dart, attempting a sneak attack. Shuo was prepared, throwing a thunder talisman. The dart in Gukan's hand hadn't even been thrown before it was blasted away. The young man caught the falling dart, about to counterattack. But at this moment, Qiu flapped its wings hard. Countless insects rushed madly at the young man. Having never learned martial arts, he was knocked flying. However, Shuo didn't intend to stop. Countless poisonous insects like a tornado wrapped tightly around the young man. But at this moment, a strange black energy silently rose. Currently, the demon monk was pinned to the ground by tentacles, unable to move. The entire situation was easily controlled by Shuo. This let her think she had misjudged. Perhaps the opponent's ghost spirit wasn't at the green spirit level. She gently stroked Qiu's feathers, praising it for a job well done. But just when she thought everything was settled, a strange black energy surged from the young man's body. Feeling this unusual energy, Shuo was stunned. At the same time, the young man's figure stood up again like a ghost. Without any hesitation, he quickly cut his own body with the dagger in his hand. Blood immediately sprayed out. The surrounding poisonous insects, upon contacting with the blood, they all fell to the ground like meteorites. But even so, the young man showed no intention of stopping. He raised the dagger and pierced his palm again, then let the blood flow from his head, covering his entire body. When Shuo saw this bizarre scene, even the battle-hardened Shuo showed an expression of terror, hardly believing what she was seeing, and in the moment she was stunned. The young man charged frantically toward Shuo. "My blood is a deadly poison, so it's also a very effective insecticide," said the young man as the dagger in his hand stabbed fiercely at Shuo's body. Fortunately, Shuo reacted in time, barely dodging the strike. Now she knew the poisonous insects could no longer harm the young man, so she could only rely on Qiu to buy her more time. Shuo again formed hand seals while chanting. A massive energy gathered in her palm, but the young man wouldn't wait for her to complete the spell. The first form of thought-shattering 8 techniques. A terrifying suction force surged toward the young man's palm. Without any resistance, Qiu was sucked into the young man's palm. Seeing this, Shuo was shocked. Although she didn't know how the young man had done it, she was beyond caring now. Qiu was her last defense, so it absolutely couldn't fall into others' hands. She stopped all movement and lunged toward the young man, but it was already too late. With just a slight pressure from the young man's palm, Shuo felt the pain transmitted from the Qiu. And what shocked her even more, The death energy from the Kyuyu was now being recklessly absorbed by the young man. This scene completely exceeded Shuo's imagination. Even the most senior elders of Ghost Shadow Pavilion had never seen a living person survive after absorbing death energy. Yet the young man before her had not only absorbed it but even transformed it into his own power. Meanwhile, the young man hadn't expected this either. He originally just wanted to grab the Kyuyu to control those venomous insects. But now this bird had given him an unexpected surprise. The massive death energy was more than what he could obtain from killing thousands of people. If he could absorb it all, he would definitely be able to successfully condense internal energy in his dantian. At this moment, Shuo seemed to guess the young man's thoughts, and with trembling hands pleaded for him to stop. If this continued, Kyuyu would die. However, the young man merely gave a ghostly smile. Simultaneously at a certain place in Burning Sword Manor, the first madam anxiously awaited news from Shuo. Although she was confident about this commission, it still concerned the secret manuals of Burning Sword Manor. After dealing with Mu Jingyun, she had to ensure they wouldn't fall into anyone else's hands. Just then, Shuo's silhouette finally appeared. At that moment, the first madam almost laughed out loud. It seemed she had succeeded. Thinking about how her son would soon ascend to the position of Manor Lord, the first madam was already beaming with joy. She had even envisioned the future scene of being above thousands of people. But just then, Shuo suddenly stopped in her tracks. Before everyone could react to their confusion, Shuo shouted loudly, "First madam, our Ghost Shadow Pavilion can no longer accept the order to kill young Master Mu Jingyun." With these words, there was a buzzing sound, and the first madam's mind instantly went blank. It turned out that just moments ago the young man had used the Kyuyu's life as leverage to force Shuo to publicly accuse the first madam, because he knew that even if he defeated Shuo now, Ghost Shadow Pavilion would continue to send people to kill him. So he wanted to use this method to make the first madam and Ghost Shadow Pavilion become enemies. Shuo knew this approach was tantamount to making her a traitor to Ghost Shadow Pavilion, but she had no other choice. Just thinking about the young man's demonic figure made her grind her teeth in anger, but helpless due to insufficient strength, she continued to shout, "First madam, you said young Master Mu Jingyun was possessed by a ghost, and you asked us to exorcise the spirit and take his life. But after my confirmation, young Master Mu Jingyun is not possessed by anything, so please withdraw your commission to Ghost Shadow Pavilion." Instantly, Shuo's voice spread throughout the entire manor. The previously quiet manor suddenly became noisy. Upon hearing that the first madam wanted the third young master's life, lights were lit as people rose to investigate, and voices calling for the capture of this vicious first madam emerged. And just then, the outer hall guards also shouted in response. At this moment, the first madam was completely panic-stricken. When Shuo returned to the young man's room, by now, Burning Sword Manor had completely erupted in chaos. The young man held the Kyuyu's neck and smiled slightly. "The matter has been settled. As you wished, the first madam has been arrested as a criminal, and Ghost Shadow Pavilion and the first madam have also become enemies." Saying this, Shuo gritted her teeth in anger. Now, to fulfill the young man's demands, she had completely betrayed Ghost Shadow Pavilion, and might be hunted by them for the rest of her life. She extended her hand to the young man, asking for the Kyuyu, but the young man gave a ghostly smile. "Before that, I have some questions for you." Moments later in the room, Shuo looked puzzled. "You want to know about ghosts and monsters?" "Yes, including the demon monk around me, and those who can control them, especially your Ghost Shadow Pavilion." However, upon hearing the young man's question, Shuo didn't know how to answer. Although as she thought the young man was not possessed by an evil spirit, she couldn't understand how he had turned an evil spirit into his Shikigami. And he has not just one. Seeing Shuo motionless for a long time, the young man's palm applied a little pressure. This scared Shuo into quickly answering, "Ghosts and monsters are two different entities. Divided into ghosts and monsters, what the young man commands are ghost spirits, while what Shuo controls are monsters. Among them, monsters have 6 levels: ominous beasts, strange beasts, mythical beasts, demonic beasts, sacred beasts, and divine beasts. But even the lowest level disaster beasts can cause significant catastrophes for people, and as their levels increase, the danger becomes increasingly terrifying. As for Ghost Shadow Pavilion, there are only 3 people who can control monsters. Elder Gu, as the Grand Elder of Ghost Shadow Pavilion. He controls a strange beast called the Ancient Condor. Although no one knows its abilities, it is said that its mere existence is a great disaster. The second is the Pavilion Master of Ghost Shadow Pavilion, and while no one knows what monster he controls, its level must be extremely high. The young man couldn't help but wonder, could he be controlling a sacred beast or divine beast? Shuo denied his query, since even sacred beasts were extremely rare legendary beings, let alone becoming human familiars, so the Pavilion Master's familiar was most likely a strange beast or spirit beast. After speaking, Shuo took out a copy of the Classic of Mountains and Seas from her bosom. About monsters, detailed records can be found in this book. If there's anything unclear, you can carefully look it up. Taking this book, the young man casually flipped through a few pages and treasured it greatly. If even the lowest level monster like the Kyuyu contains such vast energy, the young man couldn't help but anticipate encountering higher level monsters. Then the young man threw the Kyuyu back to Shuo. Looking at her dying precious baby in her arms, Shuo trembled with anger, yet had to force herself to keep thanking him. This scene even made Guken feel that the young man was too shameless. Moments later, watching Shuo leave in fury, the young man was delighted. Now the first madam could no longer threaten him. Moreover, he had absorbed massive energy from Kyuyu, enough for him to condense internal energy in his dantian. This meant that from now on, no one could stop him from learning martial arts. But just then, Guken became puzzled. Are we really letting her leave like this? Now that you have deep grudges, surely she will not spare you in the future. The young man didn't care about this. Since I promised to let her leave, I'll definitely keep my word. Besides, she can't threaten me in the future. Soon after, outside Burning Sword Manor, looking at the dying Kyuyu in her arms, Shuo vowed that one day she would return for revenge. But in the next second, a powerful force struck. It sent her body stumbling backward. What followed was a trembling from her primal instinct, for she felt a fear of imminent death which was so terrible and evil. At the same time, her right eye continuously seeped blood. A pair of hands appeared silently behind her head. In the next moment, her right eye burst open violently. Crimson moonlight enveloped everything around. Chinger appeared ghost-like before Shuo. Even without an eye, you still look so cute. By now, Shuo's entire body was numbed by that eerie aura. Meanwhile, a strange phenomenon occurred. The blood from her eye corner didn't drip down but gathered and coagulated. Then the blood frantically poured into her mouth. The scene changes, now in the outer hall of Burning Sword Manor. The first madam was desperately explaining she had been wronged. How could I possibly harm the third young master? It must be him and that Taoist conspiring to frame me. But soon her words were interrupted. This person was Shangguanbo, the master of the outer hall of Burning Sword Manor. Unlike the inner hall master, Shangguanbo was unwaveringly loyal to the manor lord. So apart from the manor lord, he held the most influence among the retainers. Therefore the first madam couldn't bribe him. He questioned the first madam. I heard you had a conflict with the third young master earlier. What exactly happened? The first madam defended herself, saying it was because he disobeyed orders. She merely went to inquire. But these words, when they reached Shangguanbo's ears, how could he possibly believe them? Isn't it because you planned to kill the manor lord? The first madam was shocked. She wanted to explain something. But after seeing Shangguanbo's grim expression, she immediately quieted down. Shangguanbo spoke coldly. Regarding your intention to kill the third young master, I will not ignore it. So I hope you will cooperate with me. But don't worry, because whoever it is, everyone will receive a fair investigation. After the first madam left, Shangguanbo pondered over the recent events, but he couldn't understand. The third young master clearly had neither martial arts skills nor powerful marriage alliances. Yet whether it was the second young master or the first madam, they both saw him as a thorn in their sides. Perhaps this fellow had some unspeakable secret. Thinking about it now, during the time of investigation in the outer hall, Mu Jingyun indeed seemed different from usual. Initially, Shangguanbo thought he was frightened, which was why he temporarily behaved abnormally. But until now, Mu Jingyun's behavior always gave him an inexplicable strange feeling. It seems this third young master still requires my personal attention. The young man used death energy as a catalyst, to condense internal energy that even ghosts and gods would fear. This made Chinger extremely happy. Who would have thought this guy was not only handsome but also so interesting? Making her, whose heart hadn't been moved for thousands of years, suddenly feel stirred. After Chinger had dealt with Shuo, she returned to the room silently through the wall. The demon monk hastily greeted her with a respectful fist salute, but Chinger looked quite dejected. However, upon seeing Mu Jingyun concentrating on circulating his energy, she felt quite surprised, not expecting this guy to not only control the QU, but also absorb its death energy. And from the current situation, he seemed to be condensing the absorbed death energy into internal energy. It's worth noting that this death energy was more potent than that released by the dead, not just humans. Even ghost spirits would suffer backlash if they absorbed it. Yet the young man appeared unharmed. Chinger pouted and brought her face close to the young man's, carefully examining his features. His face is pale and delicate, completely fitting the standard of a beautiful young man. That handsome appearance momentarily captivated Chinger. But just then, the young man suddenly opened his eyes. What are you doing, startling Chinger? But she quickly recovered. If she answered now that she was admiring the young man's handsome features, it would certainly be embarrassing. So she immediately distanced herself, turning her head aside while beginning to change the subject. The young man stared blankly at Chinger, seemingly thinking of something. He laughed heartily, seeing his expression. Unexpectedly, Chinger blushed. She raised her eyebrows slightly, quickly telling the young man not to waste words and to continue circulating his energy. At this moment, Chinger also regretted. Why had she made a bet with this brat, all because that damned girl wasn't capable? Just then the young man slowly spoke. He needed Chinger to confirm whether he had condensed internal energy. Chinger was indifferent, smirking. Wanting to condense internal energy in a single day, how is that possible? Then, what's this small lump below my navel? Hearing this, Chinger immediately frowned, looking at Mu Jingyun in disbelief. Although the QU's death energy could help the young man condense internal energy, condensing it successfully so quickly was something Chinger really couldn't accept. It seemed she had to verify it herself. With that, she extended her hand toward the young man's dantian. However, when her palm touched the young man's body, a tremendous force struck, actually forcing her palm away. This was something Chinger had never encountered before. She was very curious and immediately called the demon monk to try as well. But no matter what methods they used, their palms could never enter the young man's body. Then she looked at the sleeping Gukan nearby and put her hand into his belly, encountering no resistance. However, this action woke Gukan with pain, widening his eyes. But in the next second, he trembled, whitened his eyes, and fainted again. Indeed, the fate of a tool character is pitiful. It turned out that Chinger had forgotten that once a person's dantian begins to form internal energy, the body's interior becomes extremely sensitive, so even slight touch can cause intense pain. But whether Gukan fainted or not didn't concern her. She pretended to indicate that the problem definitely wasn't on her end. But actually, she secretly wondered, could it be because I became a Shikigami? The young man asked Chinger again, isn't there any other way to confirm? There is one more. But before she could finish speaking, a loud bang came from the door. It was the outer hall master Shangguanbo paying a late-night visit. The young man was also curious, having remembered this person from their previous encounter during the outer hall interrogation. As a retainer who had served 2 generations of manor lords, the young man deeply knew how great Shangguanbo's influence was in Burning Sword Manor. Now seeing Mu Jingyun sitting cross-legged on the bed, Shangguanbo's expression seemed somewhat dimmed. But in the next second, he knelt on both knees and bowed his head in apology. It was all my negligence that led to the third young master being attacked. But the young man shook his head after hearing this. This isn't your fault, I don't mind. So you needn't blame yourself. Shangguanbo looked at Mu Jingyun this way, with a flash of something unusual in his eyes. He pretended to want to check the young man's injuries. However, when his hand was raised halfway, it stopped. Although the young man found it somewhat strange, he was soon distracted by the other's next action. Shangguanbo smiled, patting the young man's shoulder. I'm truly grateful that the third young master thinks of me this way. Then Shangguanbo looked around, asking the young man why he didn't see the dagger he had given him last time. Since the manor lord fell ill, I gave each young master a weapon for self-defense. Did you lose it? Hearing this question, Mu Jingyun instantly realized his mistake, but he still found an excuse, saying he had put it in the drawer of the cabinet. Hearing this, Shangguanbo laughed heartily. But at this moment, the young man's expression changed. Then he asked Shangguanbo, but I remember I didn't receive that dagger. However, as soon as the words fell, Shangguanbo's expression instantly darkened. That's because I never gave you such a thing. With that, he threw a punch toward the young man's body. Fortunately, the young man reacted in time, dodging this strike by a hair's breadth. But in the next second, Shangguanbo struck with lightning speed, several fingers pointing out, and he asking loudly, who are you really? Where is the real third young master? The young man was curious how the other had discerned he wasn't the real Mu Jingyun. First, when the third young master sees someone submit to him, he becomes very excited. Secondly, because he's often beaten by the fourth young master. Whenever someone extends a hand to him, he instinctively avoids it. But just now your expression was not only undisturbed, but without any fear. Now your acupoints have been sealed by me, so you'd better confess honestly. However, after hearing Shangguanbo's words, the young man smiled strangely. In the next second, the body that should have been immobilized actually moved. Shangguanbo was greatly shocked, not knowing how the young man had done this. But it was already too late. Only a cry of chinger was heard from the young man's mouth. A strange hand directly penetrated Shangguanbo's body. In an instant, Shangguanbo only felt something strange firmly gripping his heart. He was so frightened that he froze in place, not daring to move an inch. At the same time, his internal energy, under the pressure of the hand, continuously dissipated outward. Seeing this, the young man confirmed that the internal energy he had condensed was indeed different from others. Thinking of this, the young man had a new idea. Then he softly uttered demon monk again. At this moment, Shangguanbo could no longer maintain his composure, although he didn't know who the young man was talking to. He felt a death-like fear from hell, because his body was now firmly bound by countless hands. The young man's confrontation with the outer hall master Shangguanbo finally came to an end when the demon monk appeared. From now on, Burning Sword Manor had one less person who could threaten the young man. This made the young man extremely happy. In the time to come, he could finally concentrate on practicing his divine skills. But how could the path of practicing supreme martial arts be smooth sailing? The next morning, Gukan had just awakened from his fainting spell when he was immediately summoned to the young man's room. On his way to the room, Gukan saw the outer hall guard standing seriously at the young man's door. This made Gukan feel very strange. Could it be that after yesterday's events, they've been monitoring us? But before he could recover from his confusion, the moment he pushed open the door, he was shocked to see the scene before him, and his mouth opened wild. The outer hall master Shangguanbo was now standing respectfully before the young man. And when he left, he even nodded respectfully to Gukan. Gukan looked at everything before him in disbelief, not understanding what had happened to this world after last night. And now the young man finally spoke. He casually invited Gukan over for breakfast. But this frightened Gukan greatly, not expecting the young man to be so calm at this moment. Just as Gukan was about to ask what was going on, the young man spoke first. Can you teach me the basic martial arts of Burning Sword Manor? Hearing this, Gukan was so startled that the food he had just picked up fell. It turned out that just earlier, the young man had begun practicing martial arts, according to the descriptions in the Burning Sword Manor's Heart Method Manual. But he found that no matter how he practiced these movements, they couldn't be practiced together, until Chinger informed him that these movements were mainly to improve the practitioner's level, and the so-called martial arts manuals were based on the foundation of basic martial arts. Then they would extend and evolve basic movements, to allow martial artists to reach more profound levels. This meant that without understanding the basic martial arts, no matter how much practice, it would be impossible to comprehend the meaning. So for an ordinary person like the young man who knew nothing about martial arts, to achieve anything in the Burning Wood Sword technique, he must first practice Burning Sword Manor's basic martial arts. However, after hearing the young man's words, Gukan excitedly stood up. Does that mean you also want to become the Lord of Burning Sword Manor? Clearly misunderstanding the young man's intention. I just want to practice a supreme martial art, like the Heart Method Manual of Burning Sword Manor. Hearing this, Gukan finally understood, but in the end, he still refused the young man's request, because he had at most only glimpsed Burning Sword Manor's basic martial arts from a distance. So he didn't know what they were like either. For famous clans, like Burning Sword Manor, even basic martial arts are only allowed to be practiced by family members. Hearing this, the young man placed his chopsticks on his rice bowl. He stroked his chin and thought deeply, originally thinking that martial artists of Burning Sword Manor should all know the basic martial arts, but didn't expect such a result. Based on the current situation, those who know the basic martial arts, apart from the bedridden manor lord, only the other 3 young masters remained. But how could the other young masters possibly tell you the basic martial arts? And if something went wrong, even your identity might be exposed. Since that's the case, there's no other way. Saying this, the young man resolutely stood up and told Gukan to follow him. But upon learning that the young man was going to find someone who could teach him the basic martial arts, Gukan hurriedly tried to stop him. But no matter what he said, the young man still walked outside without looking back, until he followed the young man to their destination. Gukan was once again stunned by the young man's bold decision, because the person the young man was looking for was none other than the 4th young master Mu Yutian, who had beaten him half to death 2 years ago. Seeing the 4th young master's well-developed muscles, Gukan was so scared he could hardly speak. The scene of Mu Jingyun being beaten to death back then was still vivid. Don't you remember what I told you that day? The 4th young master's hatred for the 3rd young master has reached an irreconcilable level. Moreover, the 4th young master is only 16 years old, yet his martial arts have reached the peak. Just as he said, Chinger nearby also warned, she also sensed the power in the 4th young master far beyond ordinary people. To condense such pure yang energy and life force at 16 years old, calling him a supreme genius would not be an exaggeration. If I were still alive, I would definitely make him my disciple. Finishing this, Chinger told the young man to be careful after all. In daylight, she couldn't exert her full power. The young man didn't care about this at all. He smiled ghostly, casually walking toward the 4th young master. On the other side, suddenly seeing Mu Jingyun appear before him, Mu Yutian was momentarily stunned. But in the next second, his expression changed drastically. If you don't want to be beaten again, then quickly get out of. But before he could finish, Mu Yutian's face showed a shocked expression. The young man took out the supreme manual of Burning Sword Manor from his bosom, then asked with a smile, do you want this? Saying this, he threw it to Mu Yutian without reservation. Seeing this, Mu Yutian widened his eyes, initially doubting the authenticity of the manual. But after he took it and carefully examined it, he was surprised to find that the content indeed contained many profound principles. This was truly the Heart Method Manual of Burning Sword Manor. But soon Mu Yutian discovered that several pages were missing from the manual. He asked the young man what was going on. The young man calmly nodded slightly. They are all memorized in my mind. At this moment, Mu Yutian had no idea what the young man was up to. He knew the manor lord would never pass the manual to Mu Jingyun, so he asked again, how did you get it? The young man didn't answer this. His expression remained unchanged. However, this expression completely enraged Mu Yutian. He shouted loudly, if you've come to boast in front of me that the next manor lord can only be you, then before I flatten you, get out of here immediately. With that, he angrily threw the manual at the young man. But the young man still picked up the manual casually. It seems you've misunderstood something. I'm just here to make a deal with you. I'm not interested in the position of manor lord. Hearing this, Mu Yutian laughed. He rudely punched the young man in the face. How could he believe such words? This guy in front of him was clearly planning some conspiracy. If you don't remember what happened 2 years ago, I don't mind reminding you. Facing this brother who had always looked down on him, Mu Yutian directly threw a punch. With a boom, the tremendous force sent the young man's body flying back instantly. Blood flowed down from his nose in a gush. But at this moment the young man laughed, indeed different. Apart from that guy with the black long sword, this was the first time he had so profoundly felt the difference between experts. He finally understood why Gukhan said Mu Yutian was a monster. Facing such an opponent, the young man was very clear. The person before him was not someone he could defeat by luck alone. But this made him even more expectant. If he learned martial arts, could he also become so powerful? He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled slightly. Your fist is indeed hard. Seeing Mu Jingyun stand up again, still mocking himself, Mu Yutian's face was filled with surprise. He warned the young man again, if you want to taste my fist again, I don't mind letting you experience it once more. But at this moment the young man sneered, I know you still doubt me. No, this isn't doubt but certainty, because I won't believe anything you say. Saying this, Mu Yutian clenched his fist again. Since things had come to this, he should give this guy a harsh lesson again, just like 2 years ago. However, just as he was about to swing his fist, the young man smiled and said, is that so? Then there's no other way. I'll have to give the manual to the first madam or second brother. Hearing this, Mu Yutian's expression changed drastically. He angrily rebuked, you dare threaten me? However, the young man remained unmoved. Believing or not is your freedom. But if you choose this way, after I give the manual to them, I'll still get what I want, but you may not. Hearing this, Mu Yutian was stunned, because he deeply understood the meaning of these words. In Burning Sword Manor, if the Manor Lord passed away, the retainers would definitely elect someone who knew the manual to become the new Manor Lord. At that time, whether it was the first madam or the second young master, they wouldn't easily spare him. At this moment, Mu Yutian looked at the young man's fearless eyes. His body involuntarily trembled. Are you really Mu Jingyun? Hearing these words from Mu Yutian's mouth, Gukhan behind was greatly shocked. Could it be that the young man's identity had been discovered? However, the young man remained composed. He chuckled and looked directly at Mu Yutian. Then who do you think I am? You look like you know me well. Hearing this, Mu Yutian's gaze faltered. Of course I know you. You're the person I beat like a dog 2 years ago. A coward who would run away even at the sight of me. You're right, but apart from this and the fact that we're half-brothers, what else do you know about me? Including what I like, what I hate, and why I'm willing to give up the position of manor Lord, you know nothing about these. Hearing this, Mu Yutian was momentarily stunned. The changes in this brother over 2 years surprised him immensely. However, facing the young man's righteous voice, he still shouted loudly, how could you ask me those questions? You bastards all despise my humble origin, all ignore me and keep me at a distance. No one has ever acknowledged me, but now why do you come to me, rather than deal with those self-proclaimed noble people? Hearing this, the young man casually replied, that's because you are the best among them. Instantly, Mu Yutian fell silent, looking at the young man's eyes in disbelief. Due to his humble origins, he endured suffering from an early age, spending his childhood in solitude. To gain everyone's approval, he trained diligently in martial arts every day. But today, he unexpectedly heard others acknowledge him, and it came from the person he thought least likely to do so. At this moment, Mu Yutian was completely stunned. He had assumed Mu Jingyun would harbor resentment toward him because of what happened 2 years ago, yet now he was being acknowledged face to face. Does this mean he needs to change too? Mu Yutian put aside his wariness and said straightforwardly, very well, tell me what you want. Shortly after, on the way back to his room, Gukhan gazed at the youth with profound admiration. He had to admit that when it came to scheming, the young man was truly exceptional. Earlier, he had been worried that asking Mu Yutian to teach him the basic techniques would arouse suspicion, but unexpectedly, the youth convinced him to agree so naturally. It turned out that just moments ago, the youth had presented Mu Yutian with 3 demands. First and most importantly, if you become the Manor Lord in the future, you must never harm me. As for the second matter, you must provide me with sufficient financial support. Mu Yutian's expression grew serious as he promised the youth that as long as he wasn't provoked first, he would never raise a hand against him. After receiving this affirmative response, the youth casually made his final request, asking Mu Yutian to teach him the basic techniques of the Burning Sword Manor. As expected, upon hearing this request, Mu Yutian agreed without any suspicion, even mocking the youth for forgetting something so fundamental. This was precisely the youth's plan. From the moment they first met, he had continuously directed Mu Yutian's attention to the first 2 requests, and after gaining Mu Yutian's trust, his request to learn the basic techniques seemed so insignificant. Thus, Mu Yutian taught the youth the basic techniques incantation, while the youth recited the missing pages of the secret manual to Mu Yutian. Reflecting on what had just transpired, Gukhan once again looked at the youth with admiring eyes. The only thing he regretted was that Mu Yutian had obtained the secret manual so easily. The youth, however, was unconcerned, because he had altered the contents of the manual. He had changed 1 character out of every 13 or 14 words. At first, he worried he might be discovered, but unexpectedly, everything proceeded exceptionally smoothly. Hearing this, Gukhan broke into a cold sweat. No wonder he had so readily shared the manual's contents with Mu Yutian. Aren't you afraid he'll practice the wrong techniques, disrupt his energy flow, and go mad? The youth simply replied coldly, so what? At that moment, Gukhan felt a chill run down his spine. This person didn't care at all whether Mu Yutian would come to harm. He was truly a devil. One crisis follows another. Due to Shuo's betrayal, the relationship between Ghost Shadow Pavilion and the First Lady completely collapsed. To uncover the truth, the Pavilion Master ordered that Shuo must be found and brought back. However, despite mobilizing all disciples in the pavilion, they could not find any trace of Shuo. Finally, to salvage the organization's reputation, the Great Elder had to personally take action. At this moment, in a remote forest, as the talisman in Old Master Gu's hand completely burned away, he gazed at the crimson patch on the ground and fell into deep contemplation. How could Shuo, one of the 3 most powerful sorcery masters of Ghost Shadow Pavilion, be killed so brutally, and what kind of power could have done this? Thinking about this, he immediately began forming hand seals and softly uttered several incantations. Suddenly, fierce winds arose around him. The next moment, a red gleam flashed in Old Master Gu's eyes. Everything Shuo had experienced, it flashed before Old Master Gu's eyes like a revolving lantern. But before he could fully process all this information, a bone-chilling cold suddenly descended. In that moment, he felt the deep-rooted fear that Shuo experienced before death. His body seemed to have fallen into an endless purgatory. The shock instantly awakened him. He stood there in a daze, unable to recover for a long time. After a while, he let out a long sigh. I never expected that thing could already reach into the spiritual realm. I was too simplistic in my thinking earlier. Then he glanced at the sky and muttered, "It seems we need to make new preparations." Meanwhile, an eagle-shaped shadow on the ground flapped its wings in response. Strangely, the eagle's head in that shadow had a pair of peculiar horns. The scene shifts to Burning Sword manner. The youth begins practicing the wood-burning heart technique based on the basic techniques provided by Mu Yutian. His every movement flows seamlessly without any stiffness, not at all like a novice learning martial arts for the first time. Even Chinger, watching from the side, was mesmerized. Typically, when ordinary people first learn martial arts, they start with basic movements. After years of practice, these individual movements become interconnected, forming a complete set of martial techniques. However, the youth skipped this crucial first step. With his astonishing memory and comprehension abilities, he didn't need to practice each movement separately. For him, all that remained was to continuously train his muscles. Therefore, after seeing the youth's incredible aptitude for martial arts, Chinger felt extremely frustrated. She had thought this boy would pester her for guidance, but now she realized he didn't need her help at all, and this sense of defeat truly made her uncomfortable. This scene caught the youth's eye, and just as he was curious about what Chinger was complaining about, Guken appeared with a puzzled expression. "You've come at just the right time. There's something I need you to handle for me." Later, Guken contemplated the strange mark in his hand. The symbol was very simple, but he had never seen it before. Yet the youth had asked him to commission an intelligence agency to gather relevant information. So he came to this Orchid Pavilion. In terms of ranking, this place barely qualified as the lowest level of intelligence gathering. But there was no alternative. This was the only intelligence agency in the vicinity. Therefore, Guken held no hope of obtaining useful information. Reflecting on his miserable life, now reduced to running errands, Guken let out a deep sigh. However, he wasn't particularly bothered by this. After all, his life had never had any real purpose. Abandoned by his parents at a very young age, he became an assassin. But due to his lack of talent, he was quickly expelled from the organization. The reason he followed his senior brother Gan, the guard, was simply because they had left the organization at the same time. He knew full well that Gan had never been a good person and always used him as a tool, although it was still the same now. He enjoyed this feeling of going with the flow. At least he felt alive. The only thing that made him anxious was the youth's wild ideas. He could never predict what would happen next. While Gukan was lost in thought, a fat man with a woman entered. He was Guo Luzhu, the master of Orchid Pavilion. With a flushed face and tipsy demeanor, he asked Gukan, "She's our new girl, what do you think of her?" Gukan felt very angry. Although the girl was indeed breathtakingly beautiful, this was hardly the time to think about such things. However, Guo's mind wasn't on work at all. He still couldn't take his eyes off the woman's enchanting figure. Gukan warned sternly, "This commission is very important. I don't want a third person to know about it." Seeing Gukan so angry, Guo Luzhu reluctantly let her leave first, but as the woman rose to depart, he tried to grope her bottom. This scene completely infuriated Gukan, but before he could express his anger, with a slap, the woman struck Guo Luzhu's face. The woman muttered, "Bah, I can't take this anymore." Then she removed her wig. At this moment, both Gukan and Guo were still confused. But in the next second, with an eerie movement, the woman grabbed Guo Luzhu's head. With a crack, Guo Luzhu's body fell to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Gukan was so frightened that he hurriedly tried to draw his short sword. But the woman kicked the table away. Simultaneously, several wooden needles appeared in her hand. Before he could react, they were already inserted into Gukan's acupoints. The woman removed her disguise, revealing a delicate face. "You disappoint me, rookie assassin number 86. Hearing this voice, Gukan completely lost his composure, stuttering, "Me, miss. The Spirit Blade flying needles, the symbol of the Flying Sandgate's leader. Now they are in the hands of a brothel woman. An impossible scenario by any measure." Flying Killer, as the previous leader of Flying Sandgate, was already 60 years old, older than all assassins under him. Yet his skills were unmatched, maintaining the position of Central Plains' top assassin for over 20 years. However, his unique weapon was now in this woman's possession. Gukan was very surprised, but he quickly guessed the woman's true identity. Flying Killer had a granddaughter named Xia Kaling. As his only relative, he invested everything in her. Everyone could understand this, but the problem was that Xia Kaling had significant character flaws. All assassins in Flying Sandgate believed the leader wouldn't pass his position to his only granddaughter because Xia Kaling simply wasn't suited to be an assassin. To become an assassin, the most basic requirement was to possess a calm and composed temperament, but Xia Kaling completely failed in this aspect. She was hot-tempered, though young and beautiful. She constantly cursed and never knew how to control her emotions, apart from having severe mysophobia. The last time Gukan saw her was 4 years ago, before he left the assassin organization. All assassins in Flying Sandgate opposed making Xia Kaling the next leader. Only Flying Killer wanted to support her, so he forcibly confined her in the Flying Sand Cave. Everyone believed Xia Kaling couldn't possibly survive, and gradually forgot about her. Now Xia Kaling was 19. Gukan could tell from just a glance at her figure, capable of stirring one's passions, that she had developed remarkably well. Combined with her captivating face, many would be deceived by her appearance. Just then, Xia Kaling finally extended her hand toward Gukan, removing the Spirit Blade flying needles embedded in his body, and reattaching them to the ring on her wrist. "So you've completed the 100-kill mission? In Flying Sandgate, to become the leader, one had to pass a test, killing 100 people within 100 days. Seeing Gukan questioning her abilities, Xia Kaling wasn't angry, just teased, "How could you not believe in me?" Observing her current personality, Gukan began to wonder if she had truly reformed. If so, perhaps she could indeed become the leader. Seeing Gukan still disbelieving, Xia Kaling suddenly gave him an icy look. "Don't think that because you've left the organization you can disrespect the leader." Confirming his suspicions, Gukan felt a wave of unease. Based on past cases, all assassins who left the organization inevitably met with death. Gukan feared she had come to take his life. He immediately knelt down, calling out, "Yes, leader." This reaction made Xia Kaling spontaneously curse, language that seemed completely at odds with her beautiful face. This made Gukan even more nervous. Xia Kaling smiled at him, telling him not to worry, as her purpose here was to approach the eldest son of Burning Sword Manor. She had heard that Mu Yinghao was a womanizer who enjoyed drinking, so she planned to enter Burning Sword Manor through him, but now it seemed unnecessary. "I'll just go in with you." Gukan frowned. He didn't understand what Xia Kaling meant, or why she wanted to enter Burning Sword Manor with him. To this question, Xia Kaling gently lifted Gukan's chin, and said in a voice filled with killing intent, "Assassin number 29, your senior brother Gan the guard. I heard his assassination mission failed. According to Flying Sandgate's iron rule, Assassination missions must be completed, so my purpose here is to take the head of Burning Sword Manor's third son. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the youth had been practicing Burning Sword Manor's basic techniques. After just 3 hours, he looked as if he had been training for years. Seeing the sun almost completely set, Chinger finally approached him. How long are you going to practice like this? The youth reluctantly came out of his meditative state, looked at the sky and said, Indeed, it's getting late. Let's go eat. At these words, Chinger, as if she had been waiting for a long time, immediately showed an excited smile. The scene changes to a maid earnestly eating. The youth sits across from her, casually holding a book. After finishing all the food on the table, the maid's face shows a satisfied expression. Seeing her like this, the youth can't help but ask curiously, is it really that enjoyable? The maid picks up a jug of wine and says contentedly, the greatest pleasure in life is eating. Someday you'll understand. This maid is actually Chinger in possession. But suddenly, blue veins bulge on the maid's body. All her blood vessels turn black as if dyed with ink. Chinger clicks her tongue in dismay. I didn't expect this child couldn't even last a quarter hour. It seems an ordinary body can't withstand a vengeful spirit's erosion. 4 days ago, the youth had asked Chinger to try possessing the maid who brought him food, and the result unexpectedly pleased him greatly. However, upon discovering she could possess bodies, Chinger, wanting a beautiful physical form, possessed a maid and nearly killed her. Mu Jingyun looked helpless. He now regretted letting Chinger do this. Actually, he hadn't wanted Chinger to find a body so quickly, because having a high-level ghost spirit that could stay by his side was a trump card for him. After eating and drinking her fill, Chinger looked at the youth and wondered, why are you interested in mystic arts now? The book that the youth was reading came from Shuo through Chinger, a manual called 6-Person Summoning Technique. Having witnessed Shuo's ability to command spirit servants, the youth was naturally interested in these methods. But just as he was about to continue reading, suddenly a sense of foreboding came over him. The youth frowned and turned his head. Seeing his state, Chinger's eyes lit up. It seems your intuition has indeed become very keen. After learning that Xia Kailing's target was Mu Jingyun, Guken suppressed his unease. He swallowed and asked, Leader, have you accepted a commission? No. Hearing such a quick response, Guken frowned, taking Mu Jingyun's head without a commission. Could there be another reason? Xia Kailing seemed to have anticipated Guken's surprise. I received information from Burning Sword Manor. Assassin number 29 failed his mission because he was killed by the third son, Mu Jingyun. I'm puzzled how a third-rate pampered young master could kill a first-rate expert, and what surprised me even more is that you are unharmed. Faced with this questioning, Guken was speechless, momentarily unable to answer. If he told the truth now, Xia Kailing might kill him regardless of their shared background, but if he remained silent, he would face even more serious consequences. 1,000 thoughts flooded Guken's mind. After a brief silence, he finally spoke slowly. Since I left the organization a long time ago, my current skills are no match for Mu Jingyun, so I could only lay low and wait for an opportunity. After hearing Guken's explanation, although Xia Kailing still expressed doubt, she finally chuckled. In that case, let's head to Burning Sword Manor now. Seeing her excitement, Guken's expression instantly darkened. He had to notify that person, no matter what. Moments later, in Guken's room, he brought Xia Kailing a set of maid's clothes. However, Xia Kailing just glanced at them casually and turned away. So ugly, I'd rather wear brothel clothes. Guken couldn't help but swallow. The situation was becoming increasingly urgent. Since meeting Xia Kailing, she had kept a close eye on him, and now that he finally had a chance to slip away while she changed clothes, he couldn't easily let this opportunity pass. So he put down the clothes and turned to leave. But Xia Kailing playfully asked, why don't you stay? Chances to see a body like mine are rare. As she spoke, Xia Kailing deliberately showed off her impressive legs. Never having encountered such a situation, the pure-hearted Guken blushed deeply, but just as he was about to look back, Xia Kailing's laughter rang out again. I was just joking with you, but you took it seriously. Guken was speechless. With Xia Kailing's current personality, Flying Killer still trusted her with the leader's position. The former leader really was too optimistic. Finally, Guken excused himself again and turned to leave, but Xia Kailing's voice came once more. Thank you, Uncle Gu. Thanks to you, I can enter so easily. Hearing this, Guken felt very uncomfortable. This was beyond his control, and though unwilling, he still had to agree verbally. I believe with the leader here, we can easily complete the mission. Xia Kailing's expression showed appreciation after hearing this. I knew that as a member of Flying Sandgate, even if you left the organization, you would still be very reliable. But as soon as she finished speaking, a cold gleam flashed in her eyes. With several soft sounds, the spirit blade flying needles once again precisely struck Guken's acupoints. Guken looked at her in confusion, but Xia Kailing just smiled and put away the ring on her right hand. Let's end this here. Did you really think I would believe your stupid excuses? Guken bit his lip tightly. She had never believed him from the start. Everything was just to get into Burning Sword Manor. He hated his own helplessness. Was it because he was getting old? Xia Kailing walked coldly toward Guken. Your senior died, yet you remain so low-key. It seems you've already joined Mu Jingyun. Now that I've achieved my goal, a hopeless fool like you should die. Saying this, Xia Kailing drew the short sword from Guken's waist. To avenge your senior, you killed the third son you served, then committed suicide. That's your fate. With that, Xia Kailing raised the short sword and thrust it toward Guken's throat, but at the critical moment, a sound rang out as a hand reached through the window. A powerful suction force emerged. The short sword in Xia Kailing's hand flew away. This telekinetic skill instantly shocked Xia Kailing, just as she was feeling astonished. A foot kicked open the door. It was the third young master, Mu Jingyun. When Guken saw the figure, his tears poured down his face. This was the first time he felt that this devil-like person could be so cool. In contrast, Xia Kailing was instantly alarmed. Although Xia Kailing had a fiery temper, she had received rigorous training from Central Plains' top assassin. So from the beginning, she had thoroughly investigated her target, but she found that Mu Jingyun was no different from other pampered young masters. Due to his poor aptitude for martial arts, Mu Jingyun's skills were only at the third-rate level. He received no recognition from his brothers or retainers in Burning Sword Manor, but such a person had killed the first-rate killer number 29. Xia Kailing had two theories about this. The real killer could be the one who leaked information to him, possibly one of the other sons of Burning Sword Manor. Second, Mu Jingyun had been hiding his abilities, but compared to the former, this possibility was lower. Currently, Mu Jingyun was only 17. If he wanted to compete for the position of Burning Sword Manor's heir, he had no reason to hide his strength. However, what just happened completely exceeded Xia Keiling's expectations. Even as the leader of Flying Sandgate, with her skills at their peak, she couldn't perform telekinesis. Yet this so-called useless third son had done it. Her gaze toward Mu Jingyun instantly became sharp. Sensing the dangerous situation, she grabbed Gukan's collar and pulled him towards herself. The panicked Gukan tried to break free, but due to their vast difference in strength, his struggles were futile. Meanwhile, Xia Keiling placed her short sword against Gukan's neck. Then she threatened Mu Jingyun and said, "If you don't want to see your guard die, you'd better not move." Hearing Xia Keiling's words, Gukan broke into a cold sweat. Although he knew Xia Keiling must have investigated Mu Jingyun before, the current Mu Jingyun was no longer the original third son. So she certainly didn't know that this youth never valued others' lives. He was thoroughly a devil. Sure enough, the youth raised his dagger. Just when Gukan thought the youth was going to charge at Xia Keiling, the dagger was thrust hard into the floorboard. "Alright, now you should release Gukan." Hearing this, Gukan was completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he had heard. The demonic youth had actually put down his weapon for him. He had thought he was just a dispensable pawn to the other, but the result was unexpectedly different. The youth's voice sounded again. "If you release Gukan, I'll let you leave." Hearing Mu Jingyun's words, Xia Keiling raised an eyebrow. His condescending attitude annoyed her, but this indirectly proved that he really cared about Gukan. "It seems you value your guard a lot. I just think losing him would be a pity. So before I change my mind, you'd better leave immediately." However, Xia Keiling became more demanding. "If you kneel and beg me, perhaps I'll agree." With this, the atmosphere became tense. The youth could only sigh speechlessly. Then he slowly bent his body. Seeing this, not only Gukan, but also Xia Keiling was incredibly shocked. For a mere guard, he was actually preparing to kneel. However, things didn't develop as they expected. The next second, a cold gleam flashed in the youth's eyes. He quickly turned, pulled the dagger from the ground, and with one stride, rushed towards Xia Keiling. This action made Xia Keiling laugh wildly. "I knew you couldn't possibly kneel and beg for him." But as she said this, Xia Keiling was surprised to find that the youth's gaze wasn't on her. He slightly turned to look aside. At the same time, something eerie happened. Xia Keiling felt a bone-chilling sensation, as if her entire body had fallen into a pool of blood, countless tentacles like demons from hell reaching for her. And behind her, something was clearly approaching. Sensing this ominous presence, Xia Keiling instinctively moved sideways. She did dodge Chinger's attack. In that instant, she pulled Gukan's collar and retreated sharply. Simultaneously, she raised her short sword in defense. Seeing Xia Keiling evade Chinger's attack, the youth's eyes flashed with something unusual, indeed, worthy of being a top expert. Her reaction speed was even faster than Mu Yutian's. Behind him, Chinger had anticipated this outcome. After all, top experts could sense a ghost spirit's presence, so as soon as she approached, Xia Keiling would instinctively dodge. But the youth wasn't helpless either. In the moment, Xia Keiling was distracted. He quickly threw his dagger, accurately knocking the short sword from her hand. Taking advantage of Xia Keiling releasing Gukan, the youth moved swiftly, then pulled out the spirit blade flying needles from Gukan's body. The speed was so fast that even Xia Keiling hadn't anticipated it. Although she didn't know what spell he had just cast, she could keenly sense that strange energy. So facing the youth's rushing figure, she remained fearless. After all, in her view, this person's strength was far too weak. She only needed to interrupt his spell before he could cast it again, and she could easily kill him. Besides, she still had her final trump card unused. Xia Keiling's figure moved quickly as well, while her hands reached for the weapon at her waist. Seeing this, Gukan sensed trouble. That was Flying Sandgate's most powerful hidden weapon, the Extreme Shadow Needle, although it could only be used once each time. It had a unique function. The ability to seal the target's internal energy. At this moment, the youth hadn't noticed anything unusual. He planned to use the first form of the 8 Broken Thoughts technique again to draw the weapon to his hand, but was shocked to find he couldn't use his internal energy. Chinger beside him also sensed the danger but couldn't stop it in time. She could only watch helplessly as the Extreme Shadow Needle flew toward the youth's heart. Just as Chinger cried out in alarm, a figure suddenly blocked the youth's path as Gukan used his body to shield the youth. The Extreme Shadow Needle inevitably pierced his body. Everyone's expressions instantly turned to shock. Seeing this, the youth became completely enraged. A cold gleam flashed in his eyes. He shouted, "Chinger!" A strange shadow rapidly approached Xia Keiling. Meanwhile, she sensed danger. Xia Keiling quickly shot 3 flying needles at the youth's head. The youth made no attempt to dodge. A suction force appeared in his palm again. Then the speeding needles pierced his palm. Seeing this scene, Xia Keiling widened her eyes, as the spirit blade's flying needle had changed its flight path. But just as she was feeling extremely surprised, an eerie voice sounded. "You should have left when he told you to, but why wouldn't you listen?" Xia Keiling was instantly panic-stricken, clearly hearing a voice by her ear, yet seeing nothing no matter how she looked. At the same time, a nauseating bloody smell emerged, everything around her transforming into a sea of blood. From that bloody sea, dozens of hands extended, tightly entwining Xia Keiling's body. Facing the first supernatural encounter of her life, Xia Keiling fell completely into despair. She wanted to escape, but no matter how she struggled, it was futile. Looking at the suffering and frightened girl before him, Mu Jingyun shook his head. "I clearly gave you a chance, but you chose to forfeit it." As soon as he finished speaking, Xia Keiling's consciousness was completely devoured in endless terror. Witnessing this, the young man's face remained impassive. He slowly walked to Gukan's side. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. At this moment, Gukan slowly opened his mouth. "What a pity, I can no longer serve the young master." To this, the youth asked perplexedly, "Why did you do this?" "Protecting the young master is my duty. I merely did what I should. Besides, master has sacrificed so much to save me, I cannot betray you." Hearing these words, the young man fell silent. Yet Gukan continued to murmur with difficulty. "You are the only person who has ever cared about me in my life, so I have no regrets anymore." After speaking, Gukan slowly closed his eyes. But just then, a woman's voice sounded, "Is he really dead?" The speaker was the supposedly deceased Xia Keiling. But the young man knew that this Xia Keiling was not actually Xia Keiling. "It seems you've completely devoured her." Hearing this, the woman smiled slightly. "Yes, young bodies are indeed wonderful, worth all my effort." However, as soon as she finished speaking, Xia Keiling's body began to bulge with veins. This immediately infuriated Chinger. "Damn it, it seems this body won't last long either." But quickly changing the subject, Chinger looked at Gu Kan on the ground. I didn't expect him to die just like that, but he seems to have no regrets, so he probably won't become a vengeful ghost. Hearing this, the young man stared intently at Gu Kan. His lips twitching, he mumbled, according to the 6-person spirit descent technique, vengeful spirits are born from intense hatred, but if a person dies in a place filled with resentment and death energy, they can also be influenced and come into being. Hearing this, Chinger was greatly alarmed, seemingly guessing something. Meanwhile, the young man's hand seals continuously changed. The death energy around him began to spread outward. Then the death energy flowed through his palms into Gu Kan's body. Gradually, Gu Kan's soul transformed into streams of light separating from his body. Finally, it condensed into a weak ball of light. At this moment, a red line quickly connected to that light ball. This scene made Chinger widen her eyes. He actually extracted Gu Kan's soul with death energy, and even established a connection with him. But Gu Kan's soul is still too weak. If a container isn't found quickly, it will completely dissipate. But in such a short time, where can we find a corpse? Hearing this, the young man didn't answer, just coldly looked toward Chinger. When she saw the young man's expression, Chinger sensed that something unpleasant was about to happen. The scene shifts. Gu Kan's soul now felt like drowning in a vast sea. He could feel his consciousness gradually dissipating. But he didn't complain. Having lived without regrets, it was time for everything to end. But at this moment, a familiar voice suddenly sounded, seemingly right by his ear. When he abruptly opened his eyes, sure enough, he saw that familiar figure again. He didn't understand what was happening. Why was he still alive? Seeing this, the young man remained composed, telling Gu Kan to calm down first, then slowly explained. To preserve your soul, I transferred death energy onto you, so you've now become my Shikigami. But your soul energy is really too weak, liable to dissipate at any moment. I had no choice. Hearing this, Gu Kan was still confused, but when he tried to ask what this meant, he was startled by his own voice. Because there was only one available corpse, I put you into that assassin's body. Hearing this, Gu Kan completely lost his composure. He looked at his constantly rising and falling chest. What is going on? Gu Kan exclaimed in shock, continuously begging the young man to change him back. This woman was just too hot. To this, the young man ignored him, just busied himself fixing the door. If I pulled you out, you would disappear immediately. And besides, even if I did, this female assassin has already become a corpse. Hearing this, Gu Kan's mind was in complete disarray. Not just about becoming a woman, but if Flying Kill Sect discovered their leader had died here, life would truly become difficult. And as he was feeling extremely troubled, a languid voice came from behind. You should be grateful to have this body. I couldn't even possess it if I wanted to. Hearing the voice, Gu Kan turned around, and he was so frightened by Chinger's appearance that he let out a loud cry. Although Gu Kan didn't know who she was, even now as a ghost spirit, he could clearly sense the disparity between them. Just one glance gave him the illusion of being in a sea of blood. At this moment, he couldn't help but look at the young man beside him. Had he been staying with such an entity all along? This fellow was becoming increasingly unfathomable. Seeing Gu Kan's terrified expression, Chinger consoled him not to be sad. After all, you still have a body to use, but Gu Kan looked utterly despondent. But I'm a man. This really angered Chinger. You are taking advantage and still complaining. Why are you still thinking like a mortal? Shouldn't you be happy about advancing from second rate to master level? Just as she finished speaking, the young man's voice came. Why not try it out? With that, he fiercely kicked toward Gu Kan's head. Without thinking, acting on instinct, Gu Kan bent his body and dodged. Feeling the profound internal energy in his body, Gu Kan finally realized what master level capability felt like. Are you satisfied now? Gu Kan still looked aggrieved. But I'm still a man inside. Chinger heard this and smiled meaningfully. Isn't that perfect? When no one's around, you can touch yourself as much as you want. Gu Kan's face turned red with embarrassment. He was a gentleman. How could he do such things? Seeing Gu Kan's righteous demeanor, the young man assured him that if the opportunity arose in the future, he would definitely find him another body. Just then, urgent knocking suddenly came from outside the door. The inner chamber guard came panting to report. Ma, master, he's awake. The scene changes. Outside the Burning Sword Manor, a man in blue Taoist robes stood at a distance, making hand seals and chanting incantations. Soon a huge shadow appeared centered where he stood. After a while, that shadow began to descend, gradually shrinking. Have you found that guy? Hearing this, the eagle shook his head, to which Master Gu couldn't understand why even the ancient eagle couldn't locate him. He pointed his hand to a spot in the air, then closed his eyes and began to recite silently. Shortly after, he frowned and opened his eyes, just now through his secret technique he had discovered. The entire manor seemed shrouded in a layer of red bloody energy, a kind of ghost domain barrier. Once an outsider approached, they would immediately be captured. And to achieve such a level, at least a green spirit level ghost was required. This was going to be difficult. Thinking of this, Master Gu turned to look at the manor gate. At this moment, a drunken young man was being supported by 2 brothel women back to the manor. He was the eldest young master of Burning Sword Manor, Mu Yonghao. Seeing him arrive, the guards hurriedly went forward to report. Young master, the manor lord has awakened. The other young masters have already been notified to go to his room. Nearby, Master Gu heard this news and his expression froze. This was the perfect opportunity for him to act. The scene shifts. Now hearing the news of the manor lord's awakening, the young man was also stunned. But he still put on a relieved expression. That's wonderful, father has finally awakened. But in truth, the young man was inwardly anxious. He had always felt that competing for the heir position would be troublesome. So he had planned to leave after learning the basic techniques. But, unexpectedly, the manor lord woke up at this time, which for him now made whether he could leave a question. Later, the guard told him that the manor lord had summoned everyone to gather in the bedroom. He had something to announce. The young man knew there was no way to delay meeting with the manor lord. So he followed the guard, preparing to head to the bedroom, while Gu Kan instinctively followed behind him. Fortunately, the young man turned and said, Guard Gu Kaling, don't I have something to organize? Hearing this name, Gu Kan couldn't help but shudder, suddenly remembering his own corpse hadn't been disposed of, and finally could only nod silently, while Chinger naturally followed Mu Jingyun. After they left, Gu Kan became troubled again. He never imagined that in the end, he would have to dispose of his own corpse, but soon his face reddened again. He looked down at his rising and falling chest. As a man, he had never experienced this sense of weight, his mood becoming strangely wonderful. Thinking of Xia Kaling's enchanting figure, she was indeed beautiful. Instantly, his mood became somewhat heavy. He began to look around. After making sure no one was there, he actually started to undress, but just as he was about to take off her clothes, Chinger's figure silently passed through the window. In an instant, Guken froze like an ice sculpture, but Chinger merely clicked her tongue and disappeared again. Seeing this, Guken just wanted to dig a hole and bury himself. I was only trying to change into clothes more convenient for movement. However, Chinger's figure had already returned in front of the young man, now on their way to the main hall. The young man unexpectedly encountered Mu Yutian. Compared to 4 days ago, Mu Yutian's complexion appeared somewhat dark, seemingly not having gone berserk due to the disordered internal energy. This surprised even Chinger, but from his black and yin tongue point, these days must not have been easy. Upon seeing the young man, Mu Yutian angrily walked over, quietly questioning if he had tried it before, but the young man pretended ignorance. You mean the secret manual? He obviously raised his voice. It frightened Mu Yutian, immediately diffusing half his anger, and he quickly glanced at the guard leading the way ahead. Seeing no abnormality, he hastily interrupted the young man. Don't speak so loudly, just answer my question. Mu Jingyun replied nonchalantly, if you were me, would you say you hadn't tried it? Hearing this, Mu Yutian narrowed his eyes, looking directly at the young man. Indeed, he couldn't possibly not practice in advance. Even if not for competing for the Manor Lord position, any martial artist, out of curiosity for this supreme martial art, would definitely cultivate it. Then why are you unaffected? In these 4 days, Mu Yutian had practiced the Burning Wood Heart transforming formula with abundant energy every day, but the deeper he practiced, the more chaotic his internal energy became. At first, he thought this was the original effect of the technique, but until 4 days later, when his skin turned black, he felt something was strange, which made him suspect the young man had given him a fake manual. But at that time, he clearly had, according to his request, improvised and stated the same incantation 9 consecutive times, making it difficult for him to doubt its authenticity. If what this guy said was the true manual, then the problem must be with himself. At this moment, Mu Yutian had to admit that he might not have comprehended the true essence of the incantation. Thinking of this, Mu Yutian clenched his fists, looking at this merely third-rate fellow before him. If the other could masterfully grasp the technique without side effects, then he, acclaimed as a genius, could certainly do it too. Although he didn't know where the problem is, he believed he could overcome it. At this point, the young man also didn't linger further, though I don't know what problem you have now that father has awakened. Why not ask him directly? Hearing this, Mu Yutian's lips curled slightly upward. Father's awakening was a tremendous boon for him. Although he was born of a concubine, father had always favored him, so the entire situation was more advantageous to him. Moreover, father gathering everyone immediately upon waking must be to determine the heir position. And seeing Mu Yutian's expectant appearance, the young man chuckled, then turned away his gaze as if completely uninterested. This left Chinger feeling utterly speechless. This guy was truly consistently malevolent. But just then, Chinger suddenly stiffened. She looked up toward a certain direction, revealing an intrigued expression. The young man glanced at her in surprise. It seems a bug has sneaked in. Wonder who gave it such courage to tread fearlessly into this one's domain. Looks like I need to give it a proper welcome. Hearing this, the young man immediately understood. It seemed the people from Ghost Shadow Pavilion had arrived. Then in the Manor Lord's room, Mu Yonghao and Mu Enping had already arrived early. All family bloodlines were now gathered here. However, seeing the young man appear together with Mu Tian, Mu Enping felt rather puzzled. When had their relationship become so? At this moment, though Mu Yonghao had forced back some drunkenness with his internal energy, he still reeked heavily of alcohol. The first lady was busy wiping him down, but inwardly she was already extremely anxious. It must be to announce the heir position because the old man woke up and immediately summoned his sons to his side. This was troublesome. In this situation, everyone knew the Manor Lord loved the fourth son Mu Yongtian most. For her own son who only indulged in wine and women, the chances of becoming heir were lowest. So no matter who else was chosen as the Manor Lord's heir, she had to sabotage it. Moments later, the four stood in a row before the Manor Lord's bed. Though everyone displayed nervous expressions, each harbored their own schemes. Even the young man now felt somewhat surprised. As one of Anhui Province's top 10 masters, Mu Randan, while he lay sick in bed, the young man couldn't sense how formidable he was. Only standing here now did he truly experience how strong a supreme master could be. And just then, all four simultaneously paid respects to their father. Suddenly, a powerful internal force erupted from Murendan's body. At the same time, the young man had another question. How could a powerful master like Murendan be cursed? And as he was lost in confusion, his eyes stared directly at Murendan. Compared to the other brothers, the young man appeared exceptionally relaxed without any tension. Seeing this, Murendan's eyes flashed with astonishment. Since Mu Jingyun's mother died, he had never dared to look directly at him. Murendan slowly spoke. Do you know why I called you here? Though everyone knew the answer to this question, they remained silent, not daring to answer. Only the young man casually said, Isn't it to determine the heir? With these words, everyone displayed surprised expressions. They never imagined that this usually timid and cowardly third son would dare to openly state the reason. They all glanced at Mu Jingyun, then carefully observed the Manor Lord's reaction. But unexpectedly, Murendan wasn't angry, but instead acknowledged this point. Yes, I am indeed here to determine the heir candidate. At this, everyone's nerves instantly tensed, each person's thoughts becoming complex. Actually, Murendan also felt somewhat surprised. When he first woke up, he heard from the inner hall master about what had happened during this period. Learning it was the third son who had saved him from a sorcerer. Initially, he thought this was either coincidence or a trap set by the third son. But from the third son's behavior just now, he began to slowly believe that the third son had truly changed. Of course, the young man hadn't thought that much. He had no interest in the Manor Lord position. His composure was simply to maintain the atmosphere. At this point, Murendan smiled meaningfully, immediately announcing that through testing, he would decide who qualified to inherit the Manor Lord position. With these words, the atmosphere in the room became even more tense. Mu Yutian's lips curled upward uncontrollably. If the heir could be selected through testing, he was more likely than anyone to win the Manor Lord position. Mu Enping heard this with the opposite reaction. Father's announcement undoubtedly highlighted the fourth son's talents. After all, in terms of martial arts, who could defeat this monster who reached his peak at 16? Though he felt it unfair, he couldn't muster the courage to speak out. As the scene fell into silence again, a voice suddenly arose. I don't plan to participate in the test. The young man once again spoke surprisingly. Instantly, everyone's expressions became incredibly rich. Mu Enping and Mu Yutian looked at him with incomprehensible gazes. Even the Manor Lord asked with surprise, Why don't you plan to participate in the test? This is because compared to my brothers, I still have many deficiencies, so I believe I'm not qualified to become the heir. Hearing this, Mu Enping smiled strangely. Though not knowing what the third brother was planning, if he was willing to withdraw, it wasn't disadvantageous for himself. While Muyutian felt somewhat surprised, when the Manor Lord was unconscious, the third brother had clearly stated he didn't want the Manor Lord position, though he didn't believe it, he had now said it in front of everyone, truly not knowing what this guy was thinking. At this point, Mu Rendon inquired again, "Why do you feel you're not qualified?" Faced with the Manor Lord's successive questions, the young man also felt very surprised. To his knowledge, the Manor Lord had always been cold toward the first and third sons, so even if they failed the test, it shouldn't attract attention. Yet now showing such interest in his withdrawal, it seemed he needed to find a reason. Thinking of this, the young man immediately replied, "As the future Manor Lord of Burning Sword Manor, one must possess exceptional talents in both martial arts and wisdom, neither of which I possess, so I forfeit my qualification to become Manor Lord." Hearing this, Mu Rendon laughed heartily, but after laughing he looked piercingly at the young man. "It seems he has truly changed. He indeed didn't save me for the Manor Lord position." Being able to see the talentless third son begin to reflect on himself and give up the Manor Lord position for Burning Sword Manor's future, Mu Rendon felt very gratified. "You fully possess the qualification to become the heir." Saying this, the Manor Lord slowly removed his clothes. However, when they saw the Manor Lord's severed right arm, everyone revealed shocked expressions. Even the young man's face changed. The scene shifts to a place not far from Burning Sword Manor. This was the residence of the Outer Hall guards, but now corpses lay everywhere inside the house. In the darkness, two figures carelessly surveyed the surroundings. Among them, the large man pulled out something the size of a finger from his bosom, clearly inscribed with Mu Rendon's name. This old thing actually escaped from the curse. How did he manage it? Hearing this question, the mysterious person beside him slowly spoke. "Earlier I heard a ancient eagle's call. That's the Shikigami of the Green Witch Mountain Sorcerer." Hearing this, the burly man laughed heartily. "I thought so. Since a magic master is involved, it must be that person who saved Mu Rendon from death." Then he looked at the guard on the ground, with just a breath left. "It seems that I need to personally meet this Manor Lord of Burning Sword Manor." With a cold flash, that guard followed the fate of the others. At the same time, shadows appeared outside. In the next second, they galloped towards the location of the sword-blazing manor at full speed. Now inside Burning Sword Manor, Mu Rendon looked at his sons, explaining how Mu Jingyun had saved him. Everyone became unsettled. They had all heard about an accident several days ago, but didn't know the Manor Lord's arm had been cut off, making them break out in cold sweat. Unlike them, the young man was now lost in deep memories. Scenes of his grandfather's death reappeared in his mind. On his grandfather's body, he had seen that scar-like mark. And after being captured, he too was carved with the same mark. This mark he had once desperately sought to find. And now it appeared on Mu Rendon's body. "I finally found you." But as he was considering how to respond next, he suddenly frowned, his eyes involuntarily looking toward the door. Seeing this, Mu Rendon also felt somewhat surprised. Just about to ask what was wrong, his gaze also became extremely sharp. Abruptly standing up from his seat, this action immediately frightened the others. Just then, faint commotion came from outside the door. Simultaneously, a guard pushed in. "Not good, Manor Lord. Enemies are attacking." Faced with the sudden situation, everyone couldn't hide their panic. Now countless assassins are battling with Burning Sword Manor's guards, but facing powerful opponents, they could only struggle to hold on. They placed all their hopes on the Manor Lord arriving in time, but under the lead man's direction. Everywhere they passed, left only corpses. Now he unhurriedly walked to Burning Sword Manor's main gate. A powerful internal force erupted from his body. One sword sweep, and in an instant the gate was blasted to dust. This scene made all the guards present tremble with fear, but they had no time to be surprised, because now the assassins had begun to charge. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a figure was hiding in a corner observing all this. It was Master Gu who had earlier infiltrated the manor. Now he was nervously reciting spells. This was an invisibility spell. During the recitation, no one could discover him. But the drawback was he couldn't move, had to continuously recite the spell. Now he avoided the assassin's sight with the invisibility spell, but was in a very awkward position. His body was already soaked in sweat, constantly observing the surroundings, maintaining vigilance. Because his ancient eagle had been used to attract Qing'er's attention, and in the current situation, he couldn't possibly kill Mu Jingyun. At this moment, he also began to regret. But fortunately, if he could persist until these people left, at least he wouldn't be caught. However, just then, the appearance of a mysterious person plunged him into fear. Unlike the surrounding assassins, that person wore a hood and leaned on a cane, emanating an unusual aura. Upon seeing him, Master Gu instinctively knew this was characteristic of a long-term spell cultivator. What terrified him more was seeing the mysterious person constantly making various hand seals from the technique that was a tracking spell, and to perform such a spell, at least a master-level sorcerer was required. Just as Master Gu felt things were dire, a word of release came from the mysterious person's mouth. The space centered on him began to distort. Master Gu's invisibility spell was forcibly broken. The next second, the mysterious person's figure instantly appeared before him, one hand gripping his neck. "You're the one who removed Mu Rendon's curse, right?" Hearing this, Master Gu completely panicked. "Friend, aren't you misunderstanding something?" But the mysterious person didn't want to hear any explanation. "You dare to interfere with Original Kill Pavilion's actions. You should be prepared to die." With that, his palm tightened. Master Gu's head began to bubble with blood. The next second, with a splat, it exploded on the spot. It turns out practitioners of magic arts had an unwritten rule, not to collude with or join any secular organizations. But until 10 years ago, this rule was completely broken by one person. He brought those who violated the rules under his wing, creating an organization called Original Kill Pavilion, and the mysterious person was one of them. Now the lead man, seeing the situation with the mysterious person, quickly guessed what he was doing. "It seems the master of that eagle has been dealt with by you, so we need to quickly find that thing." Hearing this, the mysterious person again pulled out a tracking talisman. "It's time to retrieve our treasure from Mu Rendon." The battle for Burning Sword Manor's survival had begun. Now the sound of weapons clashing echoed throughout Burning Sword Manor. The previously quiet courtyard had become a battlefield. Now with the warriors from the inner chamber led by Mu Rendon coming out of the room, the brothers' faces showed undisguised panic. When Mu Rendon saw his warriors wrestling with the masked strangers, he could hardly imagine how this had happened. Launching a sudden attack in the dead of night and breaking through the outer defense line so quickly to reach this place meant the attackers were certainly extraordinary. Although he doesn't know who they are, ordinary retainers and warriors would find it difficult to stop them. Seeing the situation, Mu Rendon's expression immediately darkened. He hurriedly questioned the bewildered mistress at the entrance about what was happening. By this time, however, the mistress was already frightened out of her wits. With no alternative, Mu Rendon drew his sword with his unfamiliar left hand. He angrily shouted, "Who dares invade my Burning Sword Manor? It seems you've prepared yourselves for death." Upon seeing their master who had been bedridden for so long suddenly appear, the warriors erupted in cheers. Everyone's morale instantly soared. Mu Rendon bellowed, "Follow me!" Hearing this, the warriors responded enthusiastically, with the Wood brothers following closely behind. Of course, not everyone reacted this way. At that moment, the young man merely pretended to follow along. Then, while everyone was fighting the assassins, he slipped away to a less populated area. Though he didn't understand what was happening here. What did these people's lives matter to him? He had no obligation to protect this place. Right now, he only cared about one thing, that scar-like mark. He had planned to leave after clarifying the situation, but who would have expected such a sudden incident? This forced him to depart earlier than anticipated. After all, during such chaos, the disappearance of one or two people wouldn't seem strange. However, just as he turned to leave, a curious sensation washed over him. At that moment, streams of black vapor were continuously flowing into his palm. While he was momentarily distracted, an assassin launched a sneak attack against him. The young man effortlessly blocked the attack with a slight raise of his hand. Simultaneously, his palm rotated rapidly, and in the next second, it penetrated the assassin's body without any resistance. As the assassin lost his life, a dark vapor emanated from his body. Just as I thought, this black vapor is the death energy from those who have died. The young man then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Soon, he sensed the death energy around him increasing dramatically. It seemed many people had died in a short time. Such opportunities were extremely rare, so he couldn't afford to waste it under any circumstances. However, at this point, assassins were everywhere. Trying to absorb the energy here could put him in danger if he wasn't careful. But just then, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. It was Gukan, who had occupied Xia Kailing's body. Earlier, he had been ambushed by a group of people while changing clothes. After dealing with them, he quickly found the young man. The young man smiled vacantly and said, "You've arrived at the perfect time. I need you to temporarily protect me." Having spoken, the young man sat cross-legged and began absorbing the flowing death energy through breathing techniques. Seeing this, Gukan was momentarily speechless. This guy was too bold, attempting to cultivate on a battlefield. How is this different from courting death? But soon he seemed to understand why the young man was doing this. He wasn't cultivating energy but was absorbing it. Although Gukan was possessing Xia Kailing's body, he remained a ghost spirit. Therefore, he could see the death energy surrounding them, flowing from all directions into the young man's body. At this moment, the young man felt the death energy continually enriching his body. It was produced by dozens of deaths, not only abundant but also extremely pure. It contained all the dark emotions at the moment of everyone's death. Compared to when he had absorbed the armadillo before, it was at least 3 times more potent. This completely exceeded the young man's expectations. It seemed that prosperity lies in taking risks. At this rate, his realm would soon advance again. Of course, what he didn't know was that while he was concentrating on breathing and absorption, Gukan was in a state of extreme tension. At this moment, more and more masked men were surrounding them. Even with his peak-level abilities, Gukan was engaged in a bitter struggle. He suddenly wished that terrifying ghost woman would assist him. Just then, a figure suddenly appeared. It was the outer hall leader, Murongbei. Upon seeing the figure, Gukan finally sighed in relief. Previously, he had learned from the young man that another ghost spirit possessed Murongbei's body. He excitedly called out the demon monk's name, but after calling for a while, Murongbei still didn't respond. Just as Gukan was puzzled, a flash of bloody shadow passed, and Murongbei's body was forcibly split in half. Simultaneously, a man covered in scars slowly appeared. He turned his gaze toward the cultivating Mu Jingyun, then remarked with interest, "What an interesting child, daring to cultivate while surrounded by enemies." The moment he saw the man, Gukan knew things were terrible. This person's strength completely exceeded his imagination. Even with his peak-level abilities, he couldn't help but tremble. At this point, the scarred man turned his attention to the young man. He commented with interest, "Outside, there's already a river of blood, yet this child is still indulging in cultivation. How fascinating." With that, he strode toward the young man. With each step he took, the distance shortened significantly. Seeing this, Gukan was so frightened that he immediately called out the young man's name. However, by now the young man had entered a state of complete immersion, with the surrounding death energy rushing into his body like a tide. It was nearly impossible to awaken him at this point. Moreover, if he were forcibly interrupted now, the young man would certainly fall into deviation. Thinking of this, Gukan wavered momentarily but soon steeled himself again. Facing this monster before him, he felt somewhat at a loss. But he absolutely couldn't just wait passively. Gukan steeled his heart. Although he couldn't stop the opponent, even if it cost him this borrowed body, he had to buy more time for his master. So in the next second, he leaped up. In an instant, he appeared above the man's head, then moved with lightning speed. At this moment, Flying Killer's proud unique martial art, the third form of Flying Kill silent carving, instinctively activated through him. However, the man remained unmoved, not even adopting any defensive posture. "You are indeed fast, but still too slow." With these words, a sharp sword shadow appeared from nowhere, swiftly slashing toward Gukan. Gukan reacted in time, quickly flipping his body. Cut hair flew in all directions. If he had been a moment slower, his body would have been split in 2 by the massive sword shadow. However, the battle didn't end there. Gukan, seizing the interval while the man was recovering his movement, quickly shot 3 spirit blade needles at him. But the man easily deflected them with a slight raise of his sword. Not only that, his figure instantly appeared in front of Gukan. With just a casual flick of his finger, Gukan's entire body flew backward like a cannonball. This was the difference in strength. That man was simply too powerful. Just one strike had left Gukan mortally wounded. But after this strike, Gukan's eyes flashed with an unusual light. What struck him as strange was that despite coughing blood and being seriously injured, he felt no pain at all. This meant that while possessing someone else's body, he couldn't feel anything. He stood up shakily, wanting to prevent the man from approaching Wood Jingyun further, but his body could no longer exert any strength normally. At this point, the man warned in a low voice, "If you disturb me once more, you're dead." Having said that, he extended his hand toward the young man's head. However, just as his hand was about to touch the young man, the man clenched his teeth. Instead, he swung his massive blade toward the young man. But in the next second, with several clanging sounds, a figure blocked the man's sword. It was Mu Rendan, the Manor Master of Burning Sword Manor. Immediately afterward, a fierce battle erupted between the two, with the sound of clashing blades echoing in the air. The battle between these two masters caused wild winds to sweep through the surroundings, but there was also an enormous gap between their abilities. After one fierce sword clash, Mu Rendan's body was thrown back several meters. Simultaneously, black blood spewed from his mouth. He had only recently awakened from his sickbed, and having lost the use of his right hand, his current strength didn't even reach half of his peak. Nevertheless, he glanced at Wood Jingyun, who was still cultivating. It seemed the child wasn't injured, so he turned his attention back to the man beside him, demanding to know why he had attacked Burning Sword Manor. Hearing this question, the man burst into laughter, then took something from his bosom. Seeing this, Mu Rendan's expression instantly froze. It was his seal. You should know what this is. I have only one purpose for coming here. If you don't want Burning Sword Manor to become ruins, you'd better hand over what you've stolen. The scene changes, now outside Burning Sword Manor. Chinger looked at the manor engulfed in flames and fell into contemplation. She had thought Ancient Eagle entered her domain to lure her out, but unexpectedly, it suddenly died like this, which meant its master had also lost his life at that moment. Yet ordinary people couldn't kill a spellmaster with spirit beasts so quickly. This meant something extremely dangerous must have appeared in the manor. Shortly thereafter, inside Burning Sword Manor, the raging flames had long been extinguished. Everyone had gathered in the central square. By this time, the young man finally opened his eyes. However, seeing the devastation around him, he too was puzzled. He turned to look at the central square. The guards of Burning Sword Manor were all kneeling on the ground, having lost the ability to resist. Meanwhile, Manor Master Mu Rendan was locked in a standoff with a burly man, though their facial expressions were completely different. The young man seemed unconcerned about this. No wonder the death energy was becoming scarcer. It seemed the battle had ended. What a pity. With this thought, he slowly walked to Gukan's side and directly asked what had happened. Seeing the young man finally awake, Gukan looked embarrassed and didn't know how to answer, so he recounted what had just occurred. It turned out that the moment Mu Rendan crossed swords with that man, he had guessed the other's identity. It seems you're from the Heaven and Earth Society. Hearing this question, the man merely snickered. Mu Rendan sighed deeply and then directly announced his surrender to the opponent, ordering all guards to cease resistance. I will return that item to you, but in exchange, I hope you can spare Burning Sword Manor. Hearing this, the man seemed somewhat disappointed. Did I speak too soon? It would have been better to see you struggle a bit more. With that, the man burst into laughter. Then the man spoke again. Very well, I, Sun Yun, one of the 5 kings of the Heaven and Earth Society, accept your request. Meanwhile, when Gukan heard the names Heaven and Earth Society and Sun Yun, his eyes widened in shock. It turned out that the Heaven and Earth Society was one of the 3 major powers currently dividing the martial arts world of Central Plains. They worshipped only strength, aiming to unify the martial arts world. They had once caused rivers of blood to flow throughout the Central Plains. Therefore, in the martial arts world, the mere mention of the Heaven and Earth Society made people shudder with fear. And that man, as one of the 5 great kings of the Heaven and Earth Society, his strength and power made countless people fearful. As for Burning Sword Manor, although it was one of the few major powers in Anhui Province, compared to the Heaven and Earth Society, it was like comparing a minor shaman to a great one. If they truly fought, the only outcome would be annihilation. Therefore, Manor Master Mu Rendan had no choice but to hand over that treasure. The treasure was stored in the T-shaped secret chamber beneath the medicine hall. Indeed, what they were looking for was that human skin book. At this point, although Gukan didn't know what they were searching for, he guessed it was likely on the young man's person. Therefore, the moment the young man awoke, he constantly reminded him to be wary of the Heaven and Earth Society and not to cause trouble. However, in the next second, he saw the young man walk straight toward Mu Rendan, almost scaring Gukan out of his wits. On this side, seeing that the young man had awakened, Mu Rendan first asked if he was injured, telling him not to take such risks in the future, and then asking him to rest aside. However, the young man directly asked Mu Rendan how he got the scar on his body. Mu Rendan thought his third son was concerned about him, but considering he hadn't received any external injuries just now, he felt puzzled. Until the young man continued to ask, who caused that scar on your waist? Hearing Wood Jingyun's question, Mu Rendan suddenly frowned. In this situation, why would this child suddenly ask about this? Just then, the masked man who had gone to retrieve the treasure from the underground chamber of the medicine hall had returned. He knelt before Sun Yun, respectfully presenting the wooden box that had originally contained the human skin magic book. Although the sealing spells on the surface of the box were gone, its exterior remained intact. Seeing this, Sun Yun was instantly overjoyed. Mu Rendan also seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but the young man was slightly startled. They returned so quickly it seemed he needed to accelerate his plans. At this point, Mu Rendan sighed. Now is not the time to discuss this. I will tell you later. But the young man insisted he must be told now. Mu Rendan didn't answer, only silently watching as Sun Yun slowly opened the treasure box. Currently, Sun Yun was immersed in the joy of recovering the lost treasure, but what he didn't know was that an eerie smile appeared on the young man's face. If you don't speak, there will be big trouble. Mu Rendan was puzzled about why his third son would say this, until he heard the young man's next words, which instantly terrified him, because what they wanted wasn't in the medicine hall below. Meanwhile, after seeing what was in the box, Sun Yun's expression dramatically changed. A surge of powerful internal energy erupted from his body, making the surrounding air buzz. Then he looked at Mu Rendan with murderous eyes. This sudden turn of events terrified the Wood Clan members. But at this moment, the mistress nearby revealed a mocking smile. It seemed they hadn't found what they were looking for. Since Wood Jingyun had obtained Burning Sword Manor's secret manuals, that item was probably also on him. Thinking that if she revealed this, she could use these people to eliminate Wood Jingyun, but what happened next completely shattered her fantasy. Because at that moment, Sun Yun took out a pair of earrings from the wooden box. These earrings were made entirely of gold, silver, and jade, clearly valuable, and only someone of noble status could afford to wear them. Yes, these earrings belonged to the mistress, and they were given to her by Mu Rendan on their wedding day. The mistress immediately sensed trouble. She turned to glare viciously at Wood Jingyun. How dare you? But before she could finish, the young man smiled wickedly, then loudly exclaimed, aren't these earrings the mistress's most beloved possessions? These words shocked everyone. The mistress was especially frightened, and at a loss. Seeing this, Mu Rendan wanted to stop the young man from continuing, but the young man carried on anyway. Mistress, in this situation, Are you still pretending not to know? Aren't these earrings yours? At this point, Sun Yun held the earrings in front of Murendan's face, asking with murderous intent, Master Wood, whose are these? Hearing this question, Murendan wanted to explain something but couldn't say the earrings belonged to his wife. He stood there and said nothing. Sun Yun crushed the earrings fiercely. It seems you prefer punishment to leniency. Then he turned to glare at the trembling mistress. By now, she was completely panic-stricken. She staggered back a few steps, hurriedly explaining, Sir, this must be a misunderstanding. Think about it. If I had stolen the item, why would I put my own jewelry in there? This must be a frame-up. But Sun Yun wouldn't listen to her explanations. In the next second, his massive blade swung toward the mistress's head. Fortunately, Murendan used all his life's energy to quickly place his sword in front of the blade. With a clang, his precious sword was immediately bent out of shape, and he himself was blasted away by the tremendous force. Now, looking at Murendan lying on the ground, Sun Yun coldly stated, Since none of you know where that item is, it means you have no reason to live. With that, Sun Yun walked toward the kneeling Wood Clan guards. Not only did you steal the Heaven and Earth Society's treasure, but you dare to mock us. This cannot be tolerated. Saying this, he killed the guard kneeling at the front with one strike of his blade. Seeing this, the young man whispered to Murendan, Will you tell me now? Didn't I say I would tell you later? But the young man just coldly smiled. It seems you want to wait until things are completely out of control before speaking. By now, Sun Yun had begun a frenzied killing spree. The guards fell one after another under his blade. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly spoke up, Sir, I have something to report. The speaker was Huan, the mistress's personal guard. She pointed toward Mu Enping and Mu Yutian, saying, As the manor master's wife, if something happened to her, the position of the eldest son would be affected, and these people would benefit and gain the manor master's position. So they are the real culprits. Instantly, everyone's attention focused on Mu Enping and the others. However, Huan's next words shocked them even more. The place storing the treasure also contained Burning Sword Manor's martial arts manuals. They must have taken the manuals and stolen the treasure. Hearing this, the young man secretly laughed, because everything was proceeding according to his plan. Earlier, he had given the manuals to Mu Enping and Mu Yutian. It was all for this moment, and Huan's actions were also his arrangement, because the demon monk had already possessed her body. Hearing this, Mu Enping anxiously shouted, What nonsense are you talking about? Mu Yutian was the same, vehemently denying how he could possibly do such a thing. Only the young man stood silently to the side, and the two men's words successfully caught Sun Yun's attention. Those who just responded, I will skin you alive. Hearing this, Murendan finally realized the gravity of the situation. He turned to look at Mu Jingyun, whose face showed he was merely enjoying the spectacle, which infuriated him to the point of trembling. He screamed hysterically, The person who carved that scar on my body was Ghost Sword of the 6 Heavens 8 Stars. Hearing this name, the young man smiled. He had finally found a clue to that person. However, at that moment, the young man's expression suddenly changed. A series of bell sounds echoed throughout the manor. The demon monk possessing Huan's body let out a painful howl, and he departed from her body. Simultaneously, that mysterious spellmaster slowly appeared. The moment he saw the figure, the young man had only one thought, that this person was dangerous. When Sun Yun heard that the item the Heaven and Earth Society was seeking was on the young man, he looked fiercely at Mu Jingyun. If you deceive me again, no matter what requests Master Zhao makes, I will definitely cut you into pieces. Faced with Sun Yun's naked threat, the young man showed no fear. He merely raised his hand lightly, pointing to his head. I'm sorry, but the item you want has been burned by me. However, I have memorized everything in my mind. Upon hearing this, all the masked men were in an uproar. That was their Heaven and Earth Society's treasure, and it had been burned just like that. Nearby, Murendan was terrified. Originally, he thought that if Mu Jingyun could hand over that book, Burning Sword Manor might escape calamity. He never expected him to even taunt Sun Yun to his face. However, unexpectedly, Sun Yun didn't get angry after hearing this. Instead, he burst into laughter. Are all the so-called righteous sects just a bunch of liars? Hearing this, the young man coldly retorted, Why do you think I'm lying? Sun Yun's expression changed dramatically, his eyes full of murderous intent fixed on the young man. Because what you said is impossible. That book cannot be burned, nor can it be destroyed. It's as if it's protected by something. You haven't even seen what the treasure book looks like, yet you dare waste my time again. If that's the case, I'll grant your wish. With that, Sun Yun raised his great sword. Remember not to lie in your next life. Then a sharp sword light slashed toward the young man's neck. However, in the next second, the young man's words made that sword light halt abruptly. You mean that book made of human skin can't be burned? But the blood-written content inside burns very quickly. Instantly, Sun Yun was shocked. He looked at the young man in disbelief. This guy had actually seen that book. It should be noted that within the Heaven and Earth Society, only a very few in power knew that the human skin magic book was written in blood. Sun Yun's body involuntarily trembled. Seeing Sun Yun's expression, so different from before, the young man was also surprised. Although he knew the importance of this human skin magic book, he hadn't expected it to make someone of this caliber react so strongly. At this point, Sun Yun still refused to believe what the young man said was true, because he had personally witnessed countless masters being gradually devoured by the human skin magic book. No one could survive after seeing that book, so he suspected that if the other party wasn't lying, he must have been lucky to survive by chance. With a trembling voice, he asked the young man, Did you really see that book? The young man replied calmly, In this situation, what reason would I have to deceive you? Sun Yun stared at Wood Jingyun intently. By now, sweat had soaked through his clothes. He could detect no panic in the young man's eyes. If what the young man said was true, he could finally report back to that person. But out of caution, he said, Since you claim to have memorized the contents, then whether it's incantations or techniques, prove it to me. Hearing Sun Yun's words, everyone in Burning Sword Manor, including Murendan, looked anxiously at Wood Jingyun. Initially, upon learning that Wood Jingyun had taken the treasure, they felt deeply betrayed. But in the current situation, the only person who could save them was Wood Jingyun. They just hoped everything the young man said was true. Meanwhile, the young man frowned. Although he could modify some content as he had deceived Wood Yuchen before, the other party was the book's owner. If they knew the book's contents, he might lose his life. If that's the case, let me pick out a couple of sentences to test first, thought the young man as he prepared to speak. However, in the next second, a surge of crimson blood flowed toward him. Looking up again, that blood was like a tide, already spreading across the entire square. Simultaneously, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. Boy, if you dare utter a single line from inside, you're dead. As the voice faded, A figure stood on the rooftop. It was Chinger, who had been absent for a long time. However, the moment he saw Chinger, the young man sensed something was wrong. She was completely different from usual. From Chinger, the young man felt only an overwhelming anger. That anger created an illusion for him, as if he were in a deep sea of blood. It was capable of devouring everything. And now Chinger stood in the moonlight, glaring viciously at the Heaven and Earth Society members. Although he didn't know why Chinger harbored such hatred toward them, since she had stopped him, she must not want these people to know the contents. But if he remained silent now, he might be killed by Sun Yun. The young man couldn't help but frown. Before avenging his grandfather, he didn't want to die so easily. But what should he do now? Just then, Chinger's soft voice reached his ear. Chinger sensed the young man's current dilemma, so she told him to just follow her instructions. This made the young man even more confused. Do you want me to tell them the wrong content? Sun Yun and his people should know the magic book's contents. If he recited incorrect incantations, he would surely die. After listening, Chinger calmly replied, "You just need to trust me. If you die, this master cannot escape either." Hearing this, the young man could only sigh lightly. On the other side, seeing that the young man still hadn't spoken, Sun Yun was getting impatient. But then the young man silently walked to a masked man's side. He snatched the sword from the man's hand. The masked man was shocked, thinking the young man intended to resist to the death. But unexpectedly, he just stood there silently, closing his eyes. Meanwhile, Chinger removed the hairpin from her head. Using it as a sword, she began demonstrating techniques. Her red clothes fluttered with the sword shadows. It's like falling petals in the moonlight. The young man followed her movements and began wielding the sword, perfectly recreating those techniques. As an incantation escaped his lips, a sharp sword energy spread outward along the blade. The technique demonstrated by the young man had not a single unnecessary movement. Clearly a supreme sword technique. Not only were the people of Burning Sword Manor, but even Sun Yun was stunned by this move. They couldn't imagine how a martial artist of only third-rate level could execute such a perfect sword move. This not only proved the exquisiteness of the sword technique, but also showcased the young man's unparalleled martial arts talent. Sun Yun was surprised and happy. To his knowledge, this incantation was the Moon Shadow Sword technique, lost for over 100 years. However, just as he was about to laugh heartily, the masked men around became agitated, because the young man had begun reciting the incantation for the second move. Sun Yun sensed trouble. He hurriedly tried to stop him. If the Moon Shadow Sword technique were made public this way, it would cause serious problems. Seeing Sun Yun's expression, the young man slowly stopped his movements. He smiled triumphantly. At this moment, he was certain he had won his gamble, because he had never seen these two incantations in the human skin magic book. But judging from Sun Yun's nervous expression, it seemed this was indeed the book's content. For a moment, he wasn't sure which was the case, so he asked Sun Yun for confirmation. Only then did Sun Yun come to his senses. In his excitement earlier, he had unconsciously revealed a nervous expression, which complicated matters. This sword technique, unless permitted, should absolutely not be known by others. So in principle, he should first obtain the complete manual, then kill the other party. But now, Master Zhao saw that Sun Yun had murderous intent. Then he called out to stop him. Sun Yun understood that Master Zhao was interested in this boy. So was he. After all, this boy had accomplished what no one in the Heaven and Earth Society could. And with his unparalleled martial arts talent, this boy would surely reach the pinnacle of the martial arts world in the future. Unfortunately, anyone who knew the contents of the human skin magic book had to die. Just as he was considering how to handle this next, the boy smiled eerily. Without hesitation, he raised a long sword and slashed at his own neck. "Are you insane?" This action shocked everyone there. Sun Yun swiftly knocked the sword from the boy's hand with lightning speed. Only he knew that if he hadn't stopped him in time, the boy would have definitely cut off his own head. The boy covered his bleeding wound, laughing coldly. "It seems the secret manual must be extremely valuable, but I don't intend to talk so easily, so take me away." Upon hearing this, everyone at the Burning Sword Manor widened their eyes in disbelief, never expecting Mu Jingyun to voluntarily offer to go with them, which was no different from suicide. Yet this also seemed to be the best solution. Meanwhile, Sun Yun was surprised to hear the boy volunteer to return to the Heaven and Earth Society. At first, he was slightly astonished, but upon further reflection, it truly was the best method. This youth couldn't be made to talk merely through torture or threats, so they could only take him back to the Heaven and Earth Society. However, what he didn't know was, the boy made such a bold decision. He was simply to use these people to escape from Burning Sword Manor. Shortly after, the Heaven and Earth Society members departed from Burning Sword Manor in grand fashion. Inside the carriage, the boy was bound hand and foot, being transported to the headquarters, and beside him, another person was similarly bound and taken from Burning Sword Manor. Mu Yuqian sighed, not understanding why he too was being taken as a hostage. This all began 2 hours earlier. After Mu Jingyun proposed to voluntarily go with the Heaven and Earth Society, King Mingdao, Sun Yun, struck directly. He knocked him unconscious with one palm strike, but Sun Yun didn't leave afterwards. Instead, he made 2 demands to Mu Rendan. After all, he had stolen from the Heaven and Earth Society, and this matter couldn't be resolved so simply. Sun Yun raised his hand and said, "If you don't accept my demands, I can destroy Burning Sword Manor completely right now." Mu Rendan frowned deeply but could only bow his head in silence. First, Burning Sword Manor must close its doors for 10 years and stay out of the martial world. Second, your heir will be taken as a hostage. These words plunged the entire Burning Sword Manor into silence. They didn't have many complaints about the first point, as it was better than everyone going to their deaths. But the second point made the Mu brothers tense, especially Mu Yutian. When he saw them all pointing their fingers at him, he was even dumbfounded. And so, Mu Yutian successfully became a hostage. Now, though he hadn't been knocked unconscious, he was still bound tightly and couldn't move. Moreover, his pressure points had been sealed, preventing him from using his internal energy. Still, compared to Mu Jingyun beside him, his situation was somewhat better. At this moment, Mu Yutian was filled with lament. He had thought that once his father awoke, he would have his chance to rise, but instead found himself in such a miserable predicament. He didn't know what would happen next, as he was lost in thought. He suddenly heard a strange noise nearby, but in this carriage there was only him and Mu Jingyun, who had his pressure points sealed and couldn't possibly be awake. So, who made that sound? As he puzzled over this, the blindfold covering his eyes was suddenly pulled off. Mu Yutian immediately widened his eyes. "It's you, Mu Jingyun! How did you?" Before he could finish, the boy made a gesture for silence. He calmly checked the situation outside the carriage, then said, "If you answer one question for me, I'll untie your ropes." Mu Yutian was curious about what he wanted to ask. The boy looked at Mu Yutian expressionlessly and asked, "Who is the ghost sword of the 6 heavens 8 stars?" Hearing the boy's question, Muyutian frowned. The notorious reputation of Ghost Sword was known to all in the martial world, but judging from the boy's calm expression, he seemed genuinely unaware of Ghost Sword's identity. So in the time that followed, Muyutian shared everything he knew. After listening to Muyutian's answer, the boy's expression grew solemn. So Ghost Sword might be in that place? Although it's just a rumor, it shouldn't be wrong. The boy fell silent. From Muyutian's account, he had learned information about Ghost Sword, but now because of that place, the situation had become complicated. As he was considering how to respond next, he heard Chinger's voice. "Mortal, it's all clear outside." Upon hearing this, the boy immediately crouched down to untie Muyutian, which startled him. "Are you planning to escape? If we do this, Burning Sword Manor will face retribution again." The boy seemed unconcerned. "What does that have to do with me? If you don't want to leave with me, then stay here." With that, he delivered a swift chop to Muyutian's neck, instantly knocking him unconscious. Under normal circumstances, he would never have been able to knock him out so easily, but this was only possible because Muyutian's internal energy had been sealed. Realizing this, the boy left the carriage without looking back. The scene outside was now in complete disarray. Chinger was impatiently urging the boy to leave quickly. However, just as the boy stepped down from the carriage, a strange feeling suddenly washed over him. Though it lasted only an instant, it left the boy standing there dumbfounded for a long while. Just then, Chinger's urging voice came to his ears again. The boy didn't linger any longer. He flexed his body. Then he began to channel the burning wood heart technique, the death energy within him flowing from his dantian throughout his entire body. In the next moment, his body shot forward like an arrow. In an instant, his figure had traveled several hundred yards away. His speed was incomparable to ordinary running. Thus, under the moonlight, a shadow rapidly darted through the forest. However, as he ran, the boy noticed something unusual. Though it had only been half an hour, he had repeatedly seen the same scenery. He stopped to observe carefully. This also made Chinger extremely curious. The boy pointed to a withered tree nearby. "I've seen this tree 4 times already. It seems we've been going in circles." Hearing the boy's words, Chinger frowned slightly. "Could you be mistaken? If we had fallen under some sort of spell, I would certainly have noticed." Then Chinger waved dismissively. "Perhaps you're just too nervous. We should focus on getting away." With that, Chinger walked ahead without looking back. But the boy suddenly called to her, claiming that he might have twisted his ankle due to unfamiliarity with the technique. He suggested they rest for a while, which immediately angered Chinger. "At this rate, when will we ever get out of here?" "Fine. Let me take a look at it first." As she said this, she reached toward the boy's ankle, but just as Chinger bent down, the boy suddenly gripped her throat. "Who are you really?" At these words, Chinger began to struggle, shouting, "Mortal, have you gone mad? Let go of me. If you were the real Chinger, you would have pushed me away long ago." As he spoke, his grip tightened, and Chinger's body began to crack piece by piece. The boy laughed coldly. "If you want to impersonate someone, you should do it more convincingly." But as soon as he finished speaking with a loud bang, Chinger's entire body transformed into a wooden puppet. Seeing this, the boy immediately clasped his hands together, then closed his eyes and began to recite an incantation. Next, an invisible wave of death energy spread outward. In the next second, the entire space began to fracture piece by piece, with a crisp sound. Master Zhao's figure appeared before the boy. The sudden turn of events startled even Master Zhao. After all, the Willow Spirit cultivation method was an advanced technique that could transform a willow doll into a figure trusted by the target. Yet this young man had seen through it in less than half an hour. Such exceptional talent was truly rare. Master Zhao's lips curled upward as he said directly, "Kid, become my disciple." When the boy heard Master Zhao wanted to take him as a disciple, his gaze instantly sharpened. Nevertheless, he cautiously surveyed his surroundings. But he detected no one else nearby. At this moment, Master Zhao was only 10 paces away from him. At this distance, the boy believed he could easily subdue the other. However, just as he was about to make his move, he keenly sensed something amiss. The same feeling he had when stepping down from the carriage. Simultaneously, a bloody gash appeared on his cheek. The space around them began to manifest with runes. "You thought you could attack me just because no one else is around?" Master Zhao's eyes flashed with a strange light. "I've set up barriers all around. If you try to break out, your body might be torn to pieces. Surviving in such a cruel world requires thorough preparation. That's the first lesson I want to teach you." Hearing Master Zhao's words, the boy was slightly stunned. "I haven't agreed to become your disciple yet." To this, Master Zhao paid no mind, instead pulling out a wooden puppet and throwing it to the boy. The puppet had a seal attached to it, with a red thread connecting it firmly to the boy. This puppet contains the sealed demon monk. From the puppet, the boy couldn't sense any of the demon monk's energy, which made him curious about how the other had accomplished this. Just then, Master Zhao spoke again. "Let me give you some advice. Since you possess the Heaven and Earth Society's secrets, your life depends entirely on the mood of their leadership. But if you become my disciple, you'll at least have a chance to survive." Master Zhao knew the boy before him was someone who would bargain even with a sword at his throat, so he hoped to break him down with this approach. Yet the boy remained expressionless, staring intently at the puppet in his hand. After pondering for a moment, he surprisingly agreed. "But in return, I have one condition. You must tell me how you seal the demon monk." Hearing this, Master Zhao burst into laughter. "Had I known, I wouldn't have needed to threaten you." He pulled something else from his waist. "Very well, this isn't difficult for me. I was planning to teach you anyway, but first, you must swear an oath." The boy took what Master Zhao tossed him, looking puzzled at the completely black string of prayer beads. "Just wear it on your wrist and say, 'I, Mu Jingyun, will become Zhao Yigong's disciple.'" The boy asked what would happen afterward. "Once you've sworn, you'll be unable to harm me. After all, I can't trust someone who might try to kill me and escape." Hearing this, the boy didn't hesitate. He tucked the puppet into his robe and immediately began the oath. As the oath was completed, the string of beads made a crisp sound, revealing the characters for curse. These prayer beads were the legendary cursed beads. Anyone who swore while wearing them could neither remove them nor disobey the commands of the oath's target. This was Zhao Yigong's scheme. He was the type of person who must obtain whatever he wanted. Now Zhao Yigong wore a satisfied expression. He tossed another book made of cowhide to the boy. It was a manual personally written by him. "This records what you want to learn. Memorize it all, then return it to me," Zhao Yigong said, turning to leave. But after just a few steps, the boy called out to him, "Aren't you going to release me from this spell?" To this question, Zhao Yigong smiled. "This book also contains the method to break the spell. I'll give you 1 hour. If you still can't solve it, you'll be in big trouble." With that, he disappeared into the forest without looking back. The boy grunted softly. "How interesting. It seems he intended to give me these things all along." Just then, a figure floated down lightly from above. It was Chinger, who had been missing. She had finally waited for Zhao Yigong to leave before daring to reappear. However, the boy looked at her suspiciously. Then, catching her off guard, he grabbed at her body, but Qinger easily evaded. Qinger angrily asked what the boy was trying to do. The boy, embarrassed, replied, "I was just performing a small test." But the next moment, Qinger burst into laughter, because she remembered how the boy had been jumping around in the illusion earlier, which was utterly hilarious. But in an instant, she suppressed her laughter. She curiously asked why the boy had done such a thing, especially since the beads contained such powerful curse energy. "Because this is the only way I could get this," said the boy, looking again at the manual in his hand. Qinger was speechless. "Were you really just after this thing? That doesn't sound like you at all." But in the next second, the boy effortlessly removed the beads from his wrist. This astonished Qinger, who frowned and asked how he had managed it. "Doesn't an oath have to begin with one's own name? But my real name isn't Mu Jingyun, so the oath could never take effect." Hearing this, Qinger finally understood. "So are you planning to escape now?" "No, I've changed my mind. I want to become his disciple." Qinger was completely unsettled. She couldn't understand why the boy would make such a decision. "Do you really want to become a disciple of the Heaven and Earth Society?" The boy didn't answer directly, but instead shared what he had learned in the carriage. It turned out Mu Yutian had told him that Ghost Sword, as one of the 6 heavens' 8 stars, represented the pinnacle of power in the current martial world. It was said that 6 of them had transcended the realm of humanity, while the remaining 8 possessed the strongest combat abilities among humans. However, Ghost Sword had disappeared for 17 years, but rumor suggested that his targets were all highly renowned masters in the martial world. So people speculated he was either a member of the royal family or a master from the Heaven and Earth Society. Therefore, he was likely within the Heaven and Earth Society. This meant that if he went to the Heaven and Earth Society, he might find him. So when Zhao Yigong proposed to take the boy as his disciple, he began to calculate how to infiltrate the Heaven and Earth Society. After all, the darkness under the lamp would make it convenient for him to find what he sought. After hearing the boy's explanation, Qinger remained silent for a long time. She slowly exhaled a mouthful of smoke. "How coincidental. It seems from the moment I met you, our fates were already determined." Hearing this, the boy couldn't help but wonder why Qinger suddenly spoke of such things. But before he could ask, Qinger looked at him resolutely. "Become my disciple. Share the karmic burden of the moon lineage with me. Let blood debts be paid in blood." Qinger's tone was completely different from usual. Every word from her mouth was filled with killing intent. Thinking carefully, it seemed her anger was all directed toward the Heaven and Earth Society. Indeed, she wanted revenge against the Heaven and Earth Society. But what puzzled the boy was that, given Qinger's age, the targets of her revenge should have long since died. Can't such a long time dilute the hatred in your heart? Qinger's red lips trembled. "If it were you, would your hatred gradually dissipate with time?" At this moment, the boy fell silent, because in his heart he shared the same thoughts as Qinger. "So, I absolutely cannot forgive that bastard and his bloodline existing in this world. Nor will I forget the humiliation suffered after the truth was buried. Even after thousands of years, when the targets of my revenge have long decayed, the anger in my heart can never be erased. Thus, I must destroy them, even if it means staining everything with blood." In this moment, the boy once again felt Qinger's purest anger. That anger transformed into a sea of blood, slowly engulfing him. Gradually, his body sank deeper and deeper. Though the boy knew this was all an illusion created by Qinger's anger, he still witnessed the deepest hatred in Qinger's heart. Even after more than 100 years, it remained so cold and dark, just like himself, struggling to live on to avenge his grandfather. In this moment, the boy's thoughts crystallized. "I understand. I am willing to become your disciple." Hearing this, Qinger was stunned. She hadn't expected the boy to agree so quickly and didn't know what to say. She simply stared at him silently. After a long while, she finally turned her head away proudly, stammering, "That's how it should have been all along." But before she could finish, the boy spoke again. "However, as a condition, you must tell me the reason for your revenge. I don't want to involve myself in something I don't understand." Qinger frowned. She exhaled another mouthful of smoke, her expression dimming as she said, "If that's the case, I'll tell you one part of it. It turned out that when the Heaven and Earth Society was first established, it was formed by 3 lineages, one of which was the Moon lineage." After hearing Qinger's words, the boy seemed to guess something. "So, you are a member of the Moon lineage." Qinger didn't deny this. "That's all I can tell you for now. What you need to do is inherit the karmic burden of the Moon lineage." Hearing this, the boy silently gazed at Qinger, trying to discern her thoughts. Yet after looking for a long time, he still couldn't see through her. He was curious about what had happened back then that made Qinger so reluctant to speak of it. Finally, the boy clasped his hands together and sincerely told Qinger his true name. "My name is Zhang." At this moment, moonlight fell on Qinger's face, as if time had frozen, until a breeze brushed past his sleeves, and the boy's voice reached his ears once more. "I will accept the arrangement of fate, inherit all the karma of the Moon lineage, and willingly become Qinger's disciple." Hearing the boy's oath, Qinger smiled so brilliantly. Perhaps at this moment she saw hope for her revenge. As fates intertwined, under the witness of moonlight, the boy made his vow, willingly becoming Qinger's disciple. Now, seeing the boy's sincere gaze, Qinger's eyes sparkled with immense satisfaction. She slowly exhaled a plume of smoke. "Very well. From now on, you must call me master." However, this request was quickly rejected by the boy, who calmly stated, "This is my second condition. Let's skip the formal master-disciple titles from now on." This infuriated Qinger. "How can you do this? You called that spellmaster master, but why not me?" The boy looked disgusted, pulling out the puppet sealing the demon monk from his robe. "As a spirit, you see, the demon monk always calls me master, yet I don't see you calling me that." At these words, Qinger could only silently turn her head away, inwardly cursing the demon monk thoroughly. Seeing this, the boy merely smiled faintly. In truth, if he was to go to the Heaven and Earth Society, he would need to learn the remaining techniques from the magic book from Qinger, so calling her master would indeed be appropriate. But regardless, since his scheme had succeeded, he'd leave it at that for now. With this in mind, he opened the manual in his hand and began trying to dispel the surrounding barriers. An hour later, the masked men who had been drawn away began to return one by one. Zhao Yigong looked toward the northwestern forest with slight disappointment. He had expected the boy to break the barrier quickly, but now it had been almost an hour. This made him wonder if his requirements had been too strict. But in reality, an hour wasn't that long. After all, mastering specific techniques in such a short time was extremely difficult, especially in such a dangerous situation. Nevertheless, Zhao Yigong decided to go and release the barrier himself. However, just then, the boy's figure slowly emerged from the forest. The masked men were alarmed and attempted to subdue him, but Zhao Yigong stopped them. Then they saw the boy address Zhao Yigong as Master. Though the masked men were puzzled, they dared not say anything. Now Zhao Yigong looked at the boy before him with excitement in his eyes, but his words continued to rebuke the boy for being later than expected. In reality, the boy's speed had completely exceeded his expectations. Among all the talented individuals he had identified, the boy had the most potential. But now that Mu Jingyun had become his disciple, he also planned to avoid praising him too much. He simply gave an order for the boy to return to the carriage and rest. As the carriage slowly began to move, the convoy once again set out toward their destination. Back in the carriage, the boy finally breathed a sigh of relief. Mu Yutian was still lying in the carriage, snoring away. At this point, the boy's lips curled into a smile as he whispered, "It seems we weren't discovered." As he spoke, a thumb-sized puppet emerged from his robe. I never imagined I would have to hide in such a puppet. The speaker was Chinger. To help Chinger conceal her aura, the boy had not only learned barrier techniques in an extremely short time, but also used the remaining time to master the art of infusing spirits into puppets. If Zhao Yigong knew this, he would probably laugh himself senseless. Unfortunately, due to Chinger's high level, even the slightest movement would cause cracks in the puppet. Thankfully, owing to the boy's mastery of the techniques, the puppet remained intact, but Chinger was not comfortable being confined inside. The boy could only reassure her that he would find her a suitable body when the opportunity arose. Thus, the boy began his long journey to the Heaven and Earth Society. Half a month later, troops from all directions had converged. At this moment, not far from the forest, a figure was observing the direction of the convoy. This person was Xia Kaling, possessed by Gukan. He was extremely conflicted, on one hand complaining about becoming a woman, and on the other regretting making such a decision. Ever since Mu Jingyun was taken away by King Mingdao Sun Yun, he had been following the carriage. After becoming the boy's spirit, a connection had formed between them, so he instinctively knew where Mu Jingyun was. Actually, if not for becoming a spirit, this would have been the perfect opportunity to escape from Mu Jingyun. But the further he went, the more anxious he felt. Perhaps because he knew that if Mu Jingyun died, he would also disappear. So no matter what, if he wanted to remain in this world, he had to help Mu Jingyun survive. But at the thought of snatching a hostage from the Heaven and Earth Society, he immediately became cowardly. Well, I can't go on like this. I must first come up with a plan. As a top assassin of the Flying Kill sect, Xia Kaling must have some experience in infiltration. By tracing her memories, he might discover some infiltration methods he had never tried before. Just then, an idea came to Wu Can's mind: seduction. Fortunately, when this thought emerged, a wave of shame instantly swept through his entire body, which helped him overcome his rationality and preserve his last bit of dignity. However, there was one thing that seemed very strange to Gukan throughout the journey. Since the Heaven and Earth Society had already achieved their goal, why weren't they returning directly? Why were they taking detours? And every 2 days, he would see 15 or 16-year-old boys joining the group. This situation gave him an ominous premonition. Regarding this point, the boy had also noticed early on. He had asked Zhao Yigong several times, but the replies always told him not to meddle in affairs that didn't concern him. So in the time that followed, he could only stay in the carriage and focus on studying the manual. Until this day, the procession of over 300 people, led by King Mingdao Sun Yun, suddenly halted. Sun Yun's face lit up with excitement as he shouted toward the front, "This place is still as magnificent as ever." Hearing the voice, the boy also climbed out of the carriage. Before his eyes was a massive city, standing among countless towering peaks, isolated within by a high wall. They only needed to pass through the majestic gate ahead to enter. Seeing the scene, the puppet in the boy's hands suddenly spoke. "Are you nervous?" The boy didn't answer. Chinger reminded him that he'd better be nervous, because with his current strength, if he encountered a true master here, he probably wouldn't last half a round. But in fact, the boy's growth rate had already reached an incredible pace. In just one short month, he had progressed from a third-rate level to a first-class master. This was all thanks to the death energy he had absorbed at Burning Sword Manor, giving him internal power equivalent to half of 60 years. This would make anyone envious. However, though Chinger appeared calm on the surface, her heart remained deeply worried. After all, scenes like those at Burning Sword Manor weren't common. Moreover, once the boy entered the Pinnacle Realm, he could no longer rely solely on absorbing death energy to cultivate. He would need to gain insights on his own to progress further, or he might remain stagnant for life. So, if she wanted the boy to shoulder the karmic burden of the moon lineage, he would need to grow stronger at an even faster rate, and also need some luck. As Chinger was diligently analyzing the current situation, the boy suddenly sensed something was wrong. Because at this moment, the convoy wasn't entering the city through the main gate, but instead it was moving along the wall in another direction. Just as the boy was puzzled, the carriage door was suddenly pushed open by Zhao Yigong, who said anxiously that something had happened. Before the boy could ask what was happening, Zhao Yigong rummaged through his clothes and pulled out an object. Without hesitation, he shoved it into the boy's hand. "No time to explain, take this quickly." It was an ancient ring covered with tiny inscriptions. "Just wear this, and you can use spells even without talismans." The boy was curious why Zhao Yigong would give him such an item, but Zhao Yigong didn't explain. Instead, he muttered to himself, "I can't expect such an absurd thing would happen. I thought as a hostage they wouldn't do that to you, but I never expected you would also be sent to that place." It turned out that just moments ago, the leader of the Heaven and Earth Society personally issued an order to send the two brothers to Blood Corpse Valley. Blood Corpse Valley, serving as the testing ground for the Heaven and Earth Society. Every year, countless youths are sent there, but less than 10% manage to survive. In that place, there is no so-called mercy or kindness, only endless killing, and corpses strewn across the mountains. At this moment, although the young man had not yet entered that place, from Zhao Yigong's words, he could already deeply sense the terror and bloodiness of Blood Corpse Valley. Zhao Yigong clenched his fists, feeling discontented that his hard-found talented disciple was being thrown there to die. "I will immediately report to the master and bring you out." As he spoke, he looked excitedly at the young man, saying, "During this time, you must do everything possible to survive." No sooner had he finished speaking than a voice suddenly sounded from outside the carriage. "This is as far as it goes. From now on, no one except the examinees is permitted to enter." A group of red-turbaned masked men blocked the carriage. They fixed their haunting eyes upon the young man, saying, "Welcome to Blood Corpse Valley." At this time, Muyutian followed along with the crowd as they entered Blood Corpse Valley. Since he had been in an unconscious state for the past month except during mealtimes, he had no idea where he was heading. However, he now spotted Mu Jingyun also in the crowd and shouted out to him. Then he pushed aside the people in front to ask Mu Jingyun for clarification. But in the next second, a warrior behind him struck him with a club. Although his acupuncture points had been released, his internal energy remained sealed, so he could only obey orders and move forward quietly like a prisoner. Meanwhile, in complete contrast to Muyutian, the young man appeared exceptionally calm. Earlier, he had sensed trouble through Zhao Yigong's warning. Now the only thing puzzling him was why everyone here had their internal energy sealed with silver needles, including himself and Mu Yutian. Thinking about this, he asked Chinger what was going on. To this, Chinger was also uncertain, but she was sure that the Heaven and Earth Society had never done such things before, and she urged the young man to be extremely careful as this place was very strange. Thus, after about 3 hours of travel, the crowd finally reached a wide open space ahead. Many young people were already waiting there. With Mu Jingyun's group, there were at least 800 people gathered. Just as they arrived, a thunderous voice rang out, "Welcome to Blood Corpse Valley." Immediately, all eyes turned toward the source. On the platform ahead stood a figure wearing a demon mask, with hands behind his back, standing proudly. "From now on, you will begin the first task." With that, he pulled a finger-sized iron ball out of his pocket. While everyone was puzzled, the demon mask continued. "In the valley's waters, there are many iron balls like this one. You need to find one within the specified time. If you fail to complete the task, you will result in death." With these words, the crowd instantly became restless. It was already late at night. Although there were warriors holding torches around, finding small iron balls in such darkness would be like searching for a needle in the ocean. Just then, a young man about 16 or 17 raised his hand and said, "We are all elites selected from our respective sects, yet now we must lose our lives over a small iron ball. Isn't that too much?" However, before he could finish speaking, there was a sudden piercing sound. The iron ball in the demon mask's hand directly penetrated his head. Instantly, everyone around displayed expressions of shock. As they began to panic, the demon mask spoke loudly again. "Here, strength, status, and everything else will lose meaning. There is only unconditional obedience to orders. Therefore, anyone who dares to question or resist will lose their life." In an instant, the previously noisy valley fell silent. Faced with the threat of death, they were all terrified. At this point, the demon mask lit a long spear. "Let me remind you, the number of iron balls in the valley is far fewer than the number of people here, so you'd better get moving quickly." Scene changes to a room where Zhao Yigong is anxiously pacing back and forth. Beside him is the equally anxious Ming Dao King Sun Yun. Zhao Yigong asks with a frustrated face, "Why didn't you tell the leader I've already taken him as my disciple?" To this, Sun Yun scoffs. "It wouldn't have made any difference. When have you ever seen the leader take back an order?" Zhao Yigong fell silent immediately. As Sun Yun said, once the leader issued an order, he would never retract it, and sometimes would even severely punish those who failed to execute orders. Considering this, convincing the leader was impossible. But having finally found such a talented person, how could he bear to lose him? In fact, Sun Yun shared the same thought. The young man was the first person able to recite the contents of the Human Skin Demonic Book. Countless people had lost their lives trying to understand it. Not to mention that he had also learned the Moon Shadow Sword technique, which had been lost for over 100 years. Now he was sent to Blood Corpse Valley without even meeting the leader, making this handling difficult to comprehend. At this point, Zhao Yigong spoke again. "This won't do. I must plead with the leader. We cannot let that precious young man die like this." Hearing this, Sun Yun looked at him with a strange expression. But suddenly, Sun Yun's gaze became sharp. Could the reason the leader sent that young man to Blood Corpse Valley be to test him? The trial in Blood Corpse Valley finally began. As soon as the demon mask gave the command, the previously hesitant youths instantly rushed toward the valley. With over 800 people running simultaneously, the ground seemed to shake. Seeing this scene, Mu Yutian cursed inwardly, thinking he truly had the worst luck, never imagining that as a family hostage, he would face such an absurd situation. He glared fiercely at Mu Jingyun before starting to run like the other youths. He had no choice now. Even though Mu Jingyun was his half-brother from the same father, he had to find an iron ball first, or he would die. But while everyone jumped into the water frantically searching for iron balls, Mu Yutian inadvertently noticed that Mu Jingyun stood aside motionless, as if detached from the world. What is this guy doing? Has he gone mad with a death wish? But now there was no time for further contemplation. Finding a small iron ball in such darkness was extremely difficult. Everywhere one could hear the frustrated voices of youths, as searching barehanded in water inevitably caused finger injuries. Soon half the time had passed. Suddenly a voice echoed throughout the valley. "I found one." A youth held up the iron ball he had just picked up, shouting excitedly. Although his hand holding the ball was somewhat mangled, he still smiled with immense joy, partly relieved he wouldn't die, and partly excited about standing out. However, this scene also stirred malicious thoughts in those nearby. As he walked toward the platform with the iron ball, a burly youth lunged frantically toward him. The youth with the iron ball, though he was extremely exhausted, he still ran forward with all his might. But the pursuer seemed unwilling to give up, shouting as he chased, "If I catch you, I'll beat you into a meat patty." Fortunately, the speed difference between them was significant, and they were soon separated by a considerable distance. The youth with the iron ball showed a smug expression, but before he could rejoice for long, suddenly a figure blocked his path ahead. There stood Mu Jingyun, hands behind his back, expressionless. The youth with the iron ball was momentarily stunned. How did this guy get in front of him? But he quickly realized, no, he had been standing there all along, never having entered the valley. Meanwhile, on the other side, everything that had transpired was observed by the demon mask. His eyes were filled with amusement as he watched the youth's performance with interest. Now when he faced this dilemma, the youth with the iron ball made a shocking decision. "Since you all want to steal my iron ball, none of you shall have it." With that, he swallowed the iron ball without hesitation. Seeing this, the burly youth cursed in frustration that all his efforts had been in vain. But before he could finish cursing, the next second, he saw Mu Jingyun's figure move swiftly, instantly grabbing the throat of the youth who had swallowed the ball. At this moment, Mu Jingyun's lips curled into an eerie smile. "You've made things rather complicated." As he spoke, his fingers pressed against the other's throat. Before the youth could react, with a ripping sound, Mu Jingyun's hand plunged directly into his neck. The others watched as the throat was forcibly torn open. The entire scene instantly fell into complete silence. At this moment, not only the youths participating in the trial, Even the surrounding guards felt a chill. The burly youth who had been shouting moments ago now collapsed to the ground in fear, especially after meeting Mu Jingyun's demonic gaze. He felt his heart nearly explode. As the saying goes, once your spirit is suppressed, no matter how strong you are, you lose the courage to confront your opponent. So facing Mu Jingyun's ruthlessness, no one dared to step forward to stop him. Their hearts were branded with deep fear. They could only watch as Mu Jingyun submitted the iron ball. At this moment, Chinger also showed a hint of excitement, because the young man's actions seemed to have changed certain dynamics here. This was a perfect beginning for her revenge against the Heaven and Earth Society. On the other side, looking at the blood-stained iron ball in Mu Jingyun's hand, the demon mask became increasingly interested in the young man before him. He spoke softly, "Congratulations on passing the first trial. Being able to obtain an iron ball without entering the water was unprecedented in previous trials." It seems this kid planned to do this from the beginning. Thinking this, he took something from his robe, flicked it with his finger, and tossed it into Mu Jingyun's hand. It's a round silver medal with the word 1 engraved on it. This is proof that you're the first to pass the first trial. Keep it, and the iron ball safe. After speaking, he instructed the guards to take the young man aside to rest. Mu Jingyun didn't linger, but pocketed the items and followed the guards to the side. Looking at the young man's impassive figure, the demon mask fell into deep thought. Previously, he had wondered why the leader would send a child from an orthodox family to participate in the trial. Was the plan to torture them before killing them? But now it seemed otherwise. Indeed, the leader wouldn't send them here without reason. However, if the leader had seen Mu Jingyun's performance, he would also be surprised. Because despite his orthodox family background, Mu Jingyun's essence was more like someone from the demonic path. This made the demon mask increasingly interested in the young man's upcoming trials. Meanwhile, the young man sat on a rock examining the silver medallion. From the demon mask's words, he had already guessed what the Blood Corpse Valley trial was about. The reason fewer than 1 in 10 survived was because the Heaven and Earth Society wanted to screen useful people through competition here. It seemed the upcoming trials would be even more intense. Indeed, things unfolded as he predicted. Currently in the shallow valley, youths participating in the trial had begun fierce killing for iron balls. Whenever someone found an iron ball, they would be surrounded by other youths. Gradually, the youths learned to be smarter, not announcing when they found a ball, but they would be discovered as soon as they tried to leave the water. One youth tried to sneak away, but he was suddenly struck down by a bald youth with a palm strike. His body was covered with strange tattoos. Upon seeing these tattoos, those who had intended to rob him immediately stopped, showing terrified expressions. Because those tattoos indicated he was from Extermination Valley, as one of the 3 most notorious organizations under the Heaven and Earth Society, although Extermination Valley had only about 30 members. Each was a master. After submitting the iron ball, the bald youth walked disappointedly toward Mu Jingyun. "A bunch of useless trash," he muttered to Mu Jingyun beside him. "Don't think you can surpass me in the next trial, because by then I'll kill you with my own hands." Hearing this blatant threat, Mu Jingyun merely smiled coldly, unwilling to waste energy on such unnecessary matters. Meanwhile, the killing in the valley continued. Several particularly noticeable individuals emerged. One was a short-haired young woman with a fair face. Wherever she went, youths rushing toward her invariably fell to the ground. Even without using internal energy, she could mercilessly kill with just a stone in her hand. She was from Hat Flower House, once known as one of the 4 major assassin organizations, though they later quit the assassination business to join the Heaven and Earth Society. The second was a youth as strong as a bull. He came from Beijing Gate, a sect known for external martial arts. Since they trained their bodies even with internal energy sealed, they could still perform extraordinarily in this place. Besides them, some other children also showed exceptional talent. They could easily pass the first trial. As time passed, the remaining time grew shorter. Mu Tian was still in the water searching desperately, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any trace of an iron ball. He didn't understand why he, merely a hostage, had to participate in this cursed trial. Now he was thinking of giving up. Perhaps if he begged the demon mask he might be spared. However, at that moment a nearby youth holding an iron ball was suddenly decapitated. This youth was the first to find an iron ball, but to avoid becoming a target, he had waited until the fighting started. But when he asked with the iron ball in hand if he had passed, his neck was severed. The guard wiped the blood from his blade, saying, "Didn't I say not to ask questions randomly?" This scene left Mu Tian completely stunned. At this moment, he finally understood that here, regardless of identity, the only outcome for not following rules was death. What he didn't know was that the youth was killed, because the iron ball he held was the one the demon mask had thrown out initially. It had no number engraved on it. Nearby, Mu Jingyun chuckled after witnessing this. The number on his iron ball was 63. My luck seems quite good. He had originally thought that with his internal energy sealed, he would be unable to absorb death energy. But just as he was secretly relieved not to have received a numberless iron ball, he suddenly sensed something unusual. The aura of death had already spread throughout the valley, beginning to gather around him without warning. So Mu Jingyun, testing his theory, extended his hand into the air. Following the flow of death energy, he began reciting an incantation. Unexpectedly, as soon as the incantation left his lips, the surrounding death energy, as if summoned, rapidly converged toward his palm. This scene excited him greatly. It was indeed as he had suspected. Even with internal energy sealed, he could still smoothly operate his techniques. It seemed the spells from the human skin demonic book were truly marvelous. Thinking this, he wasted no time and began greedily absorbing the surrounding death energy. As death energy continuously poured into his body, he felt as if he was back at Burning Sword Manor, though the death energy here was much more concentrated than at Burning Sword Manor. Looking at the youth still fiercely fighting, Mu Jingyun's eyes grew increasingly crimson. Yes, continue killing each other like this. The more they killed, the more death energy he could absorb. However, this perplexing behavior quickly caught the attention of the demon mask. Although the demon mask was unsure what Mu Jingyun was doing, he seemed to sense the continuous changes in the young man. As time continued to pass, only 1 minute remained for the first trial, yet many youths were still killing each other for iron balls. Now, Mu Yutian had a youth pinned beneath him, pounding his face with punch after punch. At this moment, the strong desire to survive seemed to have awakened the deepest demon within Mu Yutian. Only after beating the youth beneath him to a bloody pulp, did Mu Yutian stop. He picked up the blood-stained iron ball with trembling hands. He sat slumped in the water, staring blankly. To obtain this iron ball, he couldn't remember how many people he had killed. He only felt as if he had transformed into a beast, with nothing in his mind except killing and a single thought: survive. Just at this moment, the long incense burned its last ember. Simultaneously, the demon mask's voice sounded again. Trial ended. All who failed to obtain an iron ball will be executed without mercy. In an instant, the entire valley echoed with wails. With their internal energy sealed, the youths had no resistance against the armed guards. Watching the bodies falling around him, Mu Yutian was stunned. He'd only just gotten the iron ball and hadn't had a chance to turn it in yet. Was he going to die like the others? At this time, an armed guard approached him. Mu Yutian, with a blank expression, he slowly raised the iron ball in his hand. At this moment, fear completely occupied his entire being. But what he didn't expect was, the guard gently patted his shoulder, said "Passed," and then turned to leave. In an instant, all tension and fear vanished without a trace. He collapsed to the ground, his first thought being that he had survived. However, when he saw his blood-stained hands, a sense of guilt welled up. What have I done? Although he knew he had fought desperately for survival, he still couldn't accept this version of himself. Thus, of the original 800+ participants in the trial, only 468 remained. Upon learning the final number, the demon mask laughed loudly. Actually, 60% survived. He seemed quite satisfied with this result. However, for those who had died, he showed not the slightest concern. After speaking, he congratulated the youths below. Congratulations on passing the first trial. The youths just listened quietly. In these 2 hours, they had exhausted themselves for survival. Though now utterly fatigued, they were all secretly relieved to be alive. Looking at them, the demon mask continued. You should already know, each iron ball is engraved with a different number. Please remember it well, as it will serve as your only identifier here from now on. With that, the demon mask clapped his hands. Now, let's begin the second trial immediately. Upon hearing the demon mask's words, the youths who had barely caught their breath immediately became restless. Especially those who had barely passed as the incense was about to burn out. Their faces showing expressions of pain. They had thought they could rest after the first trial, but unexpectedly, they were immediately entering the second trial. Mu Yutian's expression was the same. His strength hadn't recovered yet, and he didn't know how much longer he could endure. However, the demon mask ignored their reactions. He clapped his hands, then gently raised his hand pointing to the mountain peak opposite. From now until dawn, you only need to survive in that mountain. Hearing this, the youths finally relaxed slightly. Although it was already late night, there were still about 3 hours until dawn. If that was all, they only needed to find a suitable place to hide, allowing them to both rest well and easily pass the trial. However, how could things be so simple? The demon mask spoke coldly again. Of course, the second trial also has conditions. On the opposite mountain are 40 flags. By dawn, you need to be standing near a flag, but around each flag, only 8 people can stand. If there are more than 8 people or fewer than 8 people, the trial will be considered failed, and those who fail will be executed. With these words, the scene was once again in uproar. Mu Yutian also showed a shocked expression. At least 500 people had survived the first trial, but there were only 40 flags on the opposite mountain, meaning only 320 people could survive. This also meant a new round of bloody trials was about to begin. At this moment, the entire place fell into silence, as if everyone was contemplating the difference in this trial. But soon they understood the key: team cooperation. Because once someone found a flag to guard it, 8 people would need to cooperate for the remaining time. Of course, there would be various variables, such as a method of cooperation determining whether the team could effectively persist. At this moment, everyone naturally turned their gaze toward each other. Instead of blindly searching for flags, they began communicating to form teams. Among them, the bald youth who was among the first to pass the previous trial quickly attracted attention. Joining his team or recruiting him would surely give an advantage in this trial. However, faced with their invitations, the bald youth directly refused. Currently, he had advantages in both strength and ability, so he needed to use this well, cooperating with those of similar strength. Only this way could he conserve energy before the third trial began. So he found the bull-like youth and directly invited him. Since our strengths are comparable, why not team up? This way we'll have a better chance of passing the second trial. Hearing the bald youth's words, the muscular youth pondered briefly. This was indeed a good strategy, but he immediately declined the invitation. I'll form a team after finding a flag. With that, he turned and left without looking back. His reason was to hide his true strength. Eventually they would compete against each other, so he didn't want to reveal his capabilities so soon. The bald youth was furious, leaving with a statement, "You'll regret this." Then he turned to invite the young woman from Hat Flower House, but before he could speak, he was mercilessly rejected. The bald youth could only close his mouth impatiently. It seemed cooperation with these people was impossible from the start. However, just as he was fuming, Mu Jingyun approached him proactively, asking, "Would you like to team up with me?" The bald youth was surprised, not expecting this person to approach him. Did the other have the same thoughts as himself? Although teaming up with him didn't seem too bad. Just seeing Mu Jingyun's seemingly enjoying expression caused a spine-chilling feeling. Out of instinct, he still chose to decline. Seeing the bald youth's retreating figure, Chinger couldn't help but laugh. Rejected, huh? It seems your throat-ripping scene made quite an impact on them. Mu Jingyun also sighed, then revealed a creepy smile. I was actually planning to kill him first, but according to Chinger, that was indeed the case. Now finding teammates would be extremely difficult for him. Perhaps he should follow Chinger's advice and find another way to pass the trial. Just as he was considering what to do next, a short-haired youth cautiously approached him, then asked, "Do you need teammates?" At this moment, hearing that someone was actually inviting him to join a team, Mu Jingyun was somewhat surprised. "We already have 7 people. Would you like to team up with us?" Mu Jingyun turned to look in the direction the short-haired youth pointed. There were 6 youths, with a beautiful girl sitting in the middle, surrounded by 5 youths like guards. It was obvious this team centered around this girl. Just then, the girl waved at Mu Jingyun. Mu Jingyun smiled slightly and immediately agreed. Meanwhile, seeing that Mu Jingyun had already formed a team, Mu Yutian sighed. Although he and Mu Jingyun were brothers, he had considered teaming up with him, but ultimately didn't. His life or death has nothing to do with me. Anyway, I've already found a team. What's most important now is ensuring my own survival. Thus, Mu Yutian convinced himself. At this moment, the drums for the second trial officially sounded. The youths uniformly ran toward the mountain peak opposite, just like before. The earlier they acted, the more advantageous positions they could secure. Yet the warriors watching this had a sardonic grin on their faces, and soon they would learn that this level was far tougher than they had imagined. Among the remaining 500 youths, their actions fell into roughly 3 categories. The first type consisted of those who rushed continuously toward the mountain, believing the number of flags was limited, so finding one quickly was most important. Nearly half of the participants shared this mindset. This included Da Zhuang and the girl from the Hat Flower House. The second type involved those searching for teammates, believing that forming groups before claiming flags would better help them defend their positions. During this team-forming period, everyone tacitly chose to avoid confrontation. They understood that venturing deep into the forest would consume even more energy. The scene shifts to Mu Jingyun's small team, which had already set out toward the forest. However, he remained quietly at the back of the group. At this moment, a youth whispered to a girl, "Is it really safe to have this guy in our team?" Others shared the same concern, as everyone else seemed to avoid him like the plague. To this, the girl merely gave a light chuckle. "Are you all afraid? Don't worry, trust me. Having this guy with us is advantageous. At least those who fear him won't dare attack us. Besides, he can tear someone's throat with his bare hands, so he must be quite strong. We should make good use of someone like him." It turned out that from the beginning they had planned to use Mu Jingyun and then kill him, confident that no matter how strong he was, one person couldn't handle 7. They had specifically arranged for one person to maintain distance, following behind the group. Once Mu Jingyun was dead, he would appear to fill the vacancy. At this moment, the girl was still mocking those foolish people who had discarded such a useful asset. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the girl surprisingly discovered that Mu Jingyun was actually quite handsome. To avoid wasting such an attractive appearance, she quietly approached him and began asking about his name and where he came from. The girl believed that all men were easily tempted by women, so she only needed to show slight interest and he would take the bait, especially a youth of his age who couldn't resist temptation. Yet facing her advances, Mu Jingyun maintained his expressionless demeanor. Seeing him remain unmoved, she whispered against his ear, "You know what? You've successfully caught my attention." Hearing this, Mu Jingyun glanced at her before smiling and saying, "Me too," as he placed his hand on her shoulder. Witnessing this, the surrounding boys instantly became envious. The girl was feeling triumphant, believing that just as she had predicted, no one could resist if she showed a little initiative. Next, she only needed to manipulate these fools' jealousy to ensure their loyalty. Just as she was admiring the perfection of her plan, a sudden crack sounded as Mu Jingyun unhesitatingly snapped her neck. The air fell into complete silence. The girl didn't even have time to scream before meeting her demise. When everyone finally registered what had happened, they all displayed expressions of astonishment. They had assumed Mu Jingyun would be tormented by the girl, so they had merely watched. None expected such an outcome. At that moment, one youth shouted, "You madman, what have you done?" Yet facing the youth's questioning, Mu Jingyun's lips curled slightly upward. Now everything around them seemed bathed in crimson. Mu Jingyun let out a laugh. "Now it's time for my meal. The long-awaited slaughter officially begins." One youth was the first to react, shouting at Mu Jingyun, "You lunatic, I'll kill you." However, a nearby youth quickly restrained him. "If we lose our composure now, we'll fall right into his trap. Suhua is already dead, but we still have 6 people. The situation remains in our favor." Hearing this, the youths calmed down. "You're right. If we charge at him one by one in agitation, we might be picked off individually." With that said, they exchanged glances before surrounding Mu Jingyun in formation. Observing this, Mu Jingyun merely tilted his head slightly and sneered, "I didn't expect you to be much calmer than I imagined. I thought you would be helpless, like bees who lost their queen." Hearing Mu Jingyun's words, the youth's expressions darkened further, as he had essentially described them as fools obsessed with female charm. The youth who had been shouting earlier was instantly enraged. "Let's see if you can still speak so arrogantly before your death." But as soon as the words left his mouth, Mu Jingyun's lips formed a cold smile. The next second, his palm appeared before the youth's eyes. With no time to react, a loud slap resonated. Mu Jingyun had grabbed the youth's head with one hand and instantly smashed it against a tree behind him. With an explosive sound, blood splattered everywhere, and the youth perished on the spot. This action immediately disrupted the youth's encirclement as they began to panic. They all rushed toward Mu Jingyun. Yet facing their assault, Mu Jingyun remained completely at ease. He grabbed one youth's ankle with a single hand. With a violent pull, that youth instantly lost balance, his entire body flung into the air. Seeing Mu Jingyun effortlessly lift the youth, everyone once again showed expressions of shock. Although they knew Mu Jingyun was strong, this scene completely exceeded their expectations. Now Mu Jingyun used that youth's body as a weapon, swiftly smashing it toward another youth. In the panic, that youth had no time to dodge. 2 heads collided with a double thud. One died instantly while the other briefly lost consciousness. Yet during the moment Mu Jingyun adjusted his stance, the short-haired youth seized the opportunity to deliver a fierce punch. Though the punch was easily blocked, the youth in Mu Jingyun's grasp was freed. The short-haired youth shouted again, "Attack together!" 3 youths once more charged fiercely toward Mu Jingyun. Facing the 3-person assault, Mu Jingyun began raising his arms to block, and the situation seemed to be turning against him. Just when they thought they could take down Mu Jingyun, his gaze intensified. "You're simply too weak." With that, he launched a punch with such speed that evasion was impossible. An explosive sound echoed. Mu Jingyun had taken down another person with just one punch. But his attack didn't end there. A scream of agony rang out as Mu Jingyun kicked the short-haired youth's leg. The youth's lower leg bent at a bizarre 90-degree angle. Seeing this, the remaining youth froze. His entire body began to tremble involuntarily, knowing he couldn't defeat his opponent. This guy was at a second-rate level based on his strength alone, which made him a monster to him. At this moment, fear completely overtook his body. He frantically fled backward. The youth with the broken leg observed his frenzied escape. Though inwardly cursing, he understood. Fleeing was now the correct choice. But how could Mu Jingyun easily let him escape? He simply raised one hand. A strange dark energy spread from his palm. The next second, the fleeing youth seemed to be caught by something pulling his foot. He fell to the ground with a thud. He frantically screamed, "Help me, I don't want to die." He tried desperately to grab the ground, but he only left long scratch marks as his body was gradually pulled back toward Mu Jingyun. This bizarre scene left the broken-legged youth incredulous. This was telekinesis, a skill typically mastered only by those with profound internal energy. Yet the youth before him had performed it despite having his internal energy sealed. At this moment, fear and shock could no longer describe the broken-legged youth's emotions. With a crack, the fleeing youth's life ended. After witnessing everything that had transpired, the broken-legged youth's face turned deathly pale. He regretted listening to Suhua and bringing this guy into their team. The monster before him was not something they could provoke. He knew that even without his internal power being sealed, he was no match for his opponent at all. Instinctive fear caused his body to shake violently. Facing the approaching demon, he could only sit helplessly on the ground. At this moment, his mind had only one thought, to beg for mercy. So he began shouting, "I'll do anything you want, just spare my life." However, Mu Jingyun showed no intention of stopping. His face remained expressionless, as if passing judgment on the person before him. But just then, Mu Jingyun suddenly turned to look at the forest behind him, then chuckled, "So there's still a little mouse." Hearing this, the broken-legged youth immediately remembered the person Su Hua had arranged. He had followed behind the team, waiting to replace Mu Jingyun after his death. Had he been discovered too? But Mu Jingyun showed no intention of pursuing. He reached into his robe. Unhurriedly, he pulled out a wooden puppet. The broken-legged youth looked perplexed but thought, "That's good. Run quickly and tell everyone what happened here. Let everyone know that with this guy's presence, this trial becomes a one-sided massacre." At that moment, Mu Jingyun began chanting a spell. As the word release escaped his lips, dark energy spread outward from his body. The broken-legged youth was completely terrified by the scene before him. Although he didn't know what Mu Jingyun had just done, he could clearly sense that something terrifying had been released. Now, everything around them was cast in a crimson glow. Mu Jingyun transformed into a true demon, stepping toward the broken-legged youth one step at a time. "By the way, what were you saying to me earlier?" The broken-legged youth was about to continue begging, but with a crack his neck was similarly twisted off. The scene shifts to the youth who had been following behind, frantically escaping toward the forest's edge. Having witnessed his teammates being mercilessly killed, his body had long lost all sensation from fear. Especially after seeing Mu Jingyun's telekinesis technique, he was plunged into endless terror. His mind had only one thought. He must tell everyone what he had seen, whether participants in the trial or the supervising warriors. They needed to know that person was a demon, a true demon, and they must unite to destroy him. However, as he ran frantically, a sudden ominous feeling washed over him, but when he looked back he saw nothing suspicious. Until the next second, a rustling sound came from the forest. Then he saw countless arms frantically reaching for him. Simultaneously, a monk wearing a skull rosary appeared in his sight. The youth couldn't believe what he was seeing. His heart nearly stopped. His terrified body no longer had the strength to continue fleeing, as numerous arms grabbed at his body. A desperate wail emerged from the youth's mouth. The scene changes to Mu Jingyun greedily absorbing the death energy emanating from those youths. Beside him, Chinger looked helpless. "So that's why you did this. It seems you planned this from the beginning, didn't you?" Mu Jingyun smiled slightly. "How could I miss such a good opportunity?" However, just as he finished speaking, a figure emerged from the forest. It was the youth who had fled earlier, except now his eyes revealed a familiar feeling. Seeing the newcomer, Chinger exhaled a puff of blue smoke. "What's this about? Why not just kill him? Why possess and bring him back?" The demon monk didn't respond, but Mu Jingyun guessed his intention. "Did you do this to make it easier for me to absorb the death energy?" As soon as he finished speaking, the youth's body collapsed to the ground, while the demon monk's blurred figure appeared. Mu Jingyun praised him. "Well done, you truly understand my thoughts." Hearing his master praise him as a perceptive Shikigami, the demon monk immediately displayed a smug expression. This infuriated Chinger, who proceeded to beat the demon monk fiercely. "What are you smiling about?" Meanwhile, after absorbing the death energy from the youth on the ground, Mu Jingyun walked toward the last corpse, the girl whose neck was broken first. Since she died earliest, she had lost the most death energy, but compared to what he absorbed at Ranjian Villa and during the first trial, it was still considerably more. After completing all this, Mu Jingyun's face showed a satisfied expression. Just as he prepared to rest briefly, another small team suddenly appeared before him. Mu Jingyun looked at them and merely smiled slightly. Soon after, he sat atop a pile of corpses and exhaled deeply. "It seems I'll thoroughly enjoy this feast before sunrise." After all, according to the rules, only 7 people need to remain. At that moment, outside a dark cave at the foot of the mountain, 2 torch-bearing warriors followed behind a figure wearing a demon mask. Upon entering the cave entrance, the 2 warriors instantly became tense. They sensed a strange aura, sinister and terrifying, causing goosebumps to spread across their skin. But the demon mask wearer seemed accustomed to it, continuing to stride into the cave. Just then, a voice emerged from within the cave. An elderly man suddenly appeared, holding a walking stick, his eyes milky white. "You've finally come, Master of Corpse Blood Valley," he said, gesturing for the demon mask wearer to enter alone. The demon mask wearer extended a hand toward the 2 warriors, then walked toward the cave's depths. Moments later, the 2 arrived at the deepest part of the cave. A hairy monster was confined in an iron cage. Strange sounds emerged from its mouth, reminiscent of a pig's squeal. The demon mask wearer asked softly, "I heard this time is more dangerous than last. Is everything prepared?" With that, he approached the cage. However, the old man quickly stopped him, indicating he shouldn't get too close. Although the creature had been contained, it remained a ferocious beast. Getting too close would still be dangerous. Upon hearing the term ferocious beast, the demon mask wearer's expression instantly became serious. Ferocious beasts were more terrifying than wild animals, generally referring to violent and vicious monsters. The beast before them was a Jiiju from the North Sea, wolf-like in form but pig-like in sound. Its name alone evoked danger. Realizing this, the demon mask wearer departed without further delay, saying, "Very well. Once you see the signal, release it immediately." The scene changes. Now Mu Jingyun placed his hand on a dead youth's body, with black energy emanating from them. Soon after, Mu Jingyun revealed a smile. Although his meridians were sealed, his internal energy had nearly reached saturation. He had absorbed death energy from 16 people, but 11 died from infighting, while the remaining 5 required minimal effort to kill. That was easy. They did something foolish. Chinger agreed with his assessment. If not for the infighting, he couldn't have killed these youths so easily. Then Chinger asked what he planned to do next. Mu Jingyun walked toward a nearby flag, preparing to pick it up. However, the flag's base was connected to a large iron block. Even experts in external martial arts would struggle to move it, let alone carry it, unless it was broken. Now Mu Jingyun fell into contemplation. Considering that breaking the flag might disqualify him for presenting an incomplete flag, he found himself in a dilemma. Chinger suggested destroying it. "Weren't you planning to eliminate all other teams anyway? You'll only need to keep 1 intact flag." Mu Jingyun agreed with her idea, but just as he reached for the flag again, he suddenly noticed something unusual. Several lines of text were engraved on the flagpole. 3-form sword technique, sword light pierces fog, thoughtless connection, unity of person and sword, unobstructed chi flow. Hearing Mu Jingyun's voice, Chinger immediately guessed these were sword technique mantras. However, when she urged Mu Jingyun to continue reading, Mu Jingyun replied that the mantra ended there. Chinger was puzzled. This mantra seems incomplete. Practicing with just these moves would leave vulnerabilities in the Ko Chi, Xuan Shu, Ji Yang, and Shanzhong acupoints. But why engrave incomplete mantras on the flagpole? Chinger soon understood. Judging by the arrangement of techniques, it emphasizes fundamentals rather than improving sword skills, and there's no overlap between techniques. These mantras seem specifically designed for a sword formation, but unfortunately, the weaknesses in these techniques are too obvious. Even forming a formation wouldn't be very effective. Hearing Chinger's explanation, Mu Jingyun nodded. It seems this flag, like the numbered iron balls before, might be part of a hidden task in this trial. Staring at the mantras on the flagpole, Mu Jingyun said, "This flag probably doesn't contain all the mantras. Other flags likely record the remaining techniques. It seems only by collecting the complete sword techniques would the task be fulfilled." Chinger found this reasoning quite sensible. If different flags hide different mantras, those who discover this would naturally seek other flags, inevitably leading to encounters between teams. In other words, from the beginning, they intended to guide trial participants to kill each other. The so-called guarding the flag was merely a surface task. For Mu Jingyun now, besides finding another flag, he also needs to find 7 more team members. However, now that we understand the current situation, things become much more interesting. With that, Mu Jingyun waved his hand. The flagpole snapped with a crisp sound. But just then, Mu Jingyun's brow furrowed. The flagpole inscribed with sword techniques actually emitted a trace of curse energy. Since learning reverse energy cultivation and death energy absorption, Mu Jingyun had become highly sensitive to various energy types. So when he broke the flagpole, he immediately sensed the curse energy attached to it. Chinger, being inside the puppet, couldn't detect this energy and asked, could this be a trap? But Mu Jingyun immediately denied this. If it were a trap, the curse energy would remain there. However, when the flagpole broke, that energy continuously dissipated, as if something had been released. Just then, a sound like a horn resonated throughout the mountain. It sounded like some kind of signal. Mu Jingyun looked toward the distance with a grave expression, muttering, "It seems other elements have infiltrated this trial." The scene shifts to a distant ridge, where 2 teams were fighting fiercely over a flag. The defending team of 8 was led by Lianjia, a youth from Zhusha Valley. A youth who received just 1 kick from Lianjia immediately lost his fighting ability. He fell to the ground, terrified. Initially, he thought since everyone's internal energy was sealed, he could match Lianjia's skills to some extent, even if the opponent was from Zhusha Valley. But now it seemed their strength levels weren't even comparable. Perhaps due to Lianjia's consistent practice of external attacks, his strength was extraordinary, making the youth regret choosing the wrong opponent. Unfortunately, this realization made little difference. Their entire team was being thoroughly defeated. Lianjia seemed to recognize the disparity between the teams, gesturing provocatively, "If you want to seize the flag, you'd better show some spirit." The youth attempting to capture the flag was angered but helpless. In the previous battle, they had already lost 2 people. Further losses would lead to their team's complete destruction. Recognizing this, they exchanged glances before shouting, "Retreat!" The team cohesively withdrew, but Lianjia wasn't a merciful person. He sneered, "Who said you could leave? Kill them all." Then his figure moved, darting toward the fleeing youths. Meanwhile, the snake-shaped tattoo on his body seemed to come alive, moving around his body. Just as one youth was about to be caught, a black shadow suddenly flashed through the underbrush. A scream was heard, and his figure vanished from everyone's sight. Suddenly, everyone stopped in their tracks. The air fell into silence as both pursuers and those attempting to flee looked questioningly toward where the shadow had passed. Just then, a series of chewing sounds emanated from the underbrush, terrifying to hear. Suddenly, a pig-like squeal emerged. Looking through the grass, a beast resembling neither wolf nor pig appeared before them. Its extended claws resembled wolf paws, but its body was twice the size of a normal wolf. Its eyes were blood red like a rat's, but its mouth full of tusks resembled a wild boar's. Seeing this, the youth's expressions instantly grew solemn, especially witnessing the beast gnawing on a human head. Their faces turned pale with fear. Lianjia was no exception. Facing this monster, even with his robust physique, without using internal energy, he had no chance of survival. Such a monster completely exceeded everyone's capabilities. Lianjia knew being targeted would certainly mean death, so he gestured to his teammates, indicating they should carefully retreat. Now the flag was unimportant. Survival was paramount. However, as they carefully moved backward, a crisp snap suddenly rang out. A youth had accidentally stepped on a dry branch. Everyone froze, not daring to breathe, but the sound had already alerted the ferocious beast. Lianjia had barely turned his eyes toward the rear when he saw the Jeju opening its bloody maw to bite him. He shouted, "Run!" and turned to flee. Surprisingly, before he ran very far, the Jeju suddenly stopped. It looked in the direction of the youths and howled once, then frantically turned and ran away, as if it had seen something terrifying. This scene left the youths who had been desperately fleeing moments before bewildered. What was happening? Lianjia, watching the direction the Jeju fled, kept muttering, "How the hell should I know?" He couldn't understand why the ferocious beast had suddenly behaved this way, but suddenly, he seemed to realize something. He turned to look behind him, where a flag was planted. Could it be that the beast feared this? At this moment, as the second trial reached its critical point, 2 young men were frantically fleeing from the Jeju's pursuit. One of them couldn't dodge in time and was quickly attacked. Now, fear made the young man's heart feel like it was about to burst. He could only helplessly cry out, "Damn it!" Because his inner energy was sealed, he couldn't use lightness skills, so his speed was only slightly faster than an ordinary adult. However, the monster was not so limited, and in just an instant it caught up with the young man's pace again, just when he was about to fall into despair. Suddenly a figure appeared before him. Though he didn't know who it was, anyone who could help him survive would do. He was overjoyed, and he ran toward Mu Jingyun while calling for help. "Please help me. There's a wolf-like monster behind me." However, before he could finish speaking, Mu Jingyun casually grabbed his neck. With a cracking sound, the young man's neck was twisted by Mu Jingyun. At that moment, the bushes suddenly began to shake, and a pig-like squeal came through. A blood-stained claw appeared in Mu Jingyun's field of vision. Following it was a creature resembling both wolf and boar, emerging from the bushes. Its eyes glowed red, with fangs covered in blood. Mu Jingyun raised an eyebrow. Now only a few steps separated him from the monster. But this beast seemed cautious and didn't pounce immediately, instead slowly reducing the distance step by step. Mu Jingyun felt puzzled. What is this thing? It sounds rather weak. Chinger was speechless. Although this was her first time seeing such a creature, she quickly guessed its identity. Judging by its appearance and sound, this should be a Jeju, a type of demon. It's said to live near the northern sea and likes to eat human heads. Hearing this, Mu Jingyun was surprised. Just then the Jeju launched its attack. The Jeju opened its bloody maw and lunged at Mu Jingyun. Mu Jingyun leapt up and easily avoided the attack. Meanwhile, his hands quickly formed seals, invoking the 9 words true mantra. 4 golden lights descended from the sky, forming a terrifying barrier around the Geju. This was the 4 directions spirit-locking formation he had just learned. The Geju was forced to stop its movement. It tried to break through, but was repelled each time. Then Mu Jingyun made a single-handed gesture toward the Geju. Instantly, the 4 light pillars began to compress rapidly. As the space continued to shrink, the Geju began to panic and scurry about. Seeing this, Mu Jingyun gripped his palm even tighter. In just moments, the Geju was compressed until it could barely move. But suddenly, the Geju struck the barrier with one powerful claw, and the compressed light screen actually developed cracks. Then, with a roar, the 4 directions spirit-locking formation shattered instantly, and the Geju broke free. The powerful energy blast made Mu Jingyun stumble backward several steps. Mu Jingyun sensed trouble. He quickly stabilized his stance and remained vigilant. However, the Geju wasn't roaring as before, but staring directly at Mu Jingyun. As their eyes met, both sides were momentarily locked in a standoff. But suddenly, the Geju stopped advancing, no longer approaching Mu Jingyun. Instead, it turned and fled into the bushes. Witnessing this, Mu Jingyun felt bewildered about why it had left so abruptly. Chinger explained to him that perhaps it sensed a threat, and therefore chose to retreat. But Mu Jingyun didn't agree with this assessment. Judging from its power to break the 4 directions spirit-locking formation, it couldn't be an ordinary demon. Its level should be quite high. Zhao Yigong had once told Mu Jingyun that the 4 directions spirit-locking formation was created to eliminate vengeful spirits, and could only handle the lowest level demons. Hearing Mu Jingyun's words, Chinger replied, "It said that adult Geju can reach the level of fierce beasts, and the size of that Geju suggests it hasn't fully matured yet. Nevertheless, it's still much stronger than ordinary demons. Its power probably lies between monster and fierce beast levels. So for demons like the Geju, the 4 directions spirit-locking formation can at most only delay them temporarily." Hearing this, Mu Jingyun felt a headache coming on. He had originally wanted to capture this demon, but now it seemed rather difficult. Chinger asked curiously, "Are you worried about not being able to defeat that demon? If so, I can help you." But obviously, Mu Jingyun wasn't worried about that. He turned to look at the corpses behind him. Sighing softly, "Before that demon eats all my dinner, it seems we need to speed up." Meanwhile, elsewhere, the team led by Lian Jia was moving forward cautiously. 2 team members carrying iron blocks with flagpoles were constantly complaining. "If, as you say, we're just looking for the mantra on the flagpole, why don't we just break the pole and take it with us?" Hearing the young man's dissatisfaction, Lian Jia scolded harshly, "Stop the nonsense, just do as I say. If my guess is correct, you'll thank me sooner or later." Hearing this, the young men still couldn't understand. Would the fierce beast really run away because it feared the flag? Rather than inefficiently carrying the flag, wouldn't it be better to break the pole and move quickly to seize or find other flags? However, just as these words fell, a rustling sound suddenly came from ahead. Then they saw the Geju emerge from the bushes. This sight immediately terrified the young men, and just as they were about to put down the flag and flee, Lian Jia suddenly stopped them. "Everyone stay put, don't move." Faced with the Geju's terrifying growl, the young men were so scared they could barely breathe. But then the Geju looked at the flag in their hands. Then, frightened, it turned and hid back into the bushes. The Geju had actually fled after seeing the flag. Though they didn't know why, the young men all began celebrating their narrow escape. Lian Jia showed a smug expression. "See? My judgment was correct." After confirming this, Lian Jia suddenly had an idea. Now probably few people knew about the flag's protective effect. They should make good use of this advantage. With this thought, he led his team continuing toward the mountain peak. What he didn't know was, at this moment other teams had also noticed the secret of the sword techniques on the flags. The scene shifts to the canyon of the first trial. Now it was filled with carriages. Warriors were loading the dead youths one by one onto the carriages. After confirming all the bodies were loaded, the carriages began to move slowly one after another. After half an hour, all carriages stopped at a cliff. At this point, an elderly man in Taoist robes approached the carriages, took out a talisman with the character lock from his pocket, and skillfully attached it to the bodies. Then he instructed the warriors, "Throw these bodies with talismans down the cliff, and remember, don't look down when throwing them." The warriors acknowledged indifferently, and began throwing the bodies one by one over the cliff. Seeing this, a new warrior was filled with confusion and asked an older soldier, "Why not just burn these bodies? Having to transport them here to throw them down adds so much extra work." Hearing the new warrior's questions, the veteran repeatedly reproached him for meddling. "Just do as you're told." The new warrior hung his head and quickly apologized. Seeing him like this, the veteran clicked his tongue. "Actually, I'm not too clear on the exact reason either, but every trial has always handled it this way. They say that below the cliff is where all water flows converge." The new warrior became even more confused. What's the connection between these two? The veteran didn't know either, but apparently it had something to do with becoming nutrients of some sort. After finishing, the veteran again cautioned the new warrior not to be too curious. For low-level people like us, knowing too much can only bring trouble. The new warrior verbally acknowledged understanding, but his heart remained full of questions. He completely failed to grasp what water flow and nutrients meant. If every trial resulted in bodies being thrown off the cliff, and just this one time they had thrown over 100, then how many bodies must now lie at the bottom of the cliff? Just then, inadvertently, he glanced down the cliff and immediately felt his scalp tingle as a sensation swept through his entire body. It felt as if he were being sucked into endless darkness, as if something unsettling was invading his body. Fortunately, someone grabbed his shoulder at that moment. It was the elderly Taoist who had been applying talismans. After regaining his senses, the warrior realized he had somehow walked to the cliff's edge. The elder looked at the panicked warrior and said softly, "Didn't I just say not to look down the cliff?" But the warrior was still recovering from the shock, so the elder warned him again with deeper meaning. "Remember, never look down, or you might be bewitched." Since the Geju preferred to eat human heads, whenever it caught prey, it would only eat the head. Thus, headless corpses could be seen throughout the mountain forest. At this moment, Mu Yutian's team was searching for the second flag in the forest, but a horrifying scene made everyone freeze in place. They saw a fierce beast gnawing on a young man's skull. This was their first encounter with the Geju, so no one dared to make any sudden moves. Just then, the Geju suddenly turned its head toward them, just when everyone thought the fierce beast would attack them. The Geju turned and escaped into the bushes. After recovering from the shock, Mu Yutian slumped to the ground. Although he didn't understand why the fierce beast suddenly left, he was already suffocating under the pressure of this trial. Their team had already lost 2 members who sacrificed themselves to defend the flag, and now they had to face such monsters. This made him anxious and began to worry whether he could truly survive in such a place. But soon he noticed something strange. During their search for another flag, He had seen no fewer than 20 corpses. Logically, whether these people died from monsters or killed each other, there should be corresponding wounds on their bodies. But some of the corpses only had broken necks, looking as if they had been killed without any resistance. This gave Mu Yutian a vague feeling that there seemed to be something unknown hunting these young men. And indeed, his suspicion was correct. At this moment, not far from them on the mountainside, Mu Jingyun was absorbing death energy from a headless corpse. He frowned and muttered, "This is far from enough." Chinger comforted him that this was normal after all, the Ge-Ju was also active. Most of the death energy in bodies attacked by the Ge-Ju would quickly dissipate, making it very difficult to extract more death energy from these corpses. Mu Jingyun sighed softly. He had originally thought that letting the Ge-Ju create chaos would benefit him, but now it had become his obstacle, making him feel like he was eating someone else's leftovers. Thinking about this made him furious. If that creature continued eating like this, his share would significantly decrease. So Mu Jingyun immediately decided to change his strategy. "It seems I need to kill that fierce beast first." He then asked Chinger, "Can you help me?" Chinger scoffed. "It seems that even you would find it difficult to deal with that creature without using internal energy. Very well, leave it to me, but you must first release me from this cramped space." Speaking thus, Mu Jingyun took out the humanoid wooden doll from his pocket. He made a one-handed seal and uttered the word, "Release." A burst of bloody aura exploded forth. His feet were once again enveloped by a sea of blood. Then Chinger's graceful figure slowly emerged from the wooden doll. She stretched lazily and said with pleasure, "This is indeed much better than being confined." Seeing her enjoying herself, Mu Jingyun quickly interrupted, "Can you locate that creature? Or if you can eliminate it from a distance, that works too." Chinger wasn't offended. "No need to rush me, I'll be back soon, just wait and see." With that, she floated lightly toward the sky. Unlike the demonic monk, Chinger was of a higher level, and even without possessing a physical body, she could move within a large range. She stopped in midair, then with those bloody eyes slowly scanned the entire mountain range. But after looking around, she raised an eyebrow. She'd expected to find the fierce beast quickly, but surprisingly, she never discovered its whereabouts. Logically, that fierce beast should emit a strong demonic aura, but strangely, she didn't see any demonic aura in the mountain forest. Where had this creature gone? Just when she thought the Ge-Ju wasn't in this area, suddenly a sight before her made her involuntarily exclaim in surprise. From the cliff not far away came ear-splitting screams. Earlier, because she was inside the doll, she couldn't sense external auras, but now this scene also made her somewhat surprised. Although she didn't know who had done this, that person must certainly be a madman. With this thought, Chinger didn't linger any longer, and immediately returned to Mu Jingyun's side. Seeing her return so quickly, Mu Jingyun couldn't help but ask, "Have you found it already?" However, Chinger was extremely excited. "No, but I discovered something more interesting than the Ge-Ju. There's a long-lost secret art from the southern frontier. It only requires placing dozens or even hundreds of poisonous creatures in a container, then letting them fight to the death until only one remains. The final survivor will possess the most deadly toxicity. This process is called cultivating goo, and the surviving poison is the so-called goo poison." Now seeing Chinger's excited expression, Mu Jingyun also felt quite surprised. Although he didn't know what she had discovered, he still followed behind her. Thus, under Chinger's guidance, they came to a suspension bridge. Below the bridge was a bottomless river, faintly emitting threads of cold energy. After crossing the bridge, Mu Jingyun found deep wheel tracks on the road. It seemed someone had dragged something heavy up the mountain. Just as he was puzzled, the aura diffusing from ahead instantly made him stop in his tracks. Since absorbing death energy, he had become extremely sensitive to various auras, but before this, he had never detected this kind of aura. He looked around in confusion and found many talismans attached between the cliff and trees. These talismans all had the character Lock written on them, seemingly controlling and preventing these auras from leaking out. But despite so many talismans, when he approached this place, he could still clearly sense the danger of this aura. What exactly is down there? Hearing Mu Jingyun's confusion, Chinger asked in return, "Have you heard of goo poison?" Mu Jingyun was shocked. Of course he knew about goo poison. He had studied herbs and poisons with his grandfather, so he was thoroughly familiar with these matters. Chinger pouted. "Down there is goo cultivation." After hearing Chinger's words, Mu Jingyun stared at the cliff that resembled a bottomless abyss. Wails could be heard coming from below, the painful sounds of souls. They stretched out their arms as if longing for freedom, but their hands and feet were bound by chains. Mu Jingyun was somewhat confused about this. "That's a spell binding souls. Didn't you use it on that Lan kid before?" Mu Jingyun couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. So many souls trapped in this narrow cliff bottom, like creating a huge container. Letting them devour each other and constantly grow stronger, this was the cultivating goo Chinger had mentioned. Truly spectacular. Mu Jingyun glanced at Chinger. Perhaps from here could emerge vengeful souls at Chinger's level. Thinking of this, Mu Jingyun couldn't help but get excited. Then Chinger reminded him, "This is an opportunity. Although I don't know how terrifying the goo king formed in here will ultimately be. But if you can absorb some of this energy before it's fully formed, even a little bit, the effect would be much stronger than absorbing death energy from corpses." It was precisely why Chinger had brought Mu Jingyun here. However, upon hearing this, Mu Jingyun decisively crossed the railing ahead. Rather than eating leftovers up here, wouldn't it be better to go down and enjoy the feast? This action startled Chinger, who cursed Mu Jingyun for courting death. The souls down there are devouring each other. If you jump down as a living person, you'll be torn to pieces alive. Mu Jingyun remained unconcerned. "Didn't you say that with my current strength I can't do anything in the Heavenly Alliance? So as long as I can successfully take revenge, even a slight chance is worth risking my life." Hearing this, Chinger fell silent, but considering she was one with Mu Jingyun, she still wanted to persuade him to think carefully. But Mu Jingyun remained calm. Besides, how could I possibly give up such a tempting opportunity? With that, he jumped down without hesitation. Chinger wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Mu Jingyun slid rapidly down the cliff face. The sounds of vengeful souls grew increasingly terrifying around him. They quickly approached, all coveting Mu Jingyun's fresh body. Yet Mu Jingyun showed no sign of panic. Before participating in the Blood Corpse Valley trial, Zhao Yigong had given him a ring that allowed him to release spells without needing internal energy. Now was the time to use it. Mu Jingyun put his palms together and quickly formed a seal. "Those who face battle shall advance to the front lines in formation." As the 9 words true mantra was uttered, a barrier rapidly extended outward from his body.